Welcome back to the channel. This is 20 Storm and you are watching What If Naruto has all Arrancar sealed inside of him. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Now wasting no more time, let's start the story.
Hueco Mundo. Las Noches Ruins. The atmosphere in Hueco Mundo was even tenser than usual. The suffocating feeling of dread that every hollow felt daily was snuffed out by something new. Even the more bestial hollows experienced this sensation, which the hollows with sufficient cognitive ability could not adequately express in words. In any case, they all had the same feeling. Something significant was about to occur today. An event so significant that it will alter the very fabric of the world, for better or worse, is impossible to predict. They were unaware of their own correctness. For at this very moment former captain of the 5th Division turned rogue Shinigami by the name of Sosuke Aizen was in the middle of enacting his revenge against all those who stood between him and his impending godhood previously. Aizen stood proudly in the ruins of his old throne room as he observed the labors of his hard work over the past few months. He had barely managed to escape from being imprisoned by the fool Urahara. Luckily he used what remained of the Hogyoku to escape the sealing process. He waited for the heat to subside before beginning his grand scheme, which he regrettably concealed from Hueco Mundo. He was aware that those fools would eventually find out he was gone, but it would be too late by then. It took time and effort to gather the supplies he needed for his retaliation, but with perseverance and careful preparation, he managed to get everything he needed. Yes, everything is going smoothly, Aizen thought before he recited the Kido spell that would ensure his victory. You might wonder what Aizen's plan is, my dear viewer. It's actually pretty easy. He intends to resurrect his fallen Espada with greater power than before using the Kido spell he just performed. After all, if he knew that warriors would not be able to defeat Captain level Shinigami, what would be the purpose of bringing them back to fight his adversaries? The wall to the right of Aizen exploded inwards, revealing the chamber filled with debris as the bodies of Ryalgo Yami, Stark Coyote and his other half Gingerback Lilynet, Luisenbarn Baragan, Harabel Tia, Cypher Ulquiorra, Jaruga Neutra, Jaegerjaquez Grimjow, Laru Zamari, Aporo Grants Zale, and Urururi Araniero exploded at an incredible rate. To his credit, Aizen just stared at the now widening hole in the wall without even blinking. As the smoke cleared, Aizen now had a clear view of the soon-to-be-dead intruder that dared disturb him. The intruder in question turned out to be a tall full-figured woman that was roughly 5 feet 9 in height. She had long greenish-blue hair that flowed down like a waterfall down to her back. With a soft and delicate facer, at the moment, cold hazel eyes looked out of place as she glared at Aizen. A long crimson band stretched across her face, and a large scar jutting down from her forehead to her nose seemed to be the only flaw. She had, well, let's just say she was gifted in the breast department and that only accented her hourglass figure. Her only clothing at the moment seemed to be a green shirt that was torn below her breasts, which barely seemed to hold them in, and a short green skirt. If this image alone wasn't odd enough, on the top of her head was a large horned ram-like skull that was missing some of its teeth. Standing in all of her glory Neliel II Odelschwank, former 3rd Espada, with her sword Gamusa clutched tightly in her hand. She shifted into a ready stance and locked eyes with Aizen. As she carefully moved Gamusa in front of her, prepared to attack, Neliel said, "I won't let you continue with this, Aizen. You've caused enough pain and suffering." "Neliel, I appreciate your visit, but I'm afraid it's too late to stop me. Not that you had a chance in the first place. My Espada have almost fully regenerated, now I offer you a chance to join to me. Stand by my side once more or try and stop me and die like those fools in Soul Society," Aizen said, glancing at her fearlessly before moving them to the area where his forces were being reassembled. Neliel carefully followed his gaze, not fully taking her eyes off of Aizen, and to her horror the sight she saw cemented the fact he wasn't bluffing. What was the sight that put fear into our dear Neliel? That's easy, the fully generated forms of Tia Harabel, Grimjow Jaegerjaquez, Ulquiorra Cypher, and Coyote Stark. All of whom I might add were looking confused as hell, as they had to figure out what the fuck was going on. Neliel mentally cursed upon seeing their regenerated forms, mentally calculating her now diminished chance of survival, and let alone victory. As the saying goes, too little, too late, and before she was sucked into the portal, one final thought occurred to Neliel before she could even consider attempting to take down her former allies. Suddenly, a massive rip in time and space formed behind the now regenerated Espada and began to draw them in. The Espada yelled out in surprise, but before they could even yell out, they were quickly sucked in. Goodbye, Bawabawa, Pesci, and Dondo Chaka. Aizen's plan was ruined when the portal closed behind her and a giant energy wave exploded from the vortex's former epicenter, thankfully destroying the remains of the Abda who had not fully recovered in time. Aizen stood there for a few moments, staring at the even more destroyed ruins of Las Noches, and then everything clicked in his head, and he unexpectedly and out of character yelled a mighty, "Fuck," skyward. Konohagakure no Sato is the opposite side of the vortex. Unknown to the people down below, a giant portal opened in the skies above and Neliel and the resurrected Espada came rocketing out of it towards the unforgiving ground below. While they careened towards the ground, they were finally able to catch a glimpse of their surroundings. To their utter confusion and disbelief, they saw a giant reddish-brown toad fight a giant fox with 9 tails. That's right, 9 freaking tails. If this image wasn't odd enough for them, a lone figure stood atop of the giant toad wearing a blue vest and a large tanto by its side, with what appeared to be a bundle in his arms. Before they could question this odd sight, the figure did some weird hand signs and yelled out, "Shiki Fujin," and before you could blink, a giant ghostly figure appeared behind the fox. From what they could of the colossal phantasm, it had long spiky white hair and a long grayish yakuta which covered most of its body. Without warning, the massive creature lashed out with one arm and seemingly phased through the fox's chest as well as the unknown figure's chest. A blinding light temporarily robbed them of their vision, distracting them from the fact that they were sucked into a small blonde baby. The last thing they heard before they were completely sealed were a man's sad and regretful voice say, "Goodbye, Naruto." And with that, all they would know for the next 13 years would be darkness and silence. Not knowing that when they woke they held a boy who would change everything forever. 13 years later, deep in the woods surrounding Konohagakure no Sato, village hidden in the leaves, or simply called Konoha, one could find an interesting sight. Sitting near a ramshackle hut sat a young boy about 13 with bright blonde hair and deep cerulean eyes, and a set of 3 whisker marks adorning each cheek. He wore an incredibly hideous orange and blue jumpsuit complete with blue sandal, boots and a pair of green goggles on his forehead. Said boy was sitting in front of a gigantic scroll which currently was rolled out and being read. This was Uzumaki Naruto, aka Dobi, aka the village pariah, and unknown to him, Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi no Kitsune. For as long as he could remember, he was considered to be the most hated individual in the entire village. He had been overcharged in stores or just violently thrown out. They glared at him, told their children to avoid him, and the most common torture them put him through were the beatings. But all of that paled in comparison, at least to him. No, the worst thing they did to him was ignored his very existence. Putting that aside for the moment, so far he had already learnt the Kage Bushin no Jutsu and now was just skimming the scroll for something cool, when he saw a technique that caught his eye. The Seal Breaker Jutsu. Normally he would just pass this off as lame and move on, but something inside his head was pleading, no demanding, that he learn it. Not one to ignore his instincts that had saved his ass more times than he could count, he sat down and started practicing the hand seals over and over again. Naruto was about to practice the jutsu with chakra this time when a shadowy figure emerged from the bushes and landed directly in front of him. The figure was a man of about 5 feet 10 inches who was dressed in the typical Konoha shinobi uniform, which included a dark green flak jacket, matching pants, a dark blue long-sleeved shirt that was rolled up about a quarter of the way, and blue shinobi sandals. He had brown eyes, tan skin, and dark brown hair pulled back with a Hitai.8 in a ponytail. The distinguishing feature about him was a long scar across the bridge of his nose. This man was none other than Amino Iruka, Naruto's academy sensei and one of the few individuals who genuinely care about our blonde lead. "Naruto, what the hell do you think you're doing? Stealing the forbidden scroll of sealing? Do you have any idea of just how much trouble you're in? You'll be lucky if they only throw you in jail for the rest of your life. What possessed you to do something this stupid?" Iruka yelled at his favorite student, trying to comprehend what would cause him to steal Konoha's most valued possession. "What do you mean, Iruka? Sensei, I'm learning a jutsu from the scroll here to pass the make-up exam and finally become a genin," Naruto replied, tilting his head in bewilderment. "Naruto, there is no, or has ever been, a genin make-up exam. Who told you about this supposed exam?" Iruka said, staring at him for a long time as if he had grown a second head. He inquired of our favorite blonde. Naruto gaped at him in shock for a moment before he scrunched his face and thought, what the fucking is going on here? "Mizuki. Sensei wouldn't lie to me, would he? Is this part of the exam? Or, is there really no exam at all?" he pondered mentally. Shaking his head to clear in jumbled and disinheriting thoughts, he raised his head, answered his equally confused sensei. "Mizuki. Sensei was the one who told me about the make-up exam. After I failed, he told me there was another way to become a genin and only special cases are offered the chance. He told me all I had to do was break in Gigi's tower without being detected and steal this scroll, then meet here so he could test me, so I could finally start on my path to becoming Hokage. Iruka compiled his thoughts and unknown to him said them aloud for all to hear. Why would Mizuki-san lie to Naruto about stealing the scroll? If not, Naruto, go now. As many kunai and shuriken pierced Iruka's body and clothing, pinning him to the shack behind him, Iruka swiftly pushed Naruto to the ground. Well, looks like I'm late. You already found my secret hideaway, Iruka, said a patronizing voice that both Iruka and Naruto were all too familiar with. Emerging from the shadows was none other than Mizuki, Iruka's childhood friend and Naruto's other sensei. He was dressed in the typical Konoha shinobi garb, though if you looked closely, you could see that he had two enormous shurikens attached to the back of this vest. He was wearing a blue bandana that doubled as his headband, covering part of his whitish, blue hair, and his green eyes looked down at both Naruto and Iruka, one with bewilderment and the other with suspicion and rage. He turned to Naruto and said, Naruto, quickly give me the scroll before Iruka gets it. He is a traitor who is attempting to flee the village and take the forbidden scroll of sealing for himself. Give it to me quickly, and I'll see to it that Hokage Sama receives it safely. Naruto, don't listen to him. He's a traitor. Grab the scroll and run as quickly as you can. I'll stay here and hold him off. That scroll is filled with forbidden jutsu that could topple entire villages. Do not let him take that scroll, now run. Iruka yelled as he tried to pry the sharp implements of death currently lodged in his clothes and flesh out. Iruka tried to turn to fight his childhood friend turned traitor, but was hampered by the few remaining shuriken. Naruto whipped his head back and forth between Mizuki to Iruka, trying to decide who to believe only to get a headache for his troubles. Don't listen to Iruka. It's his fault that you didn't pass earlier, and now that you're so close, he's attempting to undermine you. I'm your friend here, Naruto. Give me the scroll and we can take this traitor down together as Konoha shinobi in arms. Mizuki lied through his teeth trying to get the demon brat to just hand over the goddamn scroll. Then he could kill them both, grab the scroll, and get to Ravenous Point before the Anbu catches him. Stop lying to him, Mizuki. Iruka yelled as he finally pulled the last shuriken out of his body and shifted into a combat stance. Mizuki only stared at him for a moment before he broke out into an evil grin as he shifted his attention to Naruto once again. Mizuki said, Oh, I'm not lying to him, Iruka, you are. As our protagonist's eyes grew wide with shock at this realization. Hell, everyone has been lying to him. Naruto, you've been lied to all your life. No, Mizuki, it's forbidden. Iruka called out in panic, trying to prevent his favorite student from learning the horrible truth. Would you like to know why you are hated by everyone in the village, Naruto? Why do they want you dead, beat you, and ignore you? Mizuki continued, slowly reaching for one of the giant shuriken attached to his back, ready to hurl it at Naruto at any moment. Everyone you know has been lying you to your face for years, including the Hokage, ever since the decree was issued 13 years ago, Mizuki said, drawing Naruto farther and farther away with each word, making him forget his surroundings and focus only on Mizuki in the hopes of finally receiving some answers. What decree? With the answer he had been seeking almost at his fingertips, Naruto asked hesitantly, watching Mizuki intently, taking in every little movement in the hopes of finding a clue that would lead him to the answers he wanted, not that he needed to know. 13 years ago, following the Kyuubi attack, the Hokage issued a decree to all the villagers at the time, Mizuki said, looking down at him with a huge sneer that was followed by a deranged smile. He told everyone that our beloved Yondaime Sama didn't kill the Kyuubi as we were led to believe. Oh no, as it turns out no body can truly kill a bijou, they can only seal it. And guess where they sealed the beast that murdered entire clans that night? Yes, that monster was sealed inside of you by the Yondaime. You are the Kyuubi no Kitsune, the beast that almost destroyed us 13 years ago, Mizuki screamed at the blonde. Mizuki had done what the people of Konoha had been attempting to do for years. He crushed Naruto's spirit and willingness to continue. Naruto stood there as his brain stopped its higher functions out of shock at the soul crushing news that had just been given to him. His brain for all intensive purposes had just shut down. As every bit of his memory replayed in his head, the pieces slowly came together. Looking back on his entire life, he saw every sneer, every hate-filled look, and every look of disgust he had ever given him. He saw children's parents pull them away from him. Do me a favor, demon brat, and die. Mizuki chuckled as he spun the enormous shuriken before hurling it at our hero, saying, when I kill you, I'll be considered a hero around the world for being the first person to kill a demon. Naruto heard everything Mizuki said, but he did nothing to stop the enormous weapon of death from spiraling toward him. Why bother? No one gives a damn about me. Hell, I'm probably doing everybody a favor by dying. At least they'll be happy and I'll pay for my crimes. To clarify, at this moment he believes that he really is the Kyuubi. He bowed his head and closed his eyes as he awaited the cold embrace of death. A fraction of a second later, he heard the distinct sound of metal piercing flesh, but he felt no pain. Am I dead? He asked himself, opening his eyes to see if he was in Yomi no Kuni, land of the dead. Instead of the empty blackness that was supposed to surround the realm, he was met with a more terrifying sight. Iruka, huddled protectively over him. Why? As he tried to understand why Iruka would attempt to save the life of the person who killed his parents, Naruto asked in tears. Because you and I are more alike than you realize, Naruto. Like you, I became an orphan following the Kyuubi's attack. Everyone was too preoccupied with their own grief to take care of me, so I had no one who truly cared about me. So I took to pranks to garner attention, but it didn't fill the void. I should have done more to support you, Naruto. I know how awful it is to be alone. I should have reached out soon, so you wouldn't have to go what I went through, only worse. Iruka sobbed as he said, I can't change the past, Naruto, but I can help you now, and I will be there for you when you need me. Naruto looked at Iruka with a mixture of hope and sadness. Avoid making me chuckle. Iruka had always hated you and he still does. He will never forgive you, seeing as you were the beast that killed his parents. He'd do anything to get that scroll from you. Mizuki taunted down at the prone form of Iruka. Naruto, still confused and doubtful of who to trust, broke out into a sprint, leaving Mizuki and Iruka behind, with Iruka calling out for him. Well, that was expected. After all, once he makes up his mind, there is no changing it. He intends to exact revenge on the village that rejected him by using the scroll. You saw the look in that monster's eyes, didn't you? That was a look of a demon. Mizuki taunted as he landed on the ground a few feet from the struggling Iruka. Iruka yelled, no, Naruto's not like that, as he withdrew the shuriken from his back and threw it with great force at the smirking Mizuki, who easily avoided it. Well, poor Iruka, stay right here. I'll be back for you after I take the scroll and kill the demon brat. Mizuki said, I suggest you make peace with yourself now, and then he started chasing Naruto. Not on my watch, Iruka thought as he rose slowly from his kneeling position, stopping to catch his breath before leaping up into the trees with resolve in his eyes in the hopes of reaching Naruto before Mizuki did. Hokage office, a 68-year-old man, who was about 5 feet 6 inches tall, with short, spiky gray hair and a goatee to match, sat in the woods around Konoha and watched it throw a crystal ball during the entire ordeal. His age was very prominent on his face, seeing as how he had a huge crease on his forehead, numerous wrinkles around his eyes, pronounced cheekbones, a few liver spots and a small wart on his nose. He wore a white haori with a long white sash and a red kimono. A triangular red and white hat with the dark red kanji for fire in the center was tied around his neck. This was Sarutobi Hiruzen, the Sandaime Hokage and our hero's surrogate grandfather, ladies and gentlemen. He couldn't help but worry that if things got any worse, Naruto might unintentionally tap into the Kyuubi's cursed chakra as he watched the events through his crystal ball. Woods surrounding Konoha, aka the plot, Naruto swerved around branches, leapt over gaps, and simply avoided anything in his path as he ran through the forest as quickly as his legs would allow. Iruka suddenly materialized, running alongside him a few meters from where he was standing. Iruka begged our protagonist. Naruto thanked Kami. Sama, I found you. Listen to me. The things Mizuki told you were all lies. Quickly give me the scroll. Mizuki is close, and if he gets the scroll he'll kill us. Our protagonist then leapt at him, throwing him out of the canopy and into a tree below with an uppercut to the stomach. Iruka questioned, it can't be. How did you know? How did you know it was me? Before a cloud of smoke cleared and Mizuki revealed that he was using the transformation jutsu. And not Iruka, Mizuki concluded, glaring at Naruto, who was leaning against a tree with the scroll firmly grasped. Because I'm Iruka, Naruto uttered before he was also engulfed in a cloud of smoke, revealing the smirking but still wounded form of Iruka, who had a big log by his side rather than the actual scroll. Mizuki sneered as he stood up, his eyes never leaving Iruka as he glared at him with hatred. Iruka, you fool, why the hell are you protecting that thing? Remember that it's because of that demon that your parents are dead. Iruka answered with complete assurance, Mizuki, I don't care what you say, you're not getting that scroll. With a frustrated expression on his face, Mizuki said, as if you can stop me now, look at yourself, you're dead. Besides, it doesn't matter, don't you see it? Naruto is just like me. He'll use the scroll to further his own power and take revenge on all those who wronged him. That's what monsters do anyway, he'll pour every ounce of hatred into that scroll and destroy the village. He was likely to be caught by the Anbu the more time he spent on these idiots. You're right, Iruka said calmly. Unbeknownst to the two of them, Naruto was not far away. He was just hiding behind a nearby tree, listening to their conversation while he caught his breath. Every hateful word that came out of Mizuki's mouth filled him with despair. But nothing he said could match the sensation of hearing Iruka declare him to be a demon. It's all true, then. Yes, Iruka. Sensei despises me. He never had faith in me. As Iruka's words replayed in his mind, Naruto thought dejectedly, to him, I'm nothing more than a monster, a freak. It felt like someone was repeatedly stabbing him in the stomach with a kunai. That is how demons are, but that's not how Naruto is. He's not like you in any way, you pompous jackass, he's one of a kind, you see. Sure, he's a slacker, but he puts everything he has into what he does. He never quits even for a moment. When he makes a mistake, the other students rip him a new one, but you know what? His suffering only made him stronger. That's what separates him from a demon or you. So if you still think he's anything like the Kyuubi no Kitsune, then you're a dumb ass. He is not a demon. He is Uzumaki Naruto of Konohagakure no Sato and my student. Iruka laughed as he said. Our protagonist listened to this revelation from Iruka while tears of joy were streaming down his cheeks. He does care, Naruto thought, his whole being brimming with happiness. After staring at Iruka for a few moments, Mizuki collected himself and shook his head, shocked by Iruka's stupidity. He sighed as he reached back and retrieved his final giant shuriken. Mizuki began spinning the shurikens and lunging at the defenseless Iruka. Baka. Do you really believe that bullshit, Iruka? You know I was going to kill you later, but I changed my mind. Now die, he exclaimed. So, is this it? As Iruka waited to die, he thought. Mizuki was about to chop up Iruka like a turkey when Naruto suddenly appeared and gave her a knee to the face. The giant shuriken flew into unknown territory as Mizuki was flung back, reeling from the force of the blow. Mizuki collided with the ground, creating a dust cloud as Naruto slid on the ground to eventually stop himself. Naruto. Iruka was astounded when the purported Dobi of the class used a single blow to send a Chunin-level ninja flying. Rubbing his aching jaw, Mizuki mumbled, huh, not bad for a little brat, as he fought to get to his feet. I'll kill you if you ever touch Iruka. Sensei again, Naruto said menacingly, his head lowered, his face shadowed, his face all the more menacing. With his fist raised as though to demonstrate his power, Mizuki gazed down at Naruto without flinching and said, how hilarious you think you can beat me. Grow up, Gaki. I can destroy you with a single move. Do you really think you stand a chance in hell against me? With his middle and index fingers crossed in a strange hand gesture, Naruto retorted, bring it on, you bastard, I'll return it back 1,000-fold. Mizuki, angry that this little brat believed he could defeat him, yelled back, show me what you can do, Kyuubi, Gaki, absurd. Naruto surprised Mizuki and Iruka by yelling, Cage Bushin no Jutsu, Shadow Clone Jutsu, just before white smoke filled the clearing they were in. They were stunned when the smoke obscured their view of the two Chunins. Hundreds, if not thousands, of our favorite blonde clones surrounded the clearing from every angle. You're not using illusions, are you, Naruto? Iruka stared at the sheer number of clones before his face was adorned with a proud expression. No, those clones are solid. Only you could master a jutsu this advanced by accident, he thought in amazement. Mizuki's brain briefly shut down before rebooting, leaving him speechless at the sheer volume of clones. He shook his head to clear his mind of the pessimistic ideas circling it. He took a deep breath, relaxed, and evaluated his circumstances. All right, I don't have enough supplies to eliminate the Gaki because they are outnumbered by 8,000 to 1. As he took a flask containing a dark purple liquid out of his pocket, Mizuki thought evilly, think what can I do? I'll use the power Orochimaru. Sama gave me just in case. Mizuki raved, all right, demon, let's level the playing field a little. With this power my master gave me I'll be unstoppable, behold my power. Animal cursed seal, before snatching the flask's lid and downing it all at once. Mizuki then threw the flask to the ground, grabbed his sides, and started laughing uncontrollably as a dark purple aura started to surround him. Iruka, Naruto, and his clones all looked on in horror as Mizuki's form started to drastically alter. Mizuki's muscles suddenly tripled in size, and the sound of fabric tearing filled the clearing as his shirt and pants began to tear. As Mizuki's chest ripped open the front of his shirt, revealing his newly developed muscles, the zipper on his flak jacket nearly exploded, turning it into a vest. Mizuki was kneeling and catching his breath when the aura finally faded. After he finished laughing uncontrollably, he raised his head and showed off his new shape. His eyes had long slits like a cat's instead of pupils. Although he had noticeable tiger-like markings all over his body and face, Mizuki's manic grin, now complete with fangs, was what really frightened our hero. With his arms thrown out to the sides, Mizuki challenged, "This power is incredible. Come meet your death demon." The clone army launched itself at the massive monster that was Mizuki with a loud shout. Then, like a hot knife cutting through butter, said behemoth produced to tear through them. They were unable to punch their opponent, who easily tore through them, regardless of the angle from which they attacked. Naruto created 2 clones to replace each clone Mizuki destroyed, but it didn't work. As Naruto created more and more clones, all of which were killed like lambs, he thought, "Damn it, this isn't working, my clones can't even scratch him." As he killed the final clones, Mizuki yelled, "There you are Gaki," before focusing on the original Naruto. Mizuki briefly vanished from view before confronting a frightened Naruto and sending him hurtling through the air with a powerful uppercut. Mizuki leapt into the air and grabbed one of Naruto's ankles, but he was far from overpowering our hero. Then he played whack a mole, where the cold, unforgiving ground represented the moles and Naruto the mallet. As he charged the Uber, Iruka angrily yelled, "Let him go, you bastard." Mizuki then slapped Iruka into a tree. Mizuki taunted as he repeatedly struck Naruto in the stomach, saying, "Don't interfere Iruka, I'll kill you in just a moment. Now sit there and wait your turn." As he watched his favorite student get kicked in the ass by Mizuki, Iruka gripped his now broken ribs in agony and thought, "Damn. Let's just say that our hero felt as though the Hokage mountain had been dropped on him more than 10 times. What on earth is required to defeat this man? Even Bushin, the cage, doesn't seem to be able to stop him. I can't defeat him, but I must defeat him or he will murder Iruka. Sensei. Alright, consider how he suddenly became so strong. Hold on," he said, "I can use the seal breaker jutsu and he'll be helpless because it's kind of a cursed seal." Mizuki thought he had broken every bone in his body, but Naruto thought, "Okay, you bastard, I'm coming." He then pushed his body out of the ground. He had no idea that this choice would alter the entire world's trajectory. Before crossing his fingers and making a few clones to divert Mizuki's attention while he performed the required hand signals, Naruto yelled, "Okay, you bastard, let's finish this once and for all." After the clones were killed, Mizuki and Naruto charged at each other for one last battle in a matter of seconds. Mizuki screamed, "Take this demon," as he clocked his fist back, preparing to deliver a final blow that would remove Naruto's head. And Naruto, with dark blue chakra on his hands, shouted, "Seal breaker jutsu," as well. Naruto was about to be struck by Mizuki's fist when a wave of chakra pushed him back a few feet before completely vanishing. In order to beat Mizuki half to death, Naruto waited for the jutsu to take effect while keeping a close eye on her. Naruto's shoulders drooped after a few moments of waiting, and he had a million ideas, but he only spoke one of them. Naruto yelled in frustration, "What the hell? What went wrong? I did everything Before pausing, his mouth hanging open and his eyes widening. Abruptly, many glowing seals appeared over a large part of his body, and he let out a curtailing scream that reverberated throughout the forest. Naruto could only describe the pain that permeated every cell in his body as though they were all being dipped in acid. He continued to scream until he sensed that he was being drawn into a state of blissful darkness. Iruka thought to himself, "Naruto, what the hell is happening to you?" Before a massive pillar of energy engulfed Naruto's body and continued into the sky, blinding both him and Mizuki. The mindscape of Naruto stood up, his clothes dripping with water, rubbing his head and muttering, where am I?" After a few moments, he eventually jolted out of his reverie and looked around. With its massive pipes decorating the wall that seemed to pulse red and blue every few seconds, it looked like a massive sewer. The worst part was that he was knee-deep in dark brown water, and the walls were filthy and cracked from age. Even though this place is dim, wet, and unappealing to the average person, Naruto somehow felt safe here. Deciding that he would not be able to escape and save Iruka by standing there like a fool. Naruto reached what appeared to be the middle of the entire sewer after what seemed like hours of searching through corridors. There was something at the end of this corridor, unlike the others he had passed through. His path was blocked by a big steel gate with long bars that extended up to about 60 feet, but the strange thing was the thing that kept the gate closed. "Seal" was written in kanji on a small piece of paper that held everything together. Naruto's voice reverberated throughout the sewer as he said, hello? Anybody there?" Unbeknownst to him, 5 pairs of eyes blearily opened to take in their new surroundings as soon as he finished speaking. It was difficult enough to wake up after a good nap, but picture waking up every 5 minutes to an annoyingly loud voice shouting at you. Yes, that would annoy you as well, and right now, one Jägerjacka's Grimjow felt just that way. Naturally, You have a very unhappy Espada when you combine that with the confusion of being in an unfamiliar setting with roughly 3 people that you can't stand. Grimjow glared suspiciously at his fellow Espada, who were equally perplexed as he was, and roared out in rage, "Where the hell am I?" With a firm grip on his sword, Pantera, Grimjow accused. "Okay, what did you bastards do to me, huh?" He was prepared to draw it at any moment. Stark yawned and wiped the sleep from his eyes. "Can you keep it down? I'm still freaking tired." Grimjow's eye began to twitch, which only seemed to aggravate him further, and Harabel was only able to sigh at her fellow Espada's actions. The loud, boisterous voice that woke them up in the first place echoed in their ears once more, this time much closer, before the situation could turn into a full-fledged altercation. As it seemed to get closer and closer, they eventually heard the sound of someone walking through water. Naruto yelled, "Hello, is someone there?" in the hopes of receiving a response. He was on the verge of despair when he heard voices coming from a hallway further to his left. Naruto ran as quickly as he could through the murky water in the direction of the voices, thinking, "Finally someone who can help me." He turned the corner and saw 5 strangely dressed people staring back at him with curiosity, apathy, or annoyance. Naruto examined each one closely, attempting to gauge the personalities of those he was interacting with. The first person was a dark-skinned woman, standing at about 5 feet 9, with short blonde hair with 3 braided locks. Her cold green eyes drifted over Naruto's appearance as did his to her. Her attire was unique to say the least. She wore a long-sleeved jacket with a very high collar, which covered most of her face. The jacket also just barely restrained her massive breast, to which he quickly averted his eyes from. It also seemed to have a zipper right down the middle. The sleeves of her ran down the entirety of her arms, all the way to her hands, which had gloves on with black fingers being the only thing to differentiate it from the sleeves. She wore very revealing pants, seeing as how they totally exposed her hips and seemed only to be held on by a black sash around her waist. She wore black socks and odd sandals that every single of the people there, with the exception of the green-haired lady, wore. She had a large sword strapped across her lower back, with a purple handle and weird holes on the guard. The second individual was a tall, buff man who stood at around 6 feet 1 inch. He had light blue eyes with some girly green eyeliner underneath them, and short, spiky blue hair. He had on a long, torn-up white jacket with a black inner lining and an upside-down collar. He had the coat's sleeves rolled up to his elbows. In addition to black tabby socks and sandals, he wore a white hakama that he fastened to his waist with a black sash. The man flaunted his muscular body and a large scar on his chest by leaving the coat open. There were 2 main peculiarities about this man. 1. It appeared as though someone had adhered a piece of his jaw to the right side of his face. The second was that he had a huge hole in his chest, but he didn't seem to mind. An average-length katana with a light blue handle and an oddly shaped guard was strapped to his waist. The third individual was a man of about 5 feet 6.5 inches height, with pale white skin, short, messy black hair, with some of his bangs falling in the middle of his face, a motionless green cat-like eyes, notably thick eyebrows, and, for some reason, a black upper lip. His expression was so emo that it made Sasuke's look pale in comparison. He wore a white jacket, just like the others, but his was longer near the back. He was dressed in black tabby socks and wooden sandals, and a katana with a green handle and sheath at his waist. The fourth person there was a tall, full-figured woman with long, flowing blue-green hair who was also around 5 feet 9 inches. At that moment, her hazel eyes were brimming with curiosity. She has a big scar that runs from her forehead to her nose, and a long red band that runs across her face, just beneath her eyes. When Naruto saw how she was dressed, he had to turn his head away to conceal his blush. Her entire mid-drift was visible to him through a torn green shirt that hardly covered her enormous breasts. She flaunted her long, gorgeous legs to him with an absurdly short skirt. Her katana, which had a light green hilt and resembled 2 crescent moons back, was also tightly grasped in her hand. Choosing not to attempt to explain it, she seemed to have a big ram skull perched atop her head. Naruto ignored it and continued. The last individual was a tall, tanned man, about 6 feet 1.5 inches tall, with messy brown hair that was parted down the middle, neck length, and bluish-gray eyes. He had a small, faded goatee on his chin, and around his neck, what appeared to be an animal's lower jaw, and underneath that, he had a hole, just like the one on the blue-haired man. He was wearing a white jacket with a black collar that was folded out, a white hakama tied with a black sash that was styled in a peculiar way, white gloves on his hands, a katana with a yellow handle, and a rectangular pewter guard around his waist, and he had the most slackest expression he had ever seen, rivaling that of his friend Shikamaru. Who the hell are you? After a moment of glaring at each other, Grimmjow finally had enough and used a quick sonito to appear directly in front of Naruto. With his hands balled up in his jacket, he lifted him up off the ground and held him eye to eye. Naruto and Grimmjow both yelled at the same time, with the former pointing at the latter. Alright, I'm done with this crap. I need someone to explain this situation to me, or I'm going to show a Sero right up your ass, Grimmjow yelled, his hands gripping Naruto tightly as he began to struggle and curse violently. Before Neliel could step in and release Naruto from Grimmjow's hold, heavy, deep breathing could be heard directly behind them. I think I can answer that, the voice yelled, startling everyone. Before anyone could blink, their surroundings appeared to vanish, revealing a huge cage. Suddenly, the entire creature appeared, a giant fox with organish-red fur covering its entire body, 2 enormous blood-red eyes, and 9 flowing tails. Oddly, it also appeared to have human-like hands, complete with opposable thumbs. In front of them sat the Kyuubi no Kitsune, and in a split second, every Espada member had their swords drawn and prepared to battle. Set aside the toothpicks you refer to as swords and take a moment to listen. Or would you prefer to pass away here? They reluctantly lowered their weapons, choosing to listen to the enormous creature. Kyuubi growled menacingly, releasing a powerful quantity of ki to make its point. Kyuubi nodded in agreement before focusing on the partially trembling Naruto, who stared at it with fear and rage. You're my jailer, huh? I guess it doesn't really matter now, but you're shorter than I thought. We don't have much time to talk about important issues. As it ascended to its full height and gazed down at them, Kyuubi remarked, You've already wasted a lot of time wandering this place. What do you mean by not having much time to talk? What's happening? With her arms crossed beneath her already large breasts, making them appear even larger, Haribel calmly asked, expressing the other's worries. To respond to the earlier query from the person with the blue hair. We are currently inside my seal and in the mindscape of the ninja. I have no idea how you got in here, and I don't really care. I only know that you are now bound to his soul and sealed inside his body, just like me. Now, you ought to have had certain dreams if you had gone through what I had during my time in this damn seal, didn't you? After Kyuubi asked the Espada what they could recall from the time they were engulfed in darkness, they quickly realized that the child in their dreams was actually the same Gaki in front of them. They dreamed of a little blonde boy sobbing to himself and watched him being ridiculed, stabbed, beaten, shunned, and pretty much anything else terrible that could be done to a person. Neliel sputtered, You mean that those horrible nightmares were real? The Kyuubi nodded sadly, and Neliel lunged at Naruto, embracing him as he fought back tears as he described how his tormentors had tortured him in the past. Once they had calmed Neliel, they turned back to the Kyuubi, who appeared irritated at having its time wasted. Are you finished? The pause for the inevitable freak-out didn't last long. Kyuubi blurted out, Now I'm going to be blunt here, Ninjin, you're dying. What? After screaming as loudly as he could, Naruto lost it and began to run around like a chicken without a head. However, this didn't last long because Haribel punched him in the head, knocking him to the ground. What's killing the Gaki? When Grimmjow noticed the brat clutching the bump on his head, he smirked and asked. Simply put, this Baka did not execute the seal breaker jutsu correctly when he attempted to use it. You must actually touch the seal you wish to break before you can ask Ninjin. Otherwise, Kyuubi told the utterly bewildered Naruto, you just waste a bunch of chakra or, in your case, break every single seal on your body. What seals? Hold on a second. Gazing curiously at the Kyuubi, Naruto posed the question. To keep you from remembering who you truly are, that old fool you call a cage ordered seals to be put on you. Gaki, you see, it was decided at birth that you would be trained as a weapon for this pathetic village. Being a shinobi came naturally to you. In fact, some people referred to you as a prodigy. But the honorable elders of the village believed that you were becoming too powerful to be subdued. So they convinced your Jijij to have your memories and skills sealed away, Kyuubi said in response to the shell, shocking Naruto, who was trying to convince himself that Jiji wouldn't betray him in such a way. The Espada could only look at him pityingly, or Ulquiorra's version of pity, before one of Kyuubi's tails suddenly shot out of the cage and pressed its tip against the middle of his forehead. Naruto was suddenly flooded with memories of his former life, including training with his sensei, going on missions, and studying scrolls. As this was happening, he was screaming uncontrollably before collapsing and gasping for air, slowly pushing himself off the ground and leaning on a nearby wall for support. Kyuubi chose to continue explaining it after noticing this. The seal your fucking Yondaime used on me malfunctioned when you broke the seals on your body. The purpose of the seal was to absorb my chakra and transform it into yours. You have been absorbing far more of my chakra than your body can manage, though, because the transferring matrix was harmed when the seals broke. As a result, if this keeps up, you're going to blow up, Kyuubi continued, drawing horrified looks from everyone in the room. Is it possible to undo the harm without having to reapply the seals? In his typical monotone, Ulquiorra questioned, gazing blankly at the Kyuubi as though they weren't all going to perish in a terrible explosion. Reversing the damage is possible, but it's extremely dangerous. Only if we all partially merge with him will I be able to save the ninja. That would imply that he would take on some of our abilities, character, wisdom, etc. The worst response yet from Naruto was given when Kyuubi retorted, basically, this means we are literally destroying part of the Gaki and rebuilding him. What? I will be destroyed by you? No way, surely there must be another way. In an attempt to convince Kami that there was another option, Naruto spoke. There's no other option, you pathetic ape without hair. Do you want to die, or is this the only option? It's funny because I assumed you wanted to protect your sensei from Mizuki, the overgrown hairball. Kyuubi shouted at the terrified Naruto, did I forget to mention that the blast radius of the explosion will destroy half the village? After giving this new information some thought, Naruto concluded that Iruka would die eventually if he did nothing. He was determined not to let Iruka die, so he stood up straight and made his decision, saying, I'm not just going to roll over and die, possibly taking out the only man to really give a damn about me. I will stop at nothing to save Iruka. Sensei. Staring Kyuubi in the eyes, Naruto spoke firmly and with complete conviction. Kyuubi asked the remaining Espada, who were somewhat amazed by Naruto's conviction, alright ninja, are the rest of you willing to sacrifice some of your power? With a sigh, Stark placed his hand on Naruto's back and said, let's just get this over with. Naruto turned his head and gave Stark a grateful smile, which was reciprocated with a small one. I should now caution everyone. The Espada took the hint and began pumping their Ryotsu into our hero, creating a multicolored aura around his form. The two powers fought for dominance for a moment before merging to create a brilliant white light that blinded them all. This is going to be incredibly painful for you all, Kyuubi warned, receiving determined looks from Naruto and the Arrancar crew. The moment the energy hit Naruto, he was thrown out of his mindscape and into a world of excruciating pain. The forest outside Konoha is the real world. A minute had passed since Naruto used the Sealbreaker Jutsu to try to defeat Mizuki before being engulfed by a surge of energy. Can you come in here, Naruto? Naruto, answer me, Iruka cried, begging Kami Sama to give her a sign that Naruto was okay. As if Kami herself was listening, the torrent of energy abruptly began to diminish before going out entirely, and as smoke billowed out of the crater left by the energy phenomenon, the silhouette of a figure could be seen. A powerful wind swept through the clearing, dispersing the smoke and revealing the figure in all his glory to be none other than Naruto, but this one was different from the endearing goofball Iruka had grown to know over the years. For a shinobi his age, he was about 5 feet 4 inches tall, with a well-muscled body that was neither scrawny nor too large. His hair, which was now tied up in a ponytail, fell past his shoulders and rested between shoulder blades. His face had lost all signs of baby fat. The whisker marks on his cheeks had darkened and resembled tattoos, and his eyes remained largely unchanged, with the exception that they were no longer bright blue but rather a dark blue with a slitted pupil. Think Naruto's eyes in Shippuden. Instead of his normal, kill me, orange and blue jumpsuit, he now wore a white trench coat with the collar up that was torn at the bottom and at the sleeves with a black flame design lining them, also with black fabric lining the inside. The sleeves of the coat were tied down from the elbow on taut the wrists with bandages. He wore a pair of white hakama that cover up 2 long black socks with a pair of traditional samurai sandals covering them. Since he kept his jacket opened and apparently didn't wear anything underneath except a red obi, you could see his well-toned chest, and right above his 4-pack abs was a large tattoo of the number 9. Their eyes were drawn to the sword on his right hip. It had a beautiful black sheath with kanji running up and down the sides. The guard of the sword was fairly simple as it looked like a black shuriken. The handle, however, was unique. It was made up of what looked to be 3 skeletal arms wrapped around each other and holding a skull at the end with a ruby in its mouth. To attract the figure's attention, Iruka cleared his throat and swallowed a lump in his throat. Naruto? With hesitation, he inquired, hoping that this individual was still the Naruto he was familiar with. With his hands stuffed in his jacket pockets, Naruto turned to face Mizuki, narrowed his eyes, cracked his neck, and then hopped out of the crater, landing directly in front of Iruka. You bet, sensei, I'm back and better than ever, believe it, he said, revealing his incredibly sharp canine teeth as the figure turned to face him. Outside of Konoha, forests. Random clearing. Iruka could only look on in wonder. his mind searching for a logical reason why the endearing idiot he knew was actually the same person standing guard in front of him. Is that still you, Naruto? Are you still the young person who aspires to be the Hokage? Or have you entirely changed? Haruka pondered, his thoughts alternating between pictures of the former Naruto and pictures of the person posing as him. Mizuki gave Naruto a vile glare after noticing that the small light show had just informed all of the ANBUs and Jonin in the village of their current location. In an attempt to maintain his tough exterior, Mizuki growled, "Nice trick, Gaki, but it doesn't matter what you do, there is no way you can possibly defeat me." After a few moments of intense staring with his head tilted to the side, Naruto lowered his gaze. Mizuki grinned at this, believing that the demon Gaki had finally conceded defeat and realized he was completely outmatched. When Naruto's shoulders began to rise and fall, that absurd feeling was dashed. Laughing, rather than crying, as Mizuki would have preferred. Naruto let out a cold, mocking laugh that grew louder over time before he burst out laughing uncontrollably. Mizuki screamed in anger, his face twisted into a savage grin. "What's so funny, demon?" Mizuki clenched his fists in rage, thinking, "How dare this abomination laugh at me?" When Naruto finally stopped laughing, he raised his head and looked Mizuki in the eyes. "This took a considerable amount of time. I'm laughing at you and at your supposed invincibility. You believe just because you got a power boost from a cursed Hiki, that you can beat me. You're a sad little man, Tora. Teme, with delusions of grandeur that you couldn't possibly achieve. Let's not forget, thanks to the actions of our esteemed village elders, I wasn't even a tenth of my real strength when we started this. So congratulations, Mizuki. You succeed in beating around a 13-year-old child with a record-setting amount of seals on him. Does that make you feel like big man? Huh, Mizuki." Naruto cracked a grin. He was completely at ease, as though he didn't even see him as a threat. Mizuki became increasingly irate with every word Naruto spoke until he could take no more. He roared like a beast and sprang at Naruto, intending to crush him completely, his feet creating spider web cracks on the ground. With the intention of breaking all of Naruto's ribs at once and sending them into his lungs, Mizuki delivered a punch directly to his torso. The ground beneath Naruto cracked under the force of his punch, but he casually threw up one of his hands and caught it at full impact. With a yawn and a look of complete boredom and disappointment on his face, Naruto exclaimed, "Is that the best you can do? Pity, and here I was hoping to get an exciting fight. Oh well, I guess you always get what you want." Naruto hit Mizuki squarely in the chest with a palm strike using his free hand before Mizuki could even blink. Mizuki was hurled backward for about 30 feet before his back struck a tree, barely having time to catch his breath. What on earth was that? I had the impression that I had just been struck by a sledgehammer. How powerful is this brat now? After rubbing his aching chest and wondering, this isn't going to be as easy as I thought, Mizuki stood up and assumed a combat stance. Without pausing, Mizuki lunged forward, slamming his elbow into Naruto's face. Naruto leapt slightly aside and ducked low to avoid the blow at the last second, then delivered several vicious uppercuts to Mizuki's exposed kidney. Mizuki was given a roundhouse kick to the back of his head from behind before he could even think about grabbing his injured side. After stumbling forward a little, Mizuki struck him in the back. Sadly for our hero, Mizuki took advantage of the fact that Naruto's forearm blocked the strike. He turned slightly on his heel, swiftly pulled his arm away, and hurried forward, his shoulder making contact. Mizuki viciously kneed Naruto in the stomach after he had crashed him into one of the few trees that were still standing in the clearing. As he folded over, Naruto gasped in pain, as if taken aback by Mizuki's unexpectedly painful blow, but grateful that it wasn't nearly as painful as it could have been. With a sinister smile, Mizuki delivered a strong uppercut that caused our hero's head to snap upward and his body to rise several feet off the ground. But Mizuki wasn't done complaining about Naruto. Mizuki let out a powerful shout and then struck our bewildered hero in the chest with his own palm strike, sending him hurtling across the clearing. "Naruto!" Haruka yelled in a panic, attempting to stand up and assist his pupil, but he clutched his fractured ribs instead. Haruka cursed himself for not being stronger as he watched helplessly, thinking, "Damn it all." With an insane gleam in his eyes, Mizuki said, "Well, that was easier than expected. Looks like the demon was all talk after all. Now that it's dead, it's your turn now, Haruka. Don't worry, on account of our past friendship I'll make it quick." It was obvious to Haruka that Mizuki didn't give a damn about killing him. With each step Mizuki took in his direction, Haruka's body began to perspire nervously. Haruka's heart began to race under Mizuki's increasing proximity. All he could do, Haruka thought, was sit there and wait for Mizuki to kill him, which was the worst part of this whole clusterfuck scenario. But when a streak of yellow and white suddenly appeared and knocked Mizuki back, Kami seemed appropriate to give Haruka a break. That streak turned out to be a furious Naruto, who gave Mizuki a scornful look. Before turning his head slightly and giving the startled Haruka a tiny smile, Naruto angrily stated, "I thought I made it clear the first time. If you touched Haruka Sensei again, I said I would kill you, and I intend to keep my word." Naruto launched himself in Mizuki's direction without hesitation. Naruto kicked off the ground, shifted his body in midair, and hit Mizuki's face with a flawless double kick. Naruto backflipped onto the ground, using Mizuki's face as a springboard, and then threw a flurry of punches that sent Mizuki flying across the clearing. Fuck it. Haruka thought. Naruto, please be okay. He was thinking about how useless he was right now, unable to assist his student in any way. He promised himself that if he survived this ordeal, he would train tirelessly to ensure that it never happened again. Unpredictable clearing. About 50 feet from Haruka's position, Mizuki ended up in another clearing after crashing through innumerable trees and shrubs. When Mizuki finally stopped, he took a series of painful breaths, each one causing pain in his upper body. Mizuki's torso was covered in numerous bruises, each of which corresponded to a punch that Naruto had delivered. Before dripping to the ground below, blood trickled down from his broken lip. Fucking hell. The Anbu will definitely catch me if I waste any more time here. Mizuki thought, they'll definitely send me to Ibiki, and then she uncontrollably shuddered at the prospect of meeting the head of the torture and interrogation department. The sound of a sonic boom interrupted his inner monologue. He barely had time to consider this before being kicked in the face and sent flying once more. Mizuki lifted his head and gave Naruto a savage glare while massaging his aching jaw, which Naruto fully returned. With his chest heaving from ragged breaths, Mizuki shakily stood up, ignoring the excruciating pain coursing through his body. When Mizuki saw the tiny smirk on Naruto's face, a fiery anger shot through her veins. As more vile, dark chakra swirled around his form once more, hiding Mizuki from view, he roared in rage, "Don't you dare mock me, demon." It grew until, from Naruto's point of view, Mizuki was little more than a warped silhouette. Mizuki's anger overcame his common sense as he gritted his teeth and pushed more and more chakra out of the seal. As Mizuki's muscles grew to absurd proportions, the sound of tearing and ripping cloth reverberated throughout the clearing. Naruto, who stood there observing with intense interest, could clearly hear Mizuki's agonized grunts. At last, the repulsive chakra weakened, gradually exposing the newly changed Mizuki in all his hideous splendor. Mizuki's body was now covered in short orange and white fur with black stripes littering his form, making him look more like a tiger than ever. His face was now twisted in an animalistic scowl befitting his new appearance, and his hands and feet were briefly covered in steam before the clawed appendages were revealed. He stood at about 7 feet 4 inches, his entire body bulging with insane amounts of muscle, which had grown about twice the size they were from the last transformation. After a brief moment of trembling, Mizuki threw back his head and burst out laughing. "I can feel the power coursing through my veins. This is more than I ever could have imagined. No one can match my power now, Orochimaru." Sama actually delivered on his promise, he thought to himself as he basked in the glow of his artificial power. "Demon, can you sense it? This is what true power feels like, and with it, I will kill you for the humiliation you put me through." His voice was full of arrogance, and he looked down at his hands as he studied his newly acquired claws with a sick fascination. This continued for a few seconds before Mizuki let out a blood-curdling war cry and charged towards Naruto with the force of a stampede. Mid-stride, Mizuki clocked his arm back and, with a powerful yell, leapt up in the air, bringing his arm down into a ferocious punch downward towards Naruto's body. In response, Naruto leapt back just in time to avoid Mizuki's punch, which became embedded deep in the ground. Mizuki, snarling with rage, tore his arm out of the cold, unforgiving ground and charged at Naruto like a bull with his arms spread wide and claws ready. Mizuki then launched a powerful claw strike, which Naruto easily avoided, further enraged Mizuki. Without any sense of form or technique, Mizuki simply began swiping at Naruto in an attempt to claw out his throat. This continued for a few moments before Naruto decided that enough was enough. Instead, Naruto threw his arm up and knocked Mizuki's arm astray, leaving him open. As soon as he was inside Mizuki's guard, he struck Mizuki's chin with a picture-perfect uppercut, forcing his head back as he grunted in pain. Then, pressing his advantage, Naruto quickly kneed Mizuki in the stomach, causing him to nearly fold in half. Mizuki's body momentarily stopped moving on its own and only stood up because Naruto's fist was firmly planted in his gut. What the hell is this abomination so strong? Mizuki thought as blood spilled from his open mouth and onto the ground, turning the ground red. So, this is the height of your corrupted strength, huh? This is what you were bragging about with a great deal of arrogance. Just pitiful, though. I should have expected this from trash like you. Naruto uttered in a monotonous, emotionless voice as frigid as Yuki no Kuni's endless winters. At last, Naruto removed his fist from Mizuki's stomach, causing the overgrown furball to fall to the ground. Or at least he would have, if Naruto hadn't kicked him square in the chest, sending him flying 15 feet. As soon as he was able to feel his limbs again, Mizuki threw his arms down and used his enormous claws to anchor himself to the ground. He heaved as he struggled to take even the smallest of breaths, clutching his battered torso. Mizuki shakily raised his head and glared at Naruto with all the hate he could muster, but this was quickly replaced by a slight look of confusion as he looked at Naruto intently and apparently his new appearance. The first thing Mizuki noticed was that Naruto's posture had changed from being relaxed and partially slouched over to being rigid and machine-like, with no discernible flaws. His skin was slightly paler than before, going from a deep tan to a lighter skin tone. His normally spiky hair seemed to have lost its life, as it was now completely straightened and slightly darker than usual. His eyes were cold and emotionless, reminding Mizuki a lot of the Byakugan of the Hyuga clan. The worst thing about Naruto's eyes was the feeling that he was looking into your very soul. Before Mizuki had a chance to consider whether or not Naruto was playing tricks on him, he made a cross-hand seal and yelled, "Kage Bushin no Jutsu." In an instant, 2 puffs of smoke appeared on either side of him, and when the smoke cleared, 2 clones of Naruto with the same emotionless mask on their faces were standing beside him. Naruto said icily, "Let's start round 2, shall we?" His clones nodded, and then rushed Mizuki, who gritted his teeth, willed his body up, and suddenly charged the clone's head on. With Iruka in the interim, Iruka thought angrily, "Come on already, move damn it," as he tried to get up and assist Naruto once more. Unfortunately, his busted ribs made it impossible for him to get up at all because of the excruciating pain that shot through his body when he tried, and the sound of rustling leaves, not the wind-induced kind, but the kind that came from someone or something moving through it, cut off his inner thoughts. Iruka kept his eyes fixed on the direction from which the sound was coming, mentally praying that it wasn't Mizuki returning to kill him. His fears were allayed when 2 Anbu agents emerged from the sea of leaves encircling Konoha. The first Anbu was clearly female. She had long purple hair that ended somewhere around her lower back and ass. She wore a porcelain Neko mask with 3 red stripes on her face. She wore standard Anbu armor, which included a light gray padded flak jacket covering her entire torso. On her arms, she wore black gloves that reached her mid-bicep, with gray forearm bracers on top. She had a prominent Anbu tattoo on her right shoulder. She wore light black pants with bandages wrapped around her right thigh. And, finally, she wore standard black shinobi sandals. The second Anbu was a tall man with spiky brown hair that was clearly visible behind his porcelain Tora mask, which had red and green markings on it. He wore the same standard uniform as his countrymen, but his sword was on the right side of his back rather than the left, and his Anbu tattoo was on his left shoulder. "Are you okay, Amino-san?" Iruka sighed in relief when the medical chakra touched his ribs, which he could feel already mending themselves back together. Neko asked Iruka this as another Anbu showed up and started to treat his wounds. "Thank you, I feel much better now, but that isn't important right now." In a panicked tone that grew increasingly concerned with each word, Iruka frantically replied, "You must go and help Naruto before something terrible happens." Uzumaki-san. "Given that he stole the sacred scroll of sealing, why should we help him?" Neko replied, confusion evident in her voice. She spared a look at her fellow Anbu hoping to see if they could shine some light on the subject. Alas, they just as confused as she was. Seeing as they were any help, Neko turned her attention back to Iruka and said, "Please elaborate, Amino-san. What exactly happened here?" The Anbu wearing the Tora mask approached Iruka after securing the scroll with the intention of learning the truth about the situation. Iruka sighed, took a deep breath, and recollected what had happened up to this point. He told them everything, from Naruto tackling Mizuki out of the clearing to failing Naruto earlier in the day, and by the end of the story, all of the ANBUs were aware of what had actually transpired. Refusing to take off her mask and rub her temples to relieve the throbbing headache, Neko summarized out loud, "I see. So Mizuki is the traitor and Uzumaki-san was simply a pawn in his scheme." She turned to face her fellow Anbu and used a number of Anbu hand signs to communicate their new orders without uttering a single word. The Tora Anbu nodded in return, formed a ram seal, and vanished in a flurry of leaves. "Amino-san, I've done everything I can right now, and in about a week, your ribs should be fully recovered." As he helped Iruka up and put an arm over his shoulder, the Tori masked Anbu who had healed him said, "But for the time being, I need to take you hospital to rest. Don't take me to the hospital just yet, please. Iruka begged frantically. Please make sure Naruto is safe and sound. Tori sighed, then looked at Neiko, who reluctantly nodded. Neiko calmly approached Tori and Iruka, put her hand on Tori's shoulder, and with a simple hand gesture, they left. Please be safe, Naruto, was the last thing that crossed Iruka's mind. The position of Naruto. As he failed to make contact with Naruto's clones once more, Mizuki growled, "Damn it, stay still, you little demon." While this was happening in the real world, Naruto watched with a critical eye, gradually absorbing every bit of information he could from Mizuki's fighting style. When Naruto decided he had seen enough, he hurried forward with a quick sonito and was ready to throw a haymaker to the side of Mizuki's face. But this did not go as planned because Mizuki's hearing had improved, and it was only because of this that he was able to turn just in time to avoid Naruto's fist slamming into his face. Mizuki took advantage of this unique opportunity by quickly pivoting on his heel and delivering a devastating backhand to Naruto's midsection, sending him flying. Then, with a quick jerk of his arm, Mizuki grabbed one of the clones' heads and broke its neck, causing it to vanish in a puff of smoke. The other clone saw this and immediately leapt back to save its clone brethren, or at least it would have, but Mizuki sprang forward in a sudden burst of speed before it could do so, slitting its throat with a powerful roar and, like its brethren, it vanished in a puff of smoke. After successfully eliminating both of Naruto's clones, Mizuki grinned with confidence and said, "You little bastard, stop playing around." Mizuki shouted, "Doden, underground projection fish jutsu," with a smug air as he performed several hand seals. Suddenly, his form began to sink into the ground, and he smirked before vanishing entirely, leaving Naruto in the clearing. As he watched for Mizuki, Naruto thought to himself, "This is problematic." The clearing was nearly silent, with only the crunching of the grass beneath Naruto's sandals. Each second that went by only made him feel more uneasy, and his eyes were always moving, searching everywhere for the slightest hint of Mizuki's whereabouts. After what seemed like hours of tense waiting, Mizuki finally made his move against Naruto. Nearly as quickly as Mizuki vanished, a whole platoon of Mizuki appeared out of the ground, all of them grinning viciously. Naruto narrowed his eyes at this development, his mind racing through several options for what to do next. His inner planning was temporarily halted when the Mizuki platoon charged at him with a war cry. With his hand gripping the handle of his katana tightly, Naruto charged into battle against the horde of cats. In less than a second, he unshed his katana and twisted out of the way of one of the Mizuki's hammer blows. Without wasting any time, Naruto swung outwards and immediately cut through Mizuki's side, right where his kidneys would be. However, instead of Mizuki yelling in pain and sending blood flying to the ground, Mizuki simply dissipated, exposing it to be simply a standard Bushin clone. With a slight frown, Naruto continued his counterattack, slicing at clones left and right in an attempt to hit the original. Dodging a swipe from another Mizuki, Naruto stabbed Mizuki in the gut, but it also disappeared into nothingness. Naruto's agitation increased with each clone he killed, and the horde of Mizukis circled around him, all of them smiling savagely at him. One Mizuki moved forward, seemingly the designated speaker for his clone brethren. Prior to he and two other Mizukis attacking our hero, "Give up, demon, you'll never defeat us at this rate," was a taunt. "We'll see," said Naruto impassively, his katana grip tightening slightly in agitation as he took a calming breath through his nose. Using Sonito, Naruto swiftly tore through Mizuki's raging clones, all of whom vanished at once. He then dodged a kick aimed at his head and swung his sword through Mizuki's leg, making it vanish. He ducked to avoid simultaneous attacks and leapt over one Mizuki, his sword slicking through its head, causing it to dissipate. Naruto continued, never slowing down for a moment as he decimated the feline behemoth horde. Before long, he was once again alone in the clearing, his sword drawn and his body tensed, panting a little, but it was at this point that the real Mizuki chose to strike. The real Mizuki appeared almost out of nowhere in front of Naruto, partially emerging from the ground and delivering a lightning fast knife strike through Naruto's stomach. Mizuki grinned sadistically as he watched a look of complete and utter shock appear on Naruto's face. His sword clattered to the ground, its wielder no longer able to hold it. Naruto, for his part, could only look at Mizuki's arm going through his torso in horror, at least for a few seconds before a smirk appeared on his face. Mizuki gaped as Naruto vanished in a puff of white smoke, leaving behind him a completely destroyed log, the remains of which fell to the ground, and Mizuki just stared in disbelief at the shattered remains of what had once been a perfectly good log. A tremendous amount of pain on the side of his face jolted him out of his momentary incredulity, and it was the real Naruto who quickly delivered a powerful roundhouse kick to the side of Mizuki's face. What the? Mizuki thought as his body was pushed out of the earth and sent flying backwards. With a look of steely determination on his face, Naruto ran after the temporarily stunned Mizuki and quickly caught up to him before launching his attack. A left cross from Naruto caused Mizuki's head to veer to the side, causing blood and spittle to pour from his mouth. Naruto continued to beat in Mizuki's face, forcing him to take a few steps backwards as he clutched his aching face. A well-placed uppercut to his stomach knocked the breath out of him, causing his body to slump forward as heaved. Naruto then followed this up with a spinning roundhouse kick that left Mizuki flat on his ass, moaning in pain. "This is the end, Mizuki, if it's any consolation, you put a better fight than I thought you would," Naruto said as he approached the fallen Mizuki calmly, his sword firmly in his hand, his footsteps echoing in Mizuki's ears, who in turn eyed Naruto's sword with a healthy dose of fear. Mizuki's eyes followed the downward arc of Naruto's sword, as it descended towards his neck, ready to decapitate him. The world seemed to slow down in Mizuki's perspective, and the blade seemed to move in slow motion as it approached his jugular vein. Mizuki scrunched up his face and turned it to the side, waiting for the blade to make contact. Just as Naruto's blade was about to make contact with Mizuki's throat, a miracle, at least for Mizuki, happened. Mizuki, not questioning this, scooted away from the smoke, relief clearly visible on his face, and shakily stood up, his hands planted on his knees for support, as he watched the smoke cover with an intense glare. Naruto exploded in a huge cloud of organish smoke just as he was about to cut Mizuki's head off. The blonde demon that Mizuki had been fighting a few moments earlier was replaced by a confused 5-year-old boy as a gentle breeze swept through the clearing, gradually dissipating the smoke cloud until it completely disappeared. What the hell is going on? Where the hell did the demon go? Mizuki thought angrily, searching the area for any clue as to where Naruto had disappeared to. Wait a minute, no, it could be, he thought to himself as he took a closer look at the 5-year-old. To his surprise and a little annoyance at not recognizing him sooner, the 5-year-old boy was actually Uzumaki Naruto. Speaking of our favorite blonde protagonist, he was in fact now a 5-year-old. In contrast to his previous transformations, Naruto's physical attributes and attire underwent significant changes. To start, his height had significantly dropped, making him slightly taller than the typical 5-year-old at 3 feet 9 inches. In fact, Naruto's physical attributes were strikingly similar to those of his previous incarnation as the class Dobi. His face was rounder than before, but not by much, as his baby fat had returned. His hair had returned to its previous style, albeit a little longer, and was now nearly blindingly yellow. His eyes had widened and were brimming with wonder and innocent childlikeness. His nose had a button-like appearance due to its slight redness and relative smallness to the rest of his face. In terms of attire, Naruto no longer wore his signature orange jumpsuit or his open white haori, thanks to Kami. He was wearing a white hoodie now, but it was 2 or 3 sizes too big. The ends of the sleeves actually dragged on the ground, completely covering his hands and arms. The hoodie's main body reached roughly his knees. A large black number 9 was adorning the front of the hoodie, and the zipper that ran down the middle of it was broken up. The end of the hood, which was pulled down, lay close to the center of his back. Naruto didn't wear the samurai sandals he had previously worn or shinobi sandals. Instead, he wore gleaming black boots that made a squeaking sound with each step. As if this weren't strange enough, Mizuki noticed 2 things that alarmed him, despite the fact that they might be contradictory given his recent acquisitions. As you can see, Naruto has blood-red fox ears on top of his head and a medium-sized bushy foxtail that emerges from under his jacket. Mizuki would be envious of them for one straightforward reason if he didn't detest Naruto with all of his heart. Any kunoichi would scream, "Kawaii," and glomp Naruto to their chests if they saw him that way. Naruto's eyes glistened with childlike wonder as he surveyed his surroundings after undergoing a transformation. His eyes finally settled on Mizuki, who was still in shock and was staring at him with his mouth open. The newly dubbed Naru said, "Hi, I'm Naru, wanna piwe?" With a big, naive smile on his face and joyful eyes, despite the fact that he was missing a few teeth. Naru blinked owlishly, lowered his head, and gave Mizuki a serious examination. Ordinarily, his mind would have connected Mizuki with enemy when he looked at him. But because of his immature mindset, Naru saw Mizuki's feline features somewhat differently than the average person would. With his arms out to his sides, seemingly requesting an embrace, and an even bigger smile on his face, Naru uttered a single word that deeply unsettled Mizuki. Kitty. Mizuki gazed at the location where Naru had stood before he seemingly vanished into thin air. Where on earth did he disappear to? Mizuki thought as he searched his surroundings for the location of the little bastard's disappearance. This abruptly stopped when he felt a weight suddenly land on his shoulders. Before he could question this, he experienced unbearable pain coming from his feline ears. Mizuki screamed in agony and flailed around wildly, the pain causing him to become somewhat delirious. After a minute or two of this, Mizuki heard what he thought was the sound of a child laughing. After connecting the dots, Mizuki was able to determine the source of his excruciating pain. Mizuki ripped Naru from his shoulders with his teeth clenched together and flung him to a tree. In response, Naru merely chuckled and let out a loud "wee" while soaring in the direction of a tree trunk. Instead of colliding with the tree as Mizuki had hoped, Naru twisted slightly in midair, grabbed the tree trunk as if to embrace it, and slid to the ground safely. "Damn it, you fucking demon, quit screwing with me. That's it, I've had enough of your tricks, I'm going to kill you," Mizuki yelled angrily while briefly massaging his sore ears before clenching his fists. With a bewildered expression on his face, Naru stared at Mizuki with his head tilted to the side, making any nearby women swoon. "Silly kitty tricks are for kids." 1. Naru laughed, which, judging by the twitch in his left eye, further enraged Mizuki. Without uttering a word, Mizuki charged at the perpetually content Naru, who stood motionless with his tail wagging joyfully behind him. Before long, Mizuki was standing directly in front of Naru, already aiming a knife blow at the cute chibi of an Arrancar. His arm was buried in the ground once more, but not as deeply as before, and his attack missed its mark. Mizuki easily tore his arm from the ground and swung at Naru, who leapt back 10 feet or so and greeted Mizuki with a joyful wave as he touched down. Mizuki retrieved 2 smoke bombs from one of his few surviving pouches and threw them at Naru's feet, blocking his view. Mizuki ran in the direction of Naru's precise location in the smoke cloud, taking advantage of his enhanced senses and his blindness. Naru was launched from the smoke cloud about 20 feet into the air when Mizuki swung out with a kick that managed to land on his face. "Why is the cat treating me so badly? I snuck up on him to keep him from running away, and all I wanted to do was pet him. What am I doing wrong?" As he floated in midair, with a stinging pain running through his cheek where Mizuki kicked him, Naru thought dejectedly. Mizuki interrupted Naru's internal conflict by grabbing him out of the air and yanking him toward him with all of his strength using chakra threads, too. As he watched Naru approach closer and closer until he was exactly where he wanted him, Mizuki smiled sadistically. With sick pleasure, Mizuki kneed Naru in the stomach after grabbing him by the front of his hoodie and extending his arm. Mizuki threw Naru slightly into the air, then raised his fist in retaliation and delivered a powerful blow that sent Naru hurtling backward. At least until Mizuki pulled him back with chakra threads and then punched him once more. This continued a few more times. To an outsider, this scene would appear to be a cruel variation of paddleball. Mizuki finally had enough of this and pulled the Naru toward him once more, a little sobbing. Mizuki took Naru by the head and slammed him to the ground rather than punching him away. Mizuki released Naru's head and reached for his throat, where he started to strangle our little hero. "This is it, demon. This is where I finally kill you for the humiliation you put me through. I can't tell you how long I've wanted to do this, every day having to resist the urge to snap your neck in class. But it's been worth it, all of it, leading up to this point now. Any last words, Kyubi?" Mizuki yelled in Naru's face, his eyes full of madness and drool streaming down his lips. In an attempt to get even the tiniest breath into his lungs, Naru sputtered and coughed. They fought hard to keep him, but they were gradually losing that battle, and Naru's lungs burned. It felt like his tiny heart was beating 100 miles per hour. He thrashed his arms and legs, doing everything he could to break free from Mizuki's vice. Like hold on his throat. The only thing visible was Mizuki's crazed smile as the tears streamed from his eyes and his vision flickered in and out as all light appeared to give way to darkness. He was the sound Mizuki heard Naru cough out, his voice hoarse. "What was that, demon? I can't hear you," Mizuki chuckled, easing his hold on Naru's throat as he approached Naru to listen to the demon's last words. As Mizuki heard Naru suffer at his hands, a vicious smile almost split his face in two. Though the corners of his eyes remained slightly blurry, Naru's vision nearly returned to normal as he gulped in as much air as he could. Mizuki was unaware that the agonized and dejected expression on his face had changed to a new one. Naru's usually gentle blue eyes turned into crimson pools of rage as a look of utter fury appeared. Mizuki was kicked in the chest by Naru, who shouted in his ear, "Bad, kitty," as he shot him flying toward the edge of the clearing. Mizuki thought, "What the hell? It felt like I just got hit by Tsunade." as his body shook back and forth on the ground like a stone skipping in a still pond. Additionally, Mizuki thanked Kami for using Animal Curse Seal, which strengthened his bones, as his spine would have otherwise broken like an Akamichi on Weight Watchers. His train of thought was cut short when Naru materialized beneath him and kicked him in the back, nearly breaking bones, sending him hurtling skyward. Naru scowled at Mizuki's quickly rising form before he burst into a recognizable cloud of organic smoke. Emerging from the smoke, Naruto leapt as high as he could and, with the help of a few sonidos, eventually reached Mizuki's current altitude. With a vicious grin on his face, Naruto materialized directly above the quickly falling Mizuki. "Well, Tora. Teme, I hope you enjoyed that, because that was your last chance. Now it's my turn. Oh, and when you arrived in hell, tell them Uzumaki Naruto send you. Because by the time I kick the bucket, hell is going to be overflowing with arrogant assholes like you." Naruto said ominously, his fist raised for release. After giving his due, Naruto swung his fist, and his volley of strikes started. Punch after punch, kick after kick, the attacks never stopped, and as soon as one hit the mark, two more were planned. Every pore in Mizuki's body was filled with pain, which seemed to worsen with each savage blow. Naruto's attack resulted in bruises, blood splatters, hell, and even a few broken bones. Mizuki saw Naruto's arms and legs as little more than blurs, and all she could do was accept it. With each blow Naruto delivered, their fall toward the quickly approaching ground was only accelerated. The air rushed past Mizuki and Naruto as they stared at each other with hatred, their hair flowing and twisting. Right then, the only sounds that could be heard were the wind blowing past them and Naruto's coat flapping. Naruto delivered a vicious axe kick that sent Mizuki hurtling toward the ground below as the ground approached, and he swiftly charged chakra into his leg. With explosive speed, Mizuki smashed into the surrounding forest, obscuring himself from view as his body tore whole trees from the ground and a cloud of dust formed. Naruto watched the smoke cloud carefully as he landed on the ground, which had spider web cracks emanating from its epicenter. Naruto was informed that Mizuki was regrettably still alive by the sound of pained grunting and the movement of lumber. However, when the smoke cleared, it became clear that he was by no means in perfect shape. Mizuki was clutching his stomach and ribs while taking deep, painful breaths while leaning on one of the few trees that remained standing after his collision. As he moved his head even slightly, blood poured down the left side of his face and continued to drip onto the floor. Naruto was unable to determine whether Mizuki's right eye was glaring at him because his left eye was closed due to an injury or to keep the blood streaming down his face from blinding him. Blood splattered on the ground or dripped on Mizuki as it trickled down from his busted lip and the sides of his mouth. Mizuki's body was covered in cuts and bruises, with his face and chest suffering the most. Like wooden shrapnel, Mizuki's body was embedded with countless wood fragments, from small splinters to massive pieces of bark that pierced his flesh. His body appeared to have been heavily treated by an acupuncturist who had access to Mokuton, wood release, but from what Naruto could see, Mizuki's most severe injury from his crash landing was a massive piece of wood that got stuck deep in his right calf. As it moved toward the ground, warm blood seeped down Mizuki's leg, turning his trousers a deep red. As he attempted to move, Mizuki screamed in pain and collapsed to his hands and knees, gasping for air. Mizuki turned to look at the source of his excruciating pain, the shard of wood that nearly mocked him for the extent of the wound. Mizuki grimaced as he reached back and tightly grasped the shard, gritting his teeth. When his hand touched his leg, the nerves in it blazed, and the pain was so great that he nearly lost his grip. Mizuki screamed in agony as he tore a shard from his calf, leaving a huge hole that was leaking blood. Mizuki stood up slowly while removing as much pressure as he could from his right leg, panting from exertion. Mizuki lifted his head and looked at Naruto again, who looked at him as if he were insignificant. Mizuki's claws tore grooves into the tree he was leaning against as he yelled, "Damn you, you filly monster. I will not be treated like third-class trash." Mizuki let go of the tree and staggered forward, barely keeping his feet. However, Mizuki's body was forced forward into a berserker charge by sheer willpower, as one could charge with a limp anyhow. Despite Mizuki's legs' protests, he chose to ignore the pain that was coursing through his body because his anger was making him oblivious to it. Unfortunately for Mizuki, he would have been aware of the intense pain coming from his chakra coils if he had been listening. Naruto made the decision to finally put an end to this after sighing at Mizuki's pathetic attempt to charge him. Naruto dashed in the direction of the somewhat charging Mizuki and dodged a flimsy blow to the head. Naruto swiftly unwrapped his sword and skillfully cut through Mizuki's hamstrings, sending him to his knees in agony. Naruto simultaneously leapt over Mizuki's backhand, sheathed his sword, and collected Ryotsu into his dark red energy coated fist. He blisted the motionless Mizuki when he thought he had gathered enough. Naruto stopped 5 to 10 feet from Mizuki's exposed back and clocked his glowing fist backwards. With a single word that signaled Mizuki's demise, Naruto threw his arm forward. Bala. He then unleashed the stored Ryotsu and aimed the glowing bullet of death straight at Mizuki's spine. All Mizuki could do was blink before the bala touched him. Mizuki screamed in pain as his entire world was filled with pain, and the clearing was momentarily illuminated by a huge explosion of red energy. Mizuki fell forward, exhausted, his eyes wide open and blood, spittle streaming from his mouth. With his hands tucked into his pockets, Naruto approached Mizuki's helpless, prone body with composure. The smell of Mizuki's cooking flesh assaulted Naruto's nose, causing him to grimace a little. He inspected Mizuki's shattered body and the harm his bala had caused. When the smoke eventually cleared from Mizuki's back, a sizable scar that covered a sizable section of his back and was slightly steaming was visible. With a side kick to Mizuki, Naruto questioned, "Hey, are you dead yet, Tora?" "Teme?" Mizuki responded to him with a pained moan. Naruto let out a sign and flipped Mizuki onto his back with his foot. He smiled a little at the yell that came out of Mizuki's mouth as his back hit the floor. The sound of Naruto carefully drawing his sword distracted Mizuki from the agony. Before Naruto even considered killing Mizuki with his sword, an unexpected event occurred. Suddenly, Mizuki began to scream in agony as steam began to escape from his body and his arms and legs began flailing on the ground. "What is this?" Every cell in his body screamed as if it were being immersed in acid, Mizuki thought. Like a bag of worms trying to get out, his muscles pulsated and contracted. This continued for a short while before his body began to regress. Slowly but surely, his muscles began to give way and deteriorate. His fangs and claws shrank to the size of a human. Mizuki progressively grew smaller and withered, releasing more steam with every second that went by. Mizuki looked like a mummified corpse or an extremely old man by the time the transformation wore off. His entire body appeared to be covered in wrinkles and cracks, and his skin had a purplish tint. It appeared as though his bloodshot eyes were protruding from his skull as the region surrounding them sank slightly. In a metaphorical sense, the muscles surrounding his body had virtually crumbled, leaving him nothing but skin and bones. His light gray hair turned completely white. His body was in such pain that Mizuki could hardly stand it. He was having trouble breathing. He started coughing, but it stopped after a short while, and blood spurted from his mouth. "What does this mean?" "Orochimaru. Sama claimed that this was the ultimate physical jutsu and that I would be unstoppable with it, but I don't understand. Did he betray me? No. There must have been a mistake." Mizuki barely lifted his head to look at his now frail body, thinking to himself, "I have to find him and get him to fix this." Naruto looked at Mizuki, who was now defenseless, and said in a somewhat patronizing tone, "This is new. Just when I thought you couldn't weaker, you go and prove me wrong." Mizuki's eyes moved from his weak body to the smirking Naruto, who was standing there staring down at him with curiosity and laughter. With all the anger he could muster at the moment, Mizuki screamed, This is all your fault. You're the reason I'm like this, you monster. Why couldn't you just lay down and die?" Naruto responded in a serious tone, devoid of any hint of mockery or sadism, "No, Mizuki. This is on your head. You did this to yourself in some pitiful pursuit of power. And for what? To kill me. To kill Iruka. Sensei. I don't know whether to hate you with all my heart or to simply pity you." Naruto threw his arm forward after saying his due and stabbed Mizuki in the chest. Mizuki stared in horror at the cold steel blade that was now embedded in his chest, slowly killing him. As Naruto withdrew his blade from Mizuki's chest, blood spurted from the wound. Mizuki attempted to halt the bleeding by putting his hands on the wound and swiftly raising his arms. With a slight sneer on his face, Naruto looked at Mizuki in an attempt to save himself. Naruto sheathed his sword, swung on his heel, and began to leave the dying Mizuki after shaking his head at him. He took 2 steps or so before Mizuki saw him walking away. Mizuki's ego took a serious hit when he saw Naruto leave him as if he was done, so he screamed, "Don't you walk away from me, demon, we're not done here." Mizuki's body erupted in rage at the demon's boldness. He left as if he had already won, knowing that he wasn't done as long as Mizuki was still breathing. Naruto stopped in his tracks and looked over his shoulder, saying, "Oh, we're done here, you're going to bleed soon enough, face Teme. I won, you lost." He heard Mizuki laughing just as he was about to continue walking. Mizuki was indeed laughing, not in a ha sense, but rather as if someone were having a mental breakdown. After a minute or two, Mizuki stopped laughing, and a huge, crazy smile appeared on his face. The fact that his teeth were red from all the blood that had gushed from his mouth during their fight only made it more unsettling. Mizuki remarked, you may have beaten me, today, but there will be others, just like me, who won't rest, until you're dead and rotting. You know the village will never accept you, demon, no matter what you do. They will always hate you, just as much as I do. It's only a matter of time until one of them kills you, so that I will always prevail. Mizuki stared at Naruto while spouting off the truth of the situation, his twisted smile never going away. Naruto chose to cut off this blowhard's speech because he had had enough of Mizuki's lip flapping. Naruto swiftly turned around, pulled out his katana, and walked over to Mizuki. With a single blow, he severed Mizuki's head. As Mizuki's face locked into a horrified expression, she saw the decapitated head rolling on the ground. Naruto's katana spilled blood onto the ground below. With his eyes fixed on Mizuki's head, Naruto muttered, "They can try," as though responding to his earlier tirade. Naruto exhaled through his nose, cleaned Mizuki's pant leg and his katana of blood, and then sheathed it again. Just as he turned to leave to see how Iruka was doing, his body froze, and then he sensed that he was being drawn in some direction. The mindscape of Naruto. Naruto thought out loud, what the hell just happened, and briefly rubbed his curved forehead before pausing. Naruto looked around and knew where he was at once, shaking his head to shake off the cobwebs. Naruto proceeded along the vast passageways of his mind, then turned right, and suddenly he found himself at the Kyuubi's cage. The rest of the Espada stood in front of the enormous gate, their faces changing as they waited for him. They all stared at him for a moment, their expressions shifting from pride to apathy. Naruto raised one hand languidly in greeting and said, "What's up?" Neliel had already made him participate in one of her hugs of pleasant death before he could blink. Naruto was at a standstill. On the one hand, Neliel's embrace was inadvertently crushing him. On the other hand, Naruto's face was practically tucked into her ample breasts as she hugged him. What a conundrum. Unaware that Naruto's face was flushing, Neliel exclaimed, "I'm so proud of you, Naruto-kun. You beat that guy all by yourself. We would never know if it was due to oxygen deprivation or being so close to her chest." Harabelle rubbed the bridge of her nose and said, "Neliel, please release Naruto-san before he dies from oxygen deprivation." She wondered how Neliel never seemed to notice that she was giving someone an excessive amount of hug. For her part, Neliel took a brief break from squeezing Naruto and glanced at Harabelle, blinking in perplexity, before turning back to Naruto, whose face was currently a lovely shade of blue, struggling to breathe in vital air while barely remaining conscious. Neliel screamed in concern, "Naruto, I am so sorry. Please don't die on me." She unintentionally squeezed harder than she had before, which caused Naruto to groan in pain. At last, Neliel released Naruto, who collapsed on his hands and knees, gasping for vital oxygen. Naruto was eventually able to stand after consuming enough oxygen to resume his normal function and getting a lot of excuses from the green-haired Arrancar. With his back leaning against one of the sewer's walls, Naruto questioned his tenants, "Okay, now that's over. What do guys need?" As he pushed himself off the cage's bars and stood directly in front of Naruto, Grimmjow muttered, "We called here for two things. 1. Congrats on beating the overgrown housecat, though I could have beaten him a lot quicker." Grimmjow continued, ignoring Kyuubi's menacing growl. "Secondly, I don't know about Fuzzy over there, but I refuse to live a freaking sewer. So brought you here, to fix this into something livable while we're stuck in here." When Naruto turned to face the other Espada, they all nodded in agreement, indicating their agreement. With a raised eyebrow, Naruto leaned sideways and met Kyuubi's gaze directly. When Naruto asked, "Can I actually do that?" Kyuubi gave him a facepalm and muttered, "How a supposed genius can still be so stupid," to himself. "Yes. You hairless ape, you can. It just requires a lot of concentration and a mental image of what you want to create. Now hurry up, Ninjin. I've lived in this sewer for 13 years and I've had enough of it." Kyuubi's tolerance for Naruto's mindscape had finally run out. With his eyes closed and his brow furrowed in concentration, Naruto complained, all right, geez, give me a minute here and I'll see what I can do." After a minute or so, Naruto was surrounded by a brilliant white light that spread out to fill the room. The Espada and Bijou were so taken aback by what they saw when the light finally faded into oblivion that Neliel and Grimmjow's mouths dropped a little. A massive, opulent compound set in a dense, picturesque forest replaced what had once been a dank, dark, and depressing maze-like sewer. The compound was huge. If one were to estimate its size, it would be about 3/4 that of the Hyuga compound, although it felt more homey. The entire complex was encircled by enormous limestone walls. The compound's main entrance was stunning, with elaborate red interiors and a stunning gold exterior. Both of the big brass lion heads that served as doorknobs had a gold ring in their mouths. They were met with enormous traditional style hones as they opened the doors, or in Kyuubi's case, peered over the wall. In the center of the compound stood a massive main house, surrounded by about a dozen smaller structures. As he surveyed his surroundings, Grimjow remarked approvingly, "Not bad Gaki, not bad at all." To be honest, this location outperformed Hueco Mundo on even its worst day. Grimjow reflected, "Hell, any place is better than Hueco Mundo." Kyuubi stretched its legs, relieved to have some space after 13 years of being confined in a small cage. "I hate to break up your little sightseeing trip, but I sense someone coming this way. Listen Gaki, we need to talk later, we'll call back here when you go to sleep. We have much to discuss," Kyuubi said. He could live without the enormous collar that chained him to a nearby tree around his neck, but it was still preferable. As his mental avatar vanished, Naruto said, with a rare genuine smile, "Before I go, I want to say thank you. Without your help Iruka Sensei and I would be nothing more than ash in a crater. I hope one day to return the favor." The remaining Espada left to explore their new home or, in Stark's case, find a peaceful spot to nap after they had recovered from the initial shock of receiving gratitude. Random clearing in the real world. 2 minutes later. Naruto shook off the last of his trance by shaking his head and blinking a few times. Naruto quickly recalled what Kyuubi had told him, grabbed the handle of his katana, and scanned the area for the approaching people. He didn't have to wait long. In the middle of the now destroyed clearing, many swirls of leaves appeared about 30 seconds after he regained consciousness. In anticipation of the worst, Naruto clenched the handle of his sword tighter and narrowed his eyes at his. Naruto was able to see his possible allies, or enemies, clearly after the Shunshin no Jutsu subsided. Kyuubi discovers that the people he senses are a group of Anbu, all of whom appear to be staring at him. And extremely relieved. Looking, Iruka shoved the Anbu aside before either side could move. "Naruto!" Iruka exclaimed joyfully as he ran toward his gratefully still breathing student, wearing a broad smile. As he hurried forward, Iruka thought, "Thank Kami, you're okay, Naruto." Without even thinking, Naruto jogged towards Iruka while grinning broadly. "Sensei," he muttered in delight. Relieved that each other was still alive, the teacher and student gave each other a quick hug. With a sigh of relief, Naruto said, "Iruka Sensei, you're alive." He then unintentionally gave Iruka a stronger hug than he meant to, slightly crushing her. His ribs were not broken, but they were still extremely sore, and this was making them worse. He gritted his teeth in agony. Iruka grunted, "Naruto, please relax on the hug. My ribs are still sore." Naruto instantly released Iruka and muttered a quick apology. Iruka decided to do something he had been putting off for a while, thinking, "He's ready," as he grinned down at Naruto. Iruka calmly said, "Naruto, close your eyes for a second." For a brief moment, Naruto appeared nervous, but he trusted Iruka and continued. After a few moments of waiting and hearing the sound of cloth being unfurled, Naruto felt a cloth being tied around his forehead. With joy and excitement in his voice, Iruka said, "Okay Naruto, open your eyes." When Naruto opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was Iruka's happy face, but something appeared to be missing. His Hitai.8. As Naruto felt cold metal against his fingers and reached up to the cloth around his head, he thought incredulously, "No way, he didn't." With an already formed and ultimately correct conclusion, Naruto's eyes widened slightly. He had received his Hitai.8 from Iruka. Iruka put a proud hand on Naruto's shoulders and grinned broadly as he said, "Congratulations, Naruto, you finally graduate." Iruka stopped grinning as soon as he didn't hear Naruto embrace him or cheer in joy. Naruto's expression was one of intense focus. As he slowly moved his thumb back and forth across the metal, a million thoughts raced through his head. Iruka worriedly asked, "Naruto, what's wrong?" His favorite student had finally graduated, but why did he appear conflicted about it? Naruto quickly replied, "Nothing wrong Sensei, thank you," as he reached behind him to secure the headband. Iruka grinned at this, but she was also wondering in her mind what Naruto was thinking. Neiko decided it was time to get down to business and ended this now awkward reunion. Neiko headed over to Naruto and Iruka, nodding to her fellow Anbu who had defended the perimeter around them. Uncertain of her intentions at the time, Naruto slowly grasped his sword as he watched Neiko approach them. As soon as Neiko realized this, she thought quickly and raised her arms to demonstrate that she was unarmed, at least not that she was prepared to use against him. Narrowing his eyes, Naruto tightened his hold on his katana while remaining completely vigilant. Neiko and Naruto gazed at one another without flinching. At least Naruto thought she was, even though it was somewhat difficult to tell because of the mask. Iruka interrupted their stare. Off by placing a hand on Naruto's shoulders to get his attention. Iruka stated firmly, "Naruto, stop, you can trust her, without their help I doubt I would even be alive right now." Naruto searched his eyes closely for any signs of fear or deception. Naruto let go of his sword and, with a sigh, relaxed his body a little after thankfully finding none. Neko reassured our protagonist, "You don't have to worry, Uzumaki-san. My men and I are fully aware of Mizuki's deception. The other Anbu are being informed as we speak, and soon everyone will know that you are innocent in this matter." Unbeknownst to them, Neko was looking with mild amazement at the damage done to the clearing. Her gaze swept over every tiny bit of damage to the battlefield before settling on Mizuki's headless, withered body. Neko asked, quietly nodding to her fellow Anbu to seal up Mizuki's body, "I assume you're the reason Mizuki no longer has a head?" Neko's gaze swept over what was left of Mizuki, and with the help of her scant medical knowledge, she deduced that Mizuki had been severely beaten prior to being severed. "He wasn't so tough," Naruto said, gazing down at Mizuki's severed head with a small, self-assured smirk. Neko finished enclosing Mizuki's remains in a scroll and fastening it to her belt holster. "I see, congratulations are in order, but for now Hokage Sama has requested both of your presence right now, to get your official mission statements," she exclaimed. The mention of the man who destroyed his life caused liquid-hot rage to flow through Naruto's veins, causing his face to darken significantly. The same man, who was too frail to stop him from becoming Konoha's devoted small attack dog. He changed forms once more during his mental struggle, which Naruto was unaware of but Neko and Iruka could clearly see. Naruto opened his eyes, which could be described as a cold, empty void, and nodded to Neko after they exchanged a brief glance as though to ask, "Do you know what's happening?" Iruka and Naruto put one hand on each of Neko's shoulders without a word. Neko nodded to herself, then muttered, "Shunshin no Jutsu," and formed a ram seal, sending them flying. Office of the Hokage, Konoha Academy. Sarutobi Hiruzen was a multifaceted person. He was an individual who had led a long and adventurous life, accomplishing numerous things that shaped his identity. Hiruzen was hailed as a prodigy by his clan members from the day of his birth. He and his teammates had the unique privilege of having Senju Tobirama, the Nadaime Hokage, as their sensei. His sensei personally designated him the Sandaime Hokage during the First Great Shinobi War, who gave his life to battle the Kinkaku force by himself in order for him and his group to survive. After taking on the duty, Hiruzen eventually guided Konoha to victory in each of the 3 Great Shinobi Wars. He was one of the few people who could claim to have survived each of the 3 Great Shinobi Wars. He earned the titles of Shinobi no Kami, God of Shinobi, and the Professor during those conflicts. He was given a Genin team prior to the Second Great Shinobi War. Sanshou no Hanzo, Hanzo of the Salamander, would later make this team known as the Densetsu no Sanin throughout the elemental nations. He married Bawako, the love of his life, in his later years, and the two of them had 2 wonderful children, whom he cherished dearly. Years later, he would have a grandchild named Konohamaru from one of them. He believed his time as Hokage would come to an end when he appointed his successor. But on that one, fate didn't seem to agree with him. The village was attacked 13 years ago by the Kyuubi no Kitsune, who killed hundreds, if not thousands, of both civilians and shinobi. He discovered early on that one of them was his stunning wife, Bawako. Nothing the village did could slow the creature down, no matter how hard they tried. Only with the tremendous sacrifice of his successor, Namikaze Minato, was the beast vanquished. In order to seal the raging bijou into his newborn son, Naruto, he offered his soul to the Shinigami, death god. Hiruzen was thrust back into the role of Hokage, with little to no time to mourn his wife's death. He would never forget the emergency council meeting he was called into almost immediately. He arguably made the most significant error of his Hokage tenure during this meeting. Other than avoiding the death of his errant pupil Orochimaru, the choice he made that evening would always be remembered as perhaps his worst mistake. 5 years would pass before Hiruzen would personally experience the repercussions of his choice. Hiruzen made a valiant effort to make amends and improve Naruto's life after that day. For a few years, it had some success, but ultimately, it would all be in vain. Indeed, although Sarutobi Hiruzen was many things, he wasn't the professor, the renowned Hokage, or the proud father at this time. No, at that moment, he was nothing more than an elderly man filled with regret who had to deal with the fallout from his actions. An Anbu wearing an Inu mask knelt beside Hiruzen and lowered his head, saying, "Hokage Sama, Neko has just arrived with Uzumaki-san and Amino-san." Hiruzen sighed and said, "Thank you Inu," dismissed, without even glancing at Inu, who gave a fleeting nod before appearing to vanish. What I wouldn't give to go back and fix this, Hiruzen thought to himself, reliving all of his mistakes concerning Naruto's welfare. Before turning his chair around and taking a close look at his village, Hiruzen sagged into it. He saw the village's quiet nightlife, the street lamps lighting it up, and the Anbu agents going about their nightly business. For a moment, a tiny warmth filled his chest as his thoughts shifted to the villagers sleeping soundly. He turned his attention from the village to the Hokage monument to his left. Hiruzen's small smile quickly turned into a deep frown as the warmth in his chest gave way to a chilly, hollow feeling in his soul. Minato, I apologize. Your legacy is still being shamed by the village, who have spit on your sacrifice. You have been let down by this village, I failed you. They alienate and despise Naruto, despite your trust that we would protect him and treat him like the hero he is. With years of suppressed guilt and regret rising to the surface of his mind, Hiruzen thought dejectedly, I can only ask for you and Kushina's forgiveness in the afterlife. Hiruzen swiftly turned his chain so that his back was to the Hokage monument and forcibly ripped his eyes away. To little effect, Hiruzen shook his head in a desperate attempt to drive his melancholy thoughts out of his mind. Knowing that this meeting had been planned for a long time, Hiruzen stared at his office door, waiting for Naruto to arrive. He didn't have to wait long because his office door was suddenly kicked down. Hiruzen prepared for the worst as he clutched an emergency kunai from beneath his desk as his door nearly exploded in a shower of splinters. In less than a second, his own Anbu bodyguards appeared in front of his desk, their swords at the ready. And emotionless. Looking, Naruto emerged from the ruins of what had once been his door, ignoring the Anbu brandishing their swords at him as he calmly made his way to his desk. With his and his fellow Anbu's swords just a few centimeters from Naruto's neck, Inu growled, "Stay where you are or we will kill you." Instead of acknowledging Inu's threat, Naruto just looked straight into Hiruzen's eyes. The office fell into a tense silence that no one dared to break for any reason. You couldn't even use a kunai to cut through the tension-filled atmosphere. Hiruzen finally released the tension by lowering his head with a sorrowful sigh and closing his eyes. Hiruzen lifted his head and turned to face Naruto, gathering his courage and suppressing his regret. When Hiruzen swallowed the lump in his throat and put the emergency kunai away, he said, "Hello Naruto-kun." As Hiruzen's eyes met Naruto's again, a chill ran up his spine. He saw Naruto's eyes as two sapphire abysses, unending and icy like a pit. The sheer amount of anger concealed behind the icy emptiness, however, was what really startled Hiruzen. Naruto responded, "Sarutobi. We need to talk," in a tone that was emotionless and icy, making Sarutobi's eyes widen a little. And earlier 3 minutes, the Anbu patrolling the rooftops was the only person awake in Konoha's silent streets. As the wind carried them, the moths and fireflies danced in the air, seemingly oblivious to the surroundings. Almost unexpectedly, a whirlwind of leaves appeared in front of the Hokage mansion, disrupting the calm atmosphere for a short while. The whirlwind quickly subsided into nothingness, exposing Neko, Iruka, and a slightly lightheaded Naruto. Looking down at the now steady Naruto, Neko said with a hint of amusement, "Don't worry Uzumaki-san. Everyone is a little dizzy after experiencing the Shunshin no Jutsu for the first time." After giving her a small glare, Naruto shook his head and continued. Iruka was about to respond when he clutched his aching ribs and groaned in agony. Neko stated bluntly, her hands firmly on her hips, "Okay, Amino-san. I let you make sure that Uzumaki-san was safe, but now you're going to the hospital to rest." Iruka appeared prepared to argue, but any objection she might have had was crushed by what seemed to be a severe glare from Neko. Iruka turned to Naruto and said, "Naruto, team placements are in a week, I expect you to be there on time." Naruto nodded in response to Iruka's well-crafted request. Iruka nodded to Neko that he was ready after giving Naruto a quick pat on the shoulder. Neko put her hand on Iruka's shoulder and quickly waved them away after saying, "Uzumaki-san. I have to take Amino-san to the hospital. Go ahead and Hokage. Sama your report, I'll be there shortly." After a moment of staring at the location where they vanished, Naruto turned around and headed up the Hokage mansion's stairs. Sarutobi, Naruto thought scornfully, growing more and more irate with every step. The memories Naruto's Dobi self had of Sarutobi, including every smile, laugh, and minute he spent with the elderly jerk, were continuously replayed in his mind. For all those years, Sarutobi had been deceiving him and making fun of him by acting like a grandfather in light of his actions. Anger flooded Naruto's veins, causing his breathing and heart rate to increase with every memory. Like an Akamichi running a 10-mile marathon, his heart felt like it was beating at 100 miles per hour. Naruto was furious by the time he got to the top of the stairs, but it was difficult to tell because his face hardly displayed any emotion. When Naruto saw the door to Sarutobi's office, he paused briefly, his face a picture. Perfect mask of intense focus. After a few moments of staring at the door, Naruto closed his eyes and shut out the outside world. He basked in the somehow reassuring emptiness while the world around him was nothing but a calming blackness. Naruto inhaled deeply and exhaled while listening to his heartbeat incredibly quickly. His ears were filled with the steady pounding until it was the only sound he could hear. His heartbeat started to slow down with every breath. His senses were not being overtaken by the overwhelming rage that had momentarily overcome him, but it was gradually fading. Naruto opened his eyes slowly and let out a final breath as his heartbeat returned to normal, the black emptiness dissipating until he was once again in the real world. Naruto narrowed his eyes and chose to follow Grimmjow's example, channeling the anger still pulsing through his veins. Naruto wasted no time in pushing his leg forward toward the wooden obstacle after raising it to about his waist. With as little resistance as a toothpick, Naruto's foot practically exploded outwards into Sarutobi's office the instant it touched the door. Naruto walked in calmly as pieces of the now demolished door flew into the office like shrapnel. He glanced at Sarutobi's Anbu guards, who were all aiming their swords at his throat, for a moment before returning his attention to the man who had destroyed his life. Naruto found it more difficult to resist the impulse to decapitate Sarutobi right then and there with every step he took. An Inu, masked Anbu with black hair, angrily demanded, "Stay where you are or we will kill you." Naruto had to fight the urge to scoff at the idiot or roll his eyes. When he was finally standing right in front of Sarutobi's desk, Naruto stopped, ignoring the dog. Masked Anbu. Naruto ignored the blades that were ready to pierce his neck and kill him if he blinked in the wrong direction. Instead, he completely ignored the Anbu and concentrated on Sarutobi, with whom he had locked eyes in a stare-down. Naruto kept his gaze fixed on the jerk who referred to himself as a cage and thought to himself, pitiful. To Naruto, Sarutobi appeared to be a pitiful old man who had long since given up, rather than the sage and strong Sandaime Hokage. After staring for what seemed like hours, Sarutobi finally lowered his head and let out a melancholy sigh. Naruto curtly replied, "Sarutobi, we need to talk," taking some pleasure in Sarutobi's shocked expression. "Today, Naruto-kun, what happened to you? Why do you look like this?" Hiruzen asked, barely able to speak, gesturing to his Anbu bodyguards to move aside. They reluctantly nodded and vanished back into the shadows, prepared to defend their leader at any time. Hiruzen sat there staring at Naruto, who had just given him a glare instead of responding to his query. "Why?" Naruto growled, lowering his head slightly and covering his eyes with his bangs, totally ignoring Hiruzen's question. Naruto's body began to tremble from the anger that was rising once more, and he clenched his fists tightly. He was unaware that his skin was getting tanner by the second and that his hair was beginning to return to its natural glowing hue. Hiruzen stammered out, Naruto, I," with a shocked expression on his face as he watched Naruto transform before his very eyes. With his body bent forward and his face a mask of rage that no one had ever seen, Naruto screamed in Hiruzen's face, "Why did you betray me?" The desk's legs nearly gave way under the weight of Naruto's hands as they slammed together with such force. When Naruto later took his hands off the desk, it was evident that his hands had left indentations in the wood, causing cracks to appear where they had struck the desk. The Anbu that had been concealed in the office immediately sprang into action, their swords ready to kill Naruto. Naruto acknowledged the Anbu's swords tickling his throat, unlike the last time. Naruto took a few deep breaths through his nose, took his hands off Hiruzen's desk, and leaned back up. However, he continued to glare at Hiruzen with all of his hatred. Having never witnessed such rage from a single individual outside of combat, Hiruzen could only gape in disbelief. "You have every right to hate me, Naruto. But you must realize that I was under a lot of pressure that night from everything that was happening, including Minato's death and all of the causality reports, so I didn't have time to think. When they called me into the council meeting, it was a flurry of activity, with one side calling for your death and the other urging that you be adopted, trained, and kept safe. I didn't want to seal your memories, but the elders and the civilian council believed you were too unstable at the time to be trusted with that much power. Especially after the incident with your sensei, they feared you were a ticking time bomb. Naruto, I know I don't deserve it, but please forgive this foolish old man." Hiruzen begged Kami, hoping that after everything that had happened, Naruto would somehow forgive him. Even though he knew deep down that he wasn't deserving of forgiveness, he still made an effort. For a moment, Naruto's expression was split between surprise and rage as he gazed at Hiruzen. As he began to unintentionally release a tremendous amount of Ki, killing intent, and spiritual pressure, a combination he would later refer to as KP, killing pressure, Naruto growled out between his gritted teeth. "You're sorry." Hiruzen and his Anbu bodyguards felt an unbelievable amount of pressure on their bodies almost immediately. "You had me be raised as a weapon, trained day in and day out to be the best I could be. Then a couple years later, you have my abilities sealed, effectively leaving me defenseless against the idiotic sheep that call themselves villagers. All because a group of whiny, power-hungry civilians thought I was unstable. You essentially threw me to the wolves of the village, defenseless as they beat and abused me for years. While you yourself did nothing, the most you did was give them a slap on the wrist and say, "No," only for them go back and do it again. After everything you've done to me, all you can say is you're sorry?" Naruto yelled out in outrage, the pressure in the doubling the size. They were barely able to hold their swords, and the Anbu holding their blades to Naruto's neck began to buckle under the strain. They were fighting to stay upright, their knees trembling, about to buckle. Every muscle in their bodies was being used to keep them upright as their entire body trembled from the strain. What's this pressure about? As he gritted his teeth behind his porcelain mask, Inu thought to himself. Naruto's katana was only a few centimeters away from Hiruzen's throat in a split second. To his credit, Hiruzen was unflappable despite Naruto's blade tickling his throat. Hiruzen looked at Naruto, who was glaring at him with such a fiery rage, and then back at the blade that was about to cut his throat. Unconsciously raising the tension in the office, Naruto questioned angrily, "Where is the real Sarutobi Hiruzen?" As he advanced his blade toward Hiruzen's neck, Naruto gripped the handle of his katana until his knuckles went white. With a grunt, the Anbu surrounding them collapsed to one knee as their swords clattered pointlessly to the ground because they could no longer bear the tremendous pressure on their bodies. With a bewildered expression on his face, Hiruzen said, "What are you talking about, Naruto-kun? I'm right here." He was cautious not to move too much for fear of cutting himself on Naruto's blade. "Bullshit. There is no way in hell you are the real Sarutobi Hiruzen. I refuse to accept that someone as pathetic as you could be the shinobi no kami. Sarutobi Hiruzen is supposed to be the pinnacle of what a shinobi should be, what they should strive to be. I don't see that in you. All I see is a pathetic old man trying to deny his failures. Like I said, where is Sarutobi Hiruzen?" Naruto shouted, staring into Hiruzen's eyes as if he was searching for the answer. This continued for a short while before Naruto, wearing a disgusted expression, took his blade out of Hiruzen's throat and sheathed it. Everyone in the office sighed with relief as Naruto took a deep breath and stopped radiating KP. Without delay, the Anbu snatched their blades from the ground and aimed them at Naruto again. With a sigh, Naruto shook his head, disappointed and angry at what Sarutobi had turned into. An enraged Inu blocked Naruto's path as he attempted to exit Hiruzen's office, causing him to spin on his heel. "Put your weapon down on the ground and your hands behind your head," Inu growled, enraged that he was powerless to defend his leader and that Naruto had eliminated him and his group without doing anything. At this, Naruto simply squinted and gripped his katana, ready to battle. "Inu, stand down," was Hiruzen's command, which surprised everyone in the office, but Inu more than anyone else. Hiruzen's expression was a mixture of exhaustion and defeat, but despite his weariness, there was a good deal of force in his tone. As Hiruzen's order went against everything Anbu had been taught to be reasonable, Inu sputtered out, "Hokage Sama, you can't be serious. He's threatened your life twice now, and you want us to let him go?" With no indication in Hiruzen's face to suggest otherwise, Inu thought incredulously, "This can't be happening." After a great deal of hesitation, Inu and his fellow Anbu moved out of Naruto's way and slowly lowered their swords. Naruto just moved forward toward the shattered remains of the door without even giving Hiruzen a sidelong glance. But before Naruto could leave the office, he heard Hiruzen requesting that he wait, which caused him to halt. Hiruzen looked at Naruto and the Hitai.8 current that was wrapped around his head, hiding his forehead from view. "Naruto-kun, wait a moment. There's something I need to know. If you hate the village so much, then why did you accept Iruka's Hitai.8 knowing fully what it meant?" he asked inquisitively. Unbeknownst to Hiruzen, Naruto briefly lowered his head and had a focused expression as he attempted to explain it to himself. Naruto swiftly untied his Hitai.8 by reaching behind his head, letting his bangs partially conceal his eyes once more. With a lot of ideas and emotions racing through his mind, Naruto gazed at the headband he was holding tightly. Naruto looked at his image in the metal headband, as though it contained the answers he sought. Naruto did this for about a minute before closing his eyes and furrowing his brow in contemplation. Moments later, Naruto opened his eyes, his expression changing from one of intense concentration to one of steely determination. "I accepted his Hitai.8 for one simple reason, Sarutobi. When Iruka gave me his headband, he gave something far more valuable. He gave me his trust, something you and the councils apparently didn't. He acknowledged that I was an adult, worthy of defending Konoha, no matter how much pain it has caused me. I'll be honest here, Sarutobi, I don't hate this village. The principles it was founded on were admirable, naive, but admirable. No, I hate the corrupt and arrogant bastards that make up a significant portion of the population. It's only because of Iruka and a few other good people in the village that I don't leave this hellhole, Naruto said as he looked behind him at the, now, shocked Sarutobi, who took all this in with shame. Grabbing both ends of his headband, Naruto quickly retied to his head with a sharp tug. With his foot halfway through the doorway, Naruto was about to walk out again when he paused to say goodbye to Hiruzen. Let me be abundantly clear, Sarutobi, while I may protect this village, I will not be the villagers' punching bag any longer. If they try to attack me, I will not hesitate in the slightest to cut down in an instant. Knowing these bastards like I do, they will try to attack me, it's only a matter of time. Make no mistake, there will be blood, and it will be the blood of the ignorant and the corrupt. It will flow like a river through this village, washing away the trash that infests Konoha. This is my only warning, Sarutobi, get this village under control or I will, Naruto said ominously, firmly grasping his in his grasp. After saying that, Naruto moved forward, stepping over the pieces of the damaged door while the sound of wood crunching accompanied each step until he reached the doorway. Hiruzen slumped back into his chair, a tired and depressed sigh escaping his lips as Naruto's words throughout the right echoed in his head. Feeling all 69 years of his long life piling up on him, Hiruzen thought to himself, I'm getting too old for this. Naruto, I will make up for my past mistakes. His inner monologue, moping, was put on hold by the arrival of Neko, who appeared in the middle of the office in a puff of smoke. With one hand on the ground and the other gripping his bent knee, Neko lowered herself onto one knee and said, I apologize for being late, Hokage. Sama. I had to take Amino.san to the hospital because of his injuries. But she looked up from her spot on the floor when she didn't hear Hokage Sama answer. She noticed a strange scene in the office, including pieces of a broken door, a dejected Hokage, and an angry Inu. Did I miss something? Neko asked, perhaps the greatest understatement of the century, after witnessing all of this. Konoha Academy. Administration Office, the following day. This is interesting, Hiruzen muttered out to himself, as he glanced over 3 pages that made up Naruto's shinobi profile. However, each one featured a unique image of Naruto. The first one of them had a slightly smirking Naruto on it that was flipping off the camera. The final one was an extreme close up of Naru smiling and holding up a peace sign, while the second showed Naruto looking emotionless. As he tried to think of an explanation for Naruto's transformations, Hiruzen rubbed his head at this development, a slight headache starting to form. You need to get a better photographer, Sarutobi. It took almost an hour and a half just to get my picture taken. Whenever I tried sitting down for a picture, he would ask if I was fucking with him. Demented old bastard, I still don't know what the hell he's talking about, Naruto muttered to himself as he leaned back in his chair and gave Hiruzen a slight glare. Naruto, who hadn't had the most restful of nights, briefly closed his eyes and rubbed them to ease the slight ache they caused, as shown by the tiny, dark circles under his eyes and the yawn that came out of his mouth. Yes, I recall Genzo mentioning something like that. However, you'll have to retake the picture, Naruto. We cannot have something this vulgar on your shinobi registration, Hiruzen replied, as he took a long drag from his pipe while showing Naruto the first photo, recalling Genzo's colorful complaints concerning Naruto. Genzo claims that nearly every time he tried to take a picture of Naruto, he would randomly switch forms. Hell, it took Genzo about an hour to keep him motionless long enough to take a picture after he transformed into Naru. By the time he was done taking Naruto's pictures, Genzo was ready to rip his remaining hair out of his balding head and throttle him. Naruto growled, there is no way in hell I'm taking that picture again, Sarutobi. I wasted enough time that I could have been using to train, by the way, on that stupid picture. He looked Sarutobi in the eye, and after a brief moment of hesitation, Sarutobi met his gaze. As Naruto was about to continue arguing with Sarutobi, a cunning thought occurred to him. Yes, that will work well. Who would have thought that my Dobi self would ever contribute something of value, Naruto thought to himself, as a smirk made its way onto his face, a smirk that put Hiruzen on edge. Naruto muttered, Oiroke no Jutsu, sexy technique, 1, before a cloud of smoke momentarily engulfed him. When the smoke began to clear, Hiruzen saw something far better than the white-clad shinobi he had been speaking to. A stunning young woman, who just so happened to be nude, took Naruto's place. Her long, spiky blonde hair was pulled back into 2 pigtails atop her head, giving her a stunning appearance. She had deep, seductive, yet somehow innocent, blue eyes, a cute button nose and a small mouth, all framed by her heart-shaped face. He could only speculate because smoke obscured her best features, but she had a perfect hourglass figure, accentuated by a thin waist and large breasts. And plastered on her cheeks were Naruto's whisker marks. However, Hiruzen wasn't paying attention to those. No, he was drawn to look down. "You wouldn't make me retake that silly old picture, would you, Sarutobi?" Naruto winked her eye at him and giggled a little. Hiruzen watched, his face expressionless for a moment, blinking once or twice as though to check if his eyes were deceiving him. Hiruzen stared at Naruto for about 10 seconds before blood spurted out of his nose. He was flung backwards onto the ground by the force of his nosebleed, where he momentarily lost consciousness. Crude, slightly sexist, and highly effectual, overall not bad, Naruto thought to himself as he transformed back into his normal appearance. Naruto felt a tremendous amount of pain radiating from his forehead before he could feel proud of himself for defeating a cage in a single move. "Naruto, you will not be using that jutsu ever again, do I make myself clear?" Naruto instantly recognized the harsh voice that reverberated in his mind. "Harabel, is that you?" Naruto asked mentally, as his pain was reduced slightly, allowing him to think clearly. "Indeed, it is, but that isn't the main idea. It is unacceptable for our vessel to employ such perverted methods, so you are not allowed to use that technique ever again. There will be repercussions if I catch you using that move once more. Do I express myself clearly?" He could almost see Harabel's glare as she gave him a stern lecture, seemingly daring him to respond. With enough discernment to avoid arguing with a woman who could easily crush you, Naruto said in pain and fear, all right. I won't use that technique ever again." Naruto exhaled in relief at having avoided experiencing more of Harabel's wrath as he felt the pressure and pain leave his forehead. Despite getting a lecture from of his tenants in his head, Naruto smirked to himself as he looked at the unconscious and slightly twitching Sarutobi. However, Naruto's fun had to come to an end, seeing as how Hiruzen started stirring before groggily opening his eyes. After cleaning himself off, Hiruzen once again sat upright in his chair as he glanced at the slightly smug Naruto, who just smirked at him. As he wiped the last of the blood from his face, Hiruzen muttered, "So that was your patented Oiroke no Jutsu, very tricky, too tricky, I'm going to have list that as an S-rank forbidden jutsu." Hiruzen's surprisingly forceful statement, which actually shocked Naruto a little, was, "As I was saying, Naruto, I cannot accept this picture of you, it's much too vulgar. This photo is supposed to help out forces identify you, and if I didn't know who you were, just going by this picture, I would think you were nothing more than an arrogant punk. He's not as cowardly as I had assumed, huh? Maybe there is hope for you yet, Sarutobi," Naruto thought to himself, his respect for Hiruzen going up by the barest minimum. Filing the development away for later, Naruto decided he had spent enough time in the office for one day. Naruto sat up straight, his hands now securely in his jacket pockets, and said impatiently, "Okay, I'll take the fucking picture again. Are we done here? I have training I have to get back to." A small child threw open the office door before Hiruzen could respond. A short while ago, unknown to occupants of the room, a shadowed figure slid the door open slightly, just enough to peer into the room, watching intently for the time to strike. The figure thought to himself, wait for it, as he unconsciously tightened his hold on the shuriken. "This is it, I'm gonna defeat him this time," the figure thought to himself, as he recalled his numerous failed attempts to defeat his greatest foe. He had repeatedly failed to eliminate his target, but this time he succeeded. Oh no, this time he was going to do it, he was going to kill his target and finally realize his dream. Pumping himself up, the figure took several quick breaths. The figure threw open the door, his adrenaline pumping and his opportunity present. Present time. The young boy screamed, "G.San, I challenge you. I'm going to defeat you and become the Godem Hokage." As he ran in Hiruzen's direction, holding one or two shuriken tightly in his right hand. With a mask of unwavering resolve on his face, the young boy fixed Hiruzen with a glare. His few remaining muscles were taut and prepared to attack at any time. With every step bringing him one step closer to his objective, the young boy thought to himself, almost there. His ears were filled with the sound of his breathing and the sound of his sandals hitting the hardwood floor. But just as he was ready to finally reach his objective and toss the shuriken into his hand, he stumbled. He tripped hard, if the loud smack of flesh against wood, and the child in question clutching his face while moaning in pain were any indication. Is this Gaki for real? As Naruto watched the young boy writhe in agony on the ground, an impoverished expression appeared on his face. Great, now my grandson has been added into the mix. As Hiruzen watched his poor, stupid grandson writhe on the floor, he thought, as if my headache wasn't already bad enough. Hiruzen heard footsteps running down the hall and looked up for a moment, only to see that it was Ebisu, his grandson's tutor, who was stunned to see the young child clutching his face while lying on the ground. The young child complained, rubbing his sore forehead and searching for the thing that had tripped him. "Ow, something tripped me," he said. First frantically, then in a more natural and subdued tone, Ebisu asked, "Are you okay, honorable grandson? And by the way, there is nothing in this room that you could have tripped on, it's relatively flat." Who is this kid, Naruto thought to himself, before his features involuntarily changed into that of his emotionless form. His hair lost its shine and fell to the ground, his eyes darkened, and his skin turned pale. Ebisu smirked as he finally noticed Naruto's prescience in the room after he followed the little child's gaze. That boy, the Kyuubi, of course, after all he's the lowest form of scum, he thought to himself. You're the one who tripped me, aren't you?" The small child yelled at Naruto, while pointing his finger at Naruto's face. Naruto finally had a clear view of the obnoxious little jerk for the first time since the child had entered the room. He was about 8 or 9 years old, and he stood about 4 feet 1 inch tall. His short, spiky hair was hidden by a hideous gray helmet with a red circle on the left and an orange frowny face on the right, leaving a small hole for his hair to protrude. He had black eyes, and from what he could see when he yelled at him, a small chip in one of his teeth. He was wearing a yellow shirt with a large red Konoha symbol in the center, gray shorts, and blue shinobi sandals. What stood out, though, was the absurdly long blue scarf around his neck, which nearly reached the ground. "Well, Baka, how could I have tripped you? You fell flat on your face 5 feet away from me." "No, you tripped over your own 2 feet like a brain-dead mongrel," Naruto said icily, holding the child's scarf tightly in his hand as he stood up and made him look him in the eyes. The child gave Naruto the best glare possible, clenching his teeth, though he did wither slightly under Naruto's intense, icy gaze. "Hey, immediately remove your dirty hands from the honorable grandson. Don't you know who he is? He is the grandson of our honorable Sandaime Hokage," Ebisu yelled angrily, getting Naruto's attention, who still had a firm grasp on the child's scarf. This also gave Naruto a clear view of the arrogant prick, who was about 5 feet 9 inches and somewhat skinny. He wore a pair of dark, circular sunglasses which completely obscured his eyes from view. Only a few strands of his black hair were visible because he wore his Hitai.8 on his head like a bandana. He was dressed in the typical Konoha uniform, but without the distinctive flak jacket. Naruto maintained the same expressionless gaze as he glanced from Ebisu to the struggling child he was holding, indicating no signs of shock at the revelation. "He's just like everyone else, but that stopped him. Now that he knows who I am, he won't dare lay a finger on me," the child thought to himself, as he weakly tried to match Naruto's cold stare. The child glared at Naruto and taunted, "What's the matter, tough guy? I thought you were going to punch me, huh? Or did you chicken out because the Sandaime Hokage is my Chan?" His tone was slightly arrogant. "Arrogant child, I don't care if Sarutobi was your Oba.san, I will not be talked down to by some pathetic wretch," Naruto said coldly, before punching the brat on the head as softly as he could, which was still pretty hard in comparison to a normal person. As the child fell face first to the ground, he thought to himself, "This guy. He's different from the others." Finally he hit the ground and before he knew it, he was out like a light as he slipped into unconsciousness. Hiruzen closed his eyes and nearly ignored the gaping Ebisu, muttering to himself, "This is not looking good," in an attempt to stop his headache from getting worse. "I'm done here, Sarutobi. I'll retake the picture later, but right now I'm going back to training," Naruto exclaimed before stepping over the unconscious child and walking out the door, not even waiting for Hiruzen to respond. 10 minutes later. Where Naruto is that little jerk truly under the impression that he is being sly? After transforming once more, Naruto thought to himself, "He probably came to make me apologize or something stupid like that." His hands were firmly in his pockets, seemingly ignoring the small child's attempt to stalk him covertly. Naruto stopped in the middle of the street and turned to face his would-be stalker, thinking to himself, "This kid is getting on my nerves." Who, at seeing Naruto turn around, wrapped a sheet around his body, attempting to use the Kokoromino no Jutsu, cloak of invisibility technique, trying to make it look like a large rock. As he saw what may have been the worst attempt at stealth he had ever seen, Naruto thought to himself, "You have to be kidding me." The feet of the Gaki were clearly visible, and the rock looked completely out of place on the level rocky road. Naruto shook his head and continued walking, fighting the urge to roll his eyes and rip off the child's disguise. As he, stealthily, pursued Naruto, the child thought, "He's getting away," practically tearing the sheet covering him. In order to avoid alerting his target, he was extremely careful to make sure every step was as silent as possible. About 10 feet away from the ostensibly uninformed Naruto, the young child jogged a little, his scarf flapping behind him. All right, enough is enough, Naruto thought to himself after growing weary of a young child following him. Naruto yelled angrily, I know you're stalking me, you little bastard, so stop following me, as he turned to confront the brat who was pursuing him. The brat used another Kokorimino no jutsu to blend in with the surrounding fence. He was able to be seen with anyone who had half a brain cell because he was holding the sheet incorrectly. With a hint of annoyance in his voice, Naruto remarked, that disguise is so obvious it's pitiful, noticing that the young brat was still holding up the sheet as though he wasn't holding it incorrectly. Before Naruto could hear muffled laughter coming from beneath the sheet, this continued for a few more seconds. After removing the sheet from his body, the young boy exclaimed, so, you saw through my disguise, huh? I guess the rumors about you are true, you're pretty good. Though you're taller than what people said you would be. But that doesn't matter. From now on I'll be your apprentice and you'll be my sensei. Incredulous and a little irate at the idea that this brat could make him teach the little bastard, Naruto exclaimed, what? The boy excitedly exclaimed, and after that you gotta teach me the Oiroke no Jutsu thing that you used to beat Hokage. Gigi, his mind immediately raced through multiple fantasies of him defeating his G.San with a single move and being crowned the next Hokage. Stop right there kid, let me make two things perfectly clear to you. Firstly, you are not, nor will you ever be, my apprentice. I refuse to teach some spoiled lil brat like yourself. Secondly, even if I did accept you as my apprentice, and that is a big if, there is no way I am ever teaching anybody the Oiroke no Jutsu. It is a completely insulting, although effective, technique that I will never be using again. Hell, even I'm still trying to figure out what possessed me to use that technique in the first place. Now leave me alone kid. Naruto growled at the small child, who became more and more agitated. He felt something suddenly cling to his leg as he was ready to leave and start his long, delayed training for the day. In a desperate cry, the boy wrapped his arms and legs around Naruto's leg and gripped it, saying, please Naruto. Bozu, boss, teach me your ways. Please, 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 please. Naturally, this attracted the attention of the nearby villagers, who discussed and whispered to one another about the demon's harassment of the honorable grandson. Choosing to disregard the naive sheep that lived in the village, Naruto proceeded, the young child still begging and holding onto his leg. This continued for roughly 7 minutes before Naruto sighed and came to a complete stop. Finally giving in and biting the bullet, as it were, Naruto said in a weary tone, Gaki, if I teach you something, will you leave me alone? Naruto rubbed the bridge of his nose, thinking to himself, I'm going to regret this decision in the future, knowing that it would come back to haunt him. When the child finally released Naruto's leg and began to jump with delight, he exclaimed, you will. Thank you, thank you, thank you. This is it, my first step towards becoming the Godem Hokage, the boy mentally exclaimed, a broad smile spreading across his face that seemed to only widen. Naruto muttered angrily, just shut up and follow me, I want to get this over with, before grabbing the child's shirt by the back and shoving him forward. The child walking beside him was unable to contain his speech after a few minutes of walking. The boy sobbed, eager to begin his new training. Hey Bozu, what are gonna teach me? Oh, are you going to teach how to breathe fire? Walk on walls? Become invisible? Come and tell me, please. When Naruto asked, tell me something, kid, what do you know about the Henge no Jutsu transformation technique? The child at his side gave him a perplexed but dissatisfied look. In the interim, with Ebisu, Naruto, what has that monster done with the honorable grandson? What is his dastardly plan? Where have they gone? Why can't I find them? I am an elite Jonin, the highest level of shinobi as well as an elite trainer of future Hokages. Any parasitic vermin that dares latch themselves onto my ward would be squashed, Ebisu muttered angrily to himself while perched on a tall building's roof, looking everywhere for any sign of his missing ward. And he vanished with a single flick of his leafless or smokeless shunshin. 45 minutes later, Naruto's location at the random training ground. Once again transforming into his emotionless form, Naruto asked in a drab monotone, answer me this, why do you fixate on defeating Sarutobi so much? As he casually took a sip from a newly purchased soda. The boy was taken aback by this since he had never anticipated his Bozu asking him that. My Chan named me Konohamaru after the old name of the village, so everyone should remember my name easier. But nobody calls me by my real name, not one person in the entire village. That's because when they look at me, they don't really see me but as the honorable grandson of the Sandaime Hokage. Nobody knows who I am. Konohamaru replied sadly, a mental picture of his dominating his thoughts. Konohamaru continued angrily, clutching his fists tightly, wishing to Kami that people would simply call him by his name. I can't stand it anymore, it's like I'm invisible to them, like I don't even exist. I hate it so much, that's why I have to become the Hokage now, that way people know who I am, he said. For a short while, Naruto stared at Konohamaru, inadvertently experiencing flashbacks to his sensei's teachings and his Dobi self's declarations of becoming Hokage. Naruto looked at the ground and said icily, "That is one of the most idiotic things I have ever heard," totally ignoring Konohamaru's shocked and helpless expression. Naruto went on, but Konohamaru interrupted him by yelling, "What? Do you really think people will accept a little punk you as their Hokage? You can't become a Kage in a day or two, it's impossible and foolish to think so. You keep yelling about becoming the Godem Hokage and yet you know nothing about what it really means to be a Kage. To be Hokage means to have to train yourself for years on end, practicing everything you know to perfection, until you are smarter, stronger and faster than anyone else. A Hokage has to be greatest warrior in their village, to ensure that they can protect the people care about. You'll have to face countless enemies who want nothing more than your head a pike, just for the hell of it. You will be forced to endure personal pain and situations that would break a weaker man, and still find the strength to keep going," Naruto said with complete seriousness, trying to convey his seriousness, unaware of the true difficulty of his journey. Konohamaru gasped at this realization. The sudden arrival of Ebisu prevented Konohamaru from responding to Naruto's insight into the harsh reality of becoming Hokage. When Ebisu exclaimed loudly, "I finally found you too," Naruto and Konohamaru turned to face him and stood up. As he glared at Naruto from behind his circular shades, Ebisu thought bitterly, "The Kyuubi." As Naruto sensed Ebisu's and Ki's glare at him, he thought to himself, "So, he is another one of the stupid sheep that infest the village." The instant Naruto sensed the ki on Ebisu, he had to fight the impulse to stab him in the head. Ebisu asked patronizingly, "So honorable grandson, are you ready to put this farce to rest and go home?" Before leaping from a tall branch onto the ground below and making his way over to Konohamaru. With his fists clenched and an irritated expression on his face, Konohamaru retorted, "No way, I'm finally learning useful stuff to beat Ji-chan and take his title of Hokage. Now don't get in my way." Ebisu's somewhat mocking response toward the end solidified Naruto's opinion of him as a jackass. Please, a Hokage isn't just an incredible fighter. He must know finesse, honor, wisdom, and know at least 1,000 jutsu. You don't even know one single jutsu. Henge, Konohamaru screamed, gritting his teeth for a moment as Ebisu spoke down to him, and then he was engulfed in a white cloud of smoke. Ebisu and, to a lesser extent, Naruto were astounded by what they saw when the smoke cleared. Konohamaru was replaced by a stunning brunette woman who was approximately 5 feet 8 inches tall and wore a very form-fitting blue kimono that showed off her amazing breasts and accentuated her curves in the right places. "Hey there, do you like my technique?" Before vanishing in place of Konohamaru, the brunette winked at Ebisu and said, "Hey, he isn't defeated." Konohamaru whimpered pathetically at the sight of Ebisu still conscious, much less standing. "He took what I taught him about the Henge no Jutsu and twisted it into a watered-down version of the Oiroke no Jutsu. 2. I don't know whether to be proud or furious," Naruto thought to himself as he struggled to decide whether to pat the brat on the shoulder or strike him in the head. Wah! What kind of scandalous technique is that? Such a vulgar technique will never influence, let alone defeat me. I am far above it, exclaimed Ebisu, shocked and incredulous at the honorable grandson's use of such filth. He abruptly awoke from his daze and proceeded to Konohamaru while unconsciously giving his glasses the finger. In a desperate attempt to get Konohamaru to move, Ebisu yelled, "Honorable grandson, stop this foolishness immediately." Ebisu pulled harder on Konohamaru's scarf, but he dug his feet into the ground and remained firm. "Naruto is turning you into a pathetic delinquent like him. Only my special training can I put you on the fast track to becoming a Hokage," he added. In a desperate attempt to break free from Ebisu's hold, Konohamaru screamed in defiance, "Leave me alone." Their battle was cut short by Bala's loud cry, and then the tree 10 feet from Ebisu burst into a hail of splinters. As he and Konohamaru stared at the now demolished tree, Ebisu released Konohamaru's scarf in disbelief and turned to Naruto. With his still, steaming fist in front of his face, slowly encircled by a reddish aura, Naruto said icily, "I'm only going to say this once, you arrogant piece of trash. Leave now." "Whoa, that was unreal," Konohamaru exclaimed, utterly stunned that Naruto could pull off such a feat himself. Ebisu confidently shook off any surprise at what Naruto had done, saying, I'm not impressed. I'm a Jonin after all, an elite shinobi warrior, not some pathetic lightweight like Mizuki. Watch how a real shinobi deals with an upstart." In the interim, Hokage's office at Konoha Academy. As he watched Naruto and the others use his crystal ball, Hiruzen thought to himself, this is either going to end very well or very poorly. With Naruto again. When Naruto saw Ebisu approaching him with a smug smile on his face as though he had already won, he clenched his fists. As he gripped his katana tightly, prepared to slay Ebisu if necessary, Naruto thought to himself, I'm going to enjoy beating the smug look off his face, probably more than I should. Ready? Ebisu sarcastically said, crossing his arms in front of him and extending his middle and index fingers, as if he were about to execute a jutsu in a moment. Ebisu thought to himself, it's about time someone put this trash in his place. He was prepared to beat Naruto into the ground and convince the honorable grandson that his approach was correct. Unwilling to look away for fear of being deemed defeated, the two fighters glared at one another. Their bodies were tense, prepared to respond to anything the other person did in an instant. For Naruto and Ebisu, time seemed to stand still while they waited for the other to make even the smallest move so they could launch an attack. But before Naruto could launch his assault on Ebisu, a thick cloud of orange smoke engulfed him. Ebisu asked, "What manner of trickery is this?" As he watched the smoke cloud intently, anticipating Naruto's next move. Ebisu was shocked to see a joyful looking Naru instead of an emotionless Naruto staring down at him when the smoke cleared. "Hi," Naru joyfully yelled, waving to the now gawking Konohamaru and Ebisu with his tail wagging hard. All Ebisu could do was stare in disbelief as his small brain attempted to piece together Naruto's plan. What does he intend to do? Why would he want to turn Henge into a little child? As he watched, raptly, Naru, who was now watching the birds flying overhead with childlike delight, Ebisu thought, "You are an elite Jonin, you should be able to figure out the strategy of a delinquent such as him. How dare this prickly jerk disregard me?" Ebisu pondered furiously, finding that every second he spent thinking about Naru only made him more irate. Just as Ebisu was about to lose it and scream at Naru, he took a deep breath and composed himself. "Calm down, I'm superior to him. I can't let the trash overcome me because I am an elite Jonin and he is nothing but vermin in comparison." Ebisu congratulated himself in his mind for figuring out Naruto's plan. After thinking, "Aha, so that was your plan, get me to lose my composure so you could get the upper hand." Ebisu gloated, his voice so full of pride and arrogance that it made Sasuke blush. "Very clever Naruto. Your plan was almost successful, if I had been anyone else it would have succeeded. But alas, I am your opponent and as an elite I would never fall for such underhanded and obvious tricks like that." Naru's attention was drawn to Ebisu as soon as he began flapping his gums. Naru just stared at him, his head cocked to the side and his expression blank. Naru pointed a finger at Ebisu and said accusingly, "Hey, you're the mean man who trying to take Saru-chan away." He ignored Konohamaru's angry expression at being referred to as Saru-chan. Ebisu used all of his mental self-control to remain composed as he said, "Drop this pointless charade, it isn't going to work on me." With a big smile on his face and his fist raised as if for emphasis, Naru said joyfully, "I'ma deck you in the schnoz." With his tail wagging merrily behind him, Naru gave a little excited giggle at what was about to happen. Naturally, Ebisu was perplexed by this since he had never heard anyone use that term in his life. Ebisu attempted to say, "Wah," before Naru's fist acquainted his face. The force of Naru's blow sent Ebisu flying until he was out of sight before he could even comprehend what had happened. In the distance, Naru waved at Ebisu's tumbling form while shouting, "Bye Grumpy San," at the sky. When Naru eventually stopped waving, a cloud of orange smoke enveloped him once more. Naruto grinned broadly as the cloud vanished. After overcoming his initial shock at seeing Naruto defeat Ebisu so easily, Konohamaru complained, "Oh man, I couldn't even beat that snobby tutor of mine and you do it with one punch. I still want to be Hokage so badly but I keep messing up, why can't I do it? So even after everything I told you about becoming a Kage, you still want to go through with it despite the sweat, blood and tears it'll take to get there. Let me tell you this, there is no easy way to become Hokage. You're going to get knocked constantly, you'll face hardships along the way. Take me for example, I've been ostracized by the bastards of the village, treated like I'm a demon made flesh. Yet, I still find the strength to go on, because no matter to do me, I have people who depend on me. That is the most important thing about being a Kage, you have to be someone that people not only look up to but can depend on them during tough times." Naruto said with complete conviction. He thought about those who support him. With the leaves floating and his jacket billowing in the wind, Konohamaru could only gaze at Naruto in wonder at that precise moment. Naruto never appeared more cool to him. A realization dawned on Konohamaru as Naruto's words rang in his ears. A Hokage must be the greatest warrior in their village, to ensure that they can protect the people care about. Konohamaru turned his back on Naruto and said, "Who do you think you are, giving me all these lectures and stuff like that? That's it, I'm no longer your apprentice, from now on are rivals. One day I'm going to defeat you in battle. After all, a Hokage has to be the strongest warrior in the village, right?" At first, he sounded angry, but then he grinned broadly. "Hey, I couldn't be your trainer even if I wanted to Gaki. For you see, starting tomorrow I start active service as a shinobi of Konoha. But what the hell, I'll accept your challenge. How about this, if you manage to beat me someday, I'll coronate you as the Hokage myself. Until then, I want you to train your ass off, because I want you to be at your absolute best when we fight, Sarutobi Konohamaru." Naruto replied with a grin on his face as the two of them left. As he saluted Naruto, Konohamaru firmly believed, "I won't let you down, I'll become the greatest shinobi ever." Konoha Academy. Iruka's classroom, 6 days later. Naruto mentally grumbled, "I'm so freaking bored," as he rested his feet on the desk and leaned back in his chair. As he searched for something to do, Naruto let out a loud sigh and scolded himself in his head for arriving so early. Naruto chose to look around the spacious, empty classroom he was in an attempt to pass the time. With tall, wide windows on the right side that occupied a significant amount of space and a high ceiling, the room was rather roomy. Students could easily observe the clouds overhead, the surrounding buildings, and an old swing set that Naruto was very familiar with thanks to the window's surprisingly good view. With the exception of the stairs that ran alongside them, the room was filled with long, vertical rows of desks that extended all the way to the back wall. Iruka could speak and watch the class from an elevated section of wood with a podium in the front of the classroom. There wasn't much space for anything else because of the large blackboard that occupied a large portion of the wall behind the podium. Several motivational and educational posters, each more generic than the last, were taped or pinned to the classroom walls. Naruto spent a minute or two taking in every detail of the room before he soon relapsed into his boredom. With his hands behind his head and his eyes closed, Naruto sank as deeply as he could into the chair he was occupying. A wooden chair can only be so comfortable, but it was a little uncomfortable to feel the hard wooden back against his back. Naruto seemed to consider the course of events leading up to this moment as he inhaled deeply. Flashback. Streets of Konoha, 1 week ago. As he walked to his apartment, a rat-infested hellhole, Naruto muttered to himself, his face a mask of suppressed rage, "Pathetic old bastard." Because he was impatient with the stupid civilians at that moment, Naruto was glad it was so late at night. The only sounds Naruto heard as he moved freely down the deserted street were his own thoughts and the moths circling the streetlights above him. Naruto was too preoccupied with his thoughts to notice the crunch of the rocks beneath his sandals, which reverberated a little farther down the street. But the isolation was short-lived. When Naruto realized he had entered Konoha's red light district, he was able to finally break free from his angry thoughts. Every pimp, prostitute, thug, vagrant, yakuza, brothel, and gambling parlor in Konoha can be found in the red light district. Home, sweet home. As he strolled through Konoha's seedy underbelly, Naruto thought sarcastically to himself. He was momentarily blinded by flashing lights coming from nearly every direction before his eyes adapted to the electronic assault. Bars and gambling establishments occupied nearly the entire street, and their flashing signs and lights provided more illumination than any other street light. Every building tries to entice the poor fools into their halls with deals or guarantees in an attempt to steal their money and, depending on the location, their lives. From every corner, alley, or outside a building, prostitutes swarmed the streets, offering their services. They ranged from young, naive girls who were struggling to the elderly and seasoned women who had long been in the oldest occupation in the world. With their hands on their swords, the local thugs stood menacingly outside their bosses' establishments, either sneering at onlookers or leering at the prostitutes. Both shinobi and civilian men stumbled through the street, nearly all of them intoxicated as they either went home, usually with a local girl, or looked for more. As Naruto walked past them, a couple of them recognized him and began spitting profanities and whatever they had eaten that day onto the ground. They were all too inebriated to do much else. Naruto just ignored them, holding his katana tightly in his hand as his desire to kill them grew stronger with each curse directed at him. He did his best not to just chop off their heads to silence them. A homeless man shouted at Naruto from an entrance to a nearby alleyway, "Hey Fishcake, what's with the new clothes? And did you get taller?" Naruto turned to face him and felt a moment of happiness. A small man, about 5 feet 0 inches, with short graying hair and a medium-sized beard that covered most of his neck, sat on the ground with one or two of his friends. He had somewhat sunken-in brown eyes surrounded by numerous wrinkles and age spots, and when he smiled at Naruto, it became clear that he was missing multiple teeth. He wore a simple straw hat with a few small holes scattered around it and a dark gray jacket that, if he were standing up right now, would have reached his knees. He was also wearing a slightly tattered green button-up shirt and stitched-up black pants that, surprisingly, kept him warm, with the legs of the pants looking like a quilt due to all the patchwork done to them. Finally, he wore simple wooden sandals on his feet, and Naruto felt a grin temporarily replace the frown on his face as he watched the elderly homeless man stagger slightly towards him. "It's a long story, old man," Naruto said, anticipating the man's furious reaction and not being let down by the outcome. "Who are you referring to as an elderly man? Are you aware of who I am? I am Kotomo Ranagi. 1. King of the streets, Lord of the bums, and the man who brought Konoha's homeless people together under a magnificent, frayed banner. One of the best chunin this village has ever had, too." As he got to his feet, Nagi yelled angrily and appeared to be grinning broadly. "The bums lord? You resemble Lord of the Rums more, haha." The third vagrant laughed and Naruto smirked when one of the other vagrants made a loud comment. Nagi, however, wasn't as amused as they were. He bowed his head while his whole body trembled with anger, before swinging at the person who had said it. "I want you to know that I do not drink. I just happen to partake in a swig of rum more than most," Nagi said angrily, pulling out his own bottle of rum as proof. "They just don't understand swiggy," Nagi muttered to his rum bottle as he briefly pressed his face against it. "One day they will learn to appreciate rum as I do, one day." Nagi shook his head at his fellow bums. Foolishness. Nagi calmly walked over to where Naruto was standing, an expressionless look adorning his scruffy face. Nagi finally stopped when he was nearly face with Naruto, as the two engaged in an epic stare down. "Fish cake," Nagi said flatly, continuing to look directly into Naruto's eyes, which seemed to twitch at the moniker. Their stare down ended abruptly as Naruto and Nagi both burst into smiles and gave each other a quick embrace. "Drunkard," Naruto replied equally flat, his face a picture. Perfect example of neutrality. Naruto grinned slightly as he spoke to one of the few people he would be happy to call a friend. "It's good to see you again, Nagi," he said. "Likewise Fishcake," Nagi answered, releasing Naruto from his embrace so that he could follow suit. "You won't stop referring to me like that, will you?" Naruto's voice was irritated, and he had to fight the urge to strike Nagi in the head. "How many times must I say it? My name means Maelstrom, rather than Fishcake." Naruto considered shouting it out loud, but decided it would be pointless. Why give up now? Knowing full well how much Naruto detested his little nickname, Nagi smirked in response. "But enough about that. What in the name of the Shoden Hokage happened to you? When I last saw you, you were a loudmouth, orange-clad, pint-sized person who was ranting about becoming Hokage. But now, look at you. If it weren't for the whisker marks, I might not have recognized you," Nagi added, emphasizing Naruto's height change as well as his prior height with his arms. "To put it mildly, I've had a interesting evening, Nagi. One that I'm not liable to forget anytime soon, and let's leave it at that," Naruto said sharply, inadvertently recalling his encounter with Sarutobi. Naruto took a deep breath and felt the anger inside him gradually dwindle back into recession for the time being. With an unreadable expression that he had spent a significant amount of his shinobi career honing, Nagi responded, "Fair enough, kid. Not my place to pry, he'll tell me when he wants to," Nagi reasoned in his mind, content to wait for Naruto to tell him the specifics. "Well, it's been fun, Fishcake, but it seems my people need me once more, such as the life of the Lord of the Bums," he said melodramatically, feigning sorrow as he approached his fellow vagrants. "Yeah. You go do that," Naruto said, watching Nagi walk away before turning around and waving goodbye with his unoccupied hand. Shaking his head at Nagi's melodramatics, Naruto weakly returned the wave before putting his hands in his haori's pockets and walking away. A few moments after leaving Nagi, Naruto transformed into his emotionless form, his once good mood completely destroyed and replaced with cold indifference and anger. It didn't help that his apartment complex soon came into view, which further destroyed it. How this building hasn't been condemned yet is beyond me, Naruto thought bitterly as he looked at the dilapidated hellhole that was his apartment building. It was about 4 stories tall, making it one of the taller buildings in the red light district. Trash was strewn around the complex's entrance, its stench permeating the air, making Naruto wrinkle his nose in disgust. The building itself was in disrepair, with cracks all over the place, and some of the windows near his apartment were broken in, allowing the cold air to enter the building like a plague. The landlord wasn't happy about that, but the miserable old bastard had found a way to get at him without raising a finger. He raised Naruto's rent, turned off his hot water, changed the locks, and in a vain attempt to get him to leave on his own, much to the old bastard's annoyance. But since Naruto always managed to come up with his rent money, the landlord couldn't rightfully kick him out, lest he incur Sarutobi's wrath. Naruto thought, the better question is, why'd I still live in this rundown rat's nest? He knew the answer all too well, and it irritated him greatly that the landlord hoarded all of the rent money he had accumulated, instead of, fixing the Goddly building. Shaking his head at these thoughts, Naruto opened the door to his complex and went inside, being careful not to step on one of the squeaky floorboards that never seemed to be fixed. As he ascended the stairs to his apartment, he was filled with disgust at the state of the wood surrounding the stairwells. Some planks were so rotten that the slightest weight would cause them to collapse on themselves. Paint peeled from the wall and ceiling, leaving piles of paint chips on the ground that stacked up like anthills. Naruto narrowed his eyes for a moment when he finally saw the door to his apartment, which was now covered in brand new, hateful graffiti. The standard phrases, "Die demon, monster," and "Go back to hell," were on his door, along with one or two new, hate-filled messages on his door or wall. Naruto was a little relieved that they hadn't broken down his apartment door, despite how terrible it was, and he decided to remove the graffiti from his door again tomorrow because there were more urgent problems at hand. But as soon as Naruto opened his door, he was overcome by a stench that almost brought him to tears. "Gah!" he cried in shock, clutching his nose in an attempt to keep the terrible stench from getting into his nasal passages, but it was ineffective, I'm afraid. Normally, Naruto's apartment would just smell a little, but to those with enhanced senses, like the Inuzuka clan or Naruto, it was a strong odor that raped their olfactory senses. Using his haori to protect his nose, Naruto quickly senitoed to the window and threw it open with great force, sticking his head out the window and taking several deep breaths while swallowing the bile rising in his throat. After getting the required amount of oxygen, Naruto pulled his head back into the room and was disgusted by what he saw. Ramen cups strewn all over the floor, some of which had uneaten noodles hanging out of them, some of which were actually glowing in the dark from mold. Clothes scattered all over the apartment, most of them severely unwashed. Flies buzzing about the trash lying around, though thankfully they quickly escaped through the window. And, if Naruto's eyes were deceiving him, he even saw a cockroach dragging a fully grown rat carcass through a hole in the wall. Scratching his face in disgust at the condition of his apartment, Naruto swiftly crossed his figures and made a cage bushin. Without saying a word, Naruto gave his newly created clone his commands, and it nodded in return and started cleaning the apartment. Satisfied that his clone would finish the task, Naruto hurried to his bedroom, closing the door behind him and taking a deep breath because the air was much more breathable there. It's about time I finally got some answers, Naruto thought to himself as he sat cross-legged on his bed with his sword resting across his lap. He closed his eyes and shifted into a meditative position, taking deep, slow breaths and thinking, all right, let's do this. He took a deep breath and gained a look of determination as he made his way towards his crappy, squeaky as hell bed, removing his katana, sheath and all, from the sash around his waist. Take deep breaths, Naruto.kun. For the moment, just pay attention to your breathing. I want you to let the world around you fade away, until the world is nothing but an empty void, Naruto recalled, recalling his sensei's lessons as he followed the exact steps. In and out. Naruto repeated repeatedly as he felt his body relax, sagging as he listened to the rhythmic sound of his breathing. Gradually but surely, Naruto felt the world around him fade, his nose no longer being assaulted by the reeking odors that permeated the air, and his ears going deaf to the sound of his clones cleaning and the chirping crickets outside. In a matter of seconds, Naruto felt himself leave the conscious world and be pulled into the deepest corners of his mind. The mindscape of Naruto. Espada Manor, too, slowly opening his eyes, Naruto was relieved to see the large ornate doors of his mindscape instead of his disgusting apartment. He quickly grabbed the large gold rings held in the mouth of the lion head door knocker and threw the doors wide open with little effort, giving him a better view of the main courtyard in the center of the compound, which just so happened to be where his white-clad tenants were at the moment. With a steely expression in his eyes, Naruto pressed forward toward the remaining espada, determined to find some answers to the questions that tormented his thoughts. With each step he took along the garden pathway, Naruto drew nearer to his spiritual tenants until, with his newly developed enhanced senses, he could hear the sounds of metal clashing against metal and his tenants' conversations. As he unleashed a devastating barrage of slashes with Pantera, Grimmjow yelled angrily, "Stand still, you pale-faced bastard." Unfortunately for Grimmjow, his pale-skinned opponent Ulquiorra either dodged or parried all of his blows, and to Grimmjow's annoyance, Ulquiorra didn't seem to be putting much effort into their brief duel thus far. Grimjow gritted his teeth in frustration as his strikes became more and more vicious, tearing through the air like a shark through the ocean, his blade wailing out of his opponent's blood. "Fight back, damn it! Let me hit you," he thought angrily. "Will you please stop shouting?" From his position lying in the shade of a large tree, Stark said irritably, "Some of us are trying to take a nap here." Those two are almost as bad as Lilynet, Stark thought to himself, initially with annoyance but later with sadness at losing his other half. "Lilynet, I'm sorry I couldn't keep my promise to you, but I have feeling wherever you are right now, you're not lonely," Stark said in his mind as he gripped his hands tightly in a rare display of emotion and vitality that was almost entirely hidden from his fellow Espada. Nevertheless, the sound of rocks crunching beneath footsteps interrupted both Grimjow's irate response and Stark's melancholy thoughts, and they all turned to face Naruto as he sped toward them. Naruto's voice echoed, "Don't stop on my account," and then he appeared, walking forward with his hands in his pockets and a blank expression on his face. As he placed Pantera's flat side on his shoulder, Grimjow angrily remarked, "Hey, it's about time you showed up, kid. Little bastard, how dare he keep us waiting like this?" Grimjow thought to himself, a sneer creeping onto his face. "What matters is that I'm here now. We should wrap up our earlier discussion. You have the answers I need right now. Let's stop avoiding the problem because you undoubtedly have questions that need to be answered. I'm not in the mood to put up with anyone's bullshit, especially after tonight," Naruto said somewhat harshly. Harabelle stood up from her spot on the ground, where she had been passively watching Grimjow and Ulquiorra's match. Her eyes narrowed, and she said gravely, "I suggest you change your tone, Naruto-san. It's not welcome here." The two stared at each other for well over a minute before Naruto closed his eyes and sighed. It took a few more seconds of mental reprimanding before Naruto raised his head and locked eyes with Harabelle again. I'm sorry," Naruto muttered, slumping his shoulders slightly and looking down at the ground with no small amount of shame. "How could I lose my temper that easily? I should know better by now. After all, Sensei practically drilled controlling my emotions into my head." Harabelle thought to herself, startled, strange, I can't find any trace of deceit in his eyes. There might be more potential in him than I gave him credit for." She then grinned subtly beneath her hollow mask, nodded slightly to Naruto, took a few steps back, and leaned against a nearby wall. Naruto continued in a much more modest and quiet tone, "Now, as I was saying, we need to finish the conversation we were having before we were interrupted," receiving nods from the Espada, the majority of whom agreed. "Before we begin, I want to say one thing. Thank you." With his mostly white clad saviors staring at him in disbelief, Naruto said, "I know I said that earlier, but without your help, Iruka Sensei and I would be dead right now." "What are you giving them thanks for, TCH? Kyuubi, who had just woken up from its nap, said angrily, "I did most of the work in saving your pathetic ass, you miserable ninja," as it craned its enormous neck to look over the compound wall at Naruto and company. Naruto grinned slightly and said, "I was going to thank you first, Kyuubi, but I figured you needed your beauty sleep." The Kyuubi narrowed its eyes at Naruto and growled in rage. "I don't want your gratitude, brash Gaki. Remember that I only saved your ass because I didn't want to have to deal with the trouble of changing myself after letting you blow up." Kyuubi responded with a roar, its tails flapping behind it as it exerted all of its restraint to avoid squashing Naruto like a bug. After a few moments of silence during which he glared at Kyuubi with his fists clenched, Naruto said, "Regardless, now that you're awake I can ask you all my questions." He then closed his eyes and began to take several soothing breaths, feeling the anger inside of him drain away like a river until it was gone. With a relaxed sigh, Naruto opened his eyes again and turned his back to the irate Kyuubi to that of the Espada. "Naruto-kun, what do you want to know?" Neliel asked politely as she put the book she somehow had aside and clasped her hands in front of her. "First of all, who are you? I want to know the names of the people who saved my life, but I only know tidbits because of our arrangement. I'll go first. My name is Uzumaki Naruto," Naruto said, glancing at each Espada as they introduced themselves. "Remember that the name is Jaeger-Jacques Grimjow." The blue-haired Arrancar, now known as Grimjow, pointed to himself with his thumb while boasting with an arrogant smile. Naruto had to fight the urge to roll his eyes at Grimjow's boisterous introduction because doing so would likely result in the blue-haired Arrancar kicking him in the ass. Cypher Ulquiorra was the pale-skinned Espada who spoke in a drab monotone while staring at Naruto with his icy, uncompromising gaze. Naruto shivered uncontrollably under Ulquiorra's gaze, feeling as though someone was walking over his grave. The busty green-haired woman said, "I'm Neliel II Odelschwank, Naruto-kun," and then she gave Naruto a big, friendly smile that instantly countered Ulquiorra's soul-piercing stare. Naruto gave her a big smile in return, but it was much smaller than her contagious one. The brown-haired Arrancar, now known as Stark, yawned and drew lead. Stark, yawn. Coyote Stark. He raised his hand languidly in greeting before yawning again, and Naruto stared at Stark with a look of disbelief on his face and a huge drop of sweat forming on the back of his head. Naruto thought incredulously, this guy could give Shikamaru a run for his money. The sexy blonde Arrancar said, "My name is Tia Haribel." She gave Naruto a small nod, as though they were acquainted, and Naruto gave her one in return before focusing on his biggest and furriest tenant. "Hey, you're not worthy enough to know my name, Ninjin, so if you think you're picking it up so quickly, you're in for a surprise. That honor will have to be earned by you." Kyuubi glared at Naruto and yelled out angrily, its voice tinged with hatred. "Fine, challenge accepted," Naruto said confidently, his smirk turning into a somewhat cocky and confident grin as he locked eyes with the now confused looking Bijou. Naruto stared at the Kyuubi for well over a minute before lowering his head as a smirk appeared on his face. "What on earth are you talking about?" Kyuubi looked down at his hybrid jailer and raised an eyebrow, asking, "Does Kurama have eyebrows? Even if you don't like it, you've caught my attention, so I'm going to find out your name." Near the end, Naruto hinted at sarcasm before saying, "I'm going to spend the foreseeable future trying to earn the honor of knowing your name." The Kyuubi was about to chastise Naruto for his sheer audacity when Grimmjow rudely interrupted it. Kyuubi looked at Naruto with disbelief written all over its furry features as it unintentionally replaced Naruto with its surrogate father and creator for a brief moment. Kyuubi quickly shook its head to rid itself of those, in its opinion, horrible and inaccurate comparisons. With a slight frown on his face, Grimmjow interrupted, marching close to Naruto and getting in his face near the end. "Hold up, Gaki. You're not really gonna have a chance to learn old fuzzball's name anytime soon," he said. Grimmjow's wording and the fact that he was encroaching on his personal space caused Naruto to narrow his eyes. "What do you mean by that?" The manly gaze between Naruto and Grimmjow was interrupted by the sound of Haribel clearing her throat to attract their attention. Naruto said this with utmost seriousness, grabbing the handle of his katana in case the situation turned violent. Haribel quickly sighed at the end, trying to defuse the situation before Grimmjow's poor word choice got out of control. What Grimmjow is trying, and failing, to say is that you are not going to have much time to attempt to learn Kyuubi San's true name due to the fact that you will not have adequate time to try and figure it out, she said. "What precisely are you busy with?" Naruto asked, his hand still firmly gripping his sword, his eyebrows raised in a mixture of bewilderment and hesitation. "Practicing." The typically vivacious and amiable expression that Naruto had grown used to seeing in the brief time he had known her was replaced by a serious one as Neliel injected. "What's the catch?" Hesitantly, Naruto asked as he slowly took his hand off his katana and looked at the expressions on his other tenants' faces, examining every square inch of their faces for the slightest sign of dishonesty or treachery. After a few moments of intense observation, Naruto finally took his hand off his sword and relaxed his posture a little, if his slumping shoulders were any indication. "You all want to train me, but why? What do you gain from this?" With a hint of suspicion in his voice, Naruto asked. "I spoke with the others about our current situation while you were speaking with the individual you refer to as Sarutobi. We came to the conclusion that we are permanently trapped in your body based on what we have learned from Kyuubi in our own observations. That makes you both our host and our representative in the outside world. Therefore, you need to be trained in order to survive." Ulquiorra explained to Naruto on behalf of the other Espada, who all nodded in some way. "Add in the fact that due to our arrangement, that our souls are intertwined to a certain degree. Should you perish in battle, then we would die as well once again. Gaki, you are our representative as long as we are confined here, so you must strengthen yourself because I will not tolerate a weak host." Grimmjow narrowed his brow and repeatedly jabbed Naruto in the chest to make his point clear. "We're going to train you into the freaking ground and won't stop until there is no force on Earth that can stop you," he said firmly. "Normally, I would question this, but since these aren't normal circumstances, I'll overlook it for the time being. Nevertheless, even after everything you've done for me, you'll have to pardon me if I don't instantly trust you." After changing forms once more, Naruto said in a solemn monotone, "Hopefully, we'll be able to change that as time goes on." He was staring at the Espada with a suspicious expression on his face, though it was hard to tell. Grimmjow yelled, "Whatever Gaki, that doesn't matter since your beatdown. I mean training begins now." He unsheathed Pantera more quickly than Naruto could blink, and with a powerful war cry, he swung Pantera at Naruto while grinning insanely. The sound of metal hitting metal reverberated like thunder throughout the courtyard as Grimmjow and Naruto collided in a shower of sparks. "What on earth?" As Naruto fought to stop Grimjow's blade, he screamed in indignation. With a sadistic glee in his voice, Grimjow yelled, "Consider this a test." His already insane smile grew as he applied more force to his blade. As he gradually began to lose ground to the fierce Grimjow, Naruto thought dejectedly, "Damn it, this bad. He's more powerful than I am and he knows it. How the hell am I supposed to survive, let alone fight him? Screw this." Naruto thought to himself as he backflipped 10 feet away and disengaged his weapon from Grimjow's. "Okay, that bought me a few seconds. Think, Naruto, how can you beat this? Crap," he thought to himself as he landed on the ground with a somewhat heavy thud. However, the blue-haired Arrancar intercepted him right away. As he swung Pantera at Naruto's kidneys, he said, "Ha, you're going to have to do much better than if you want to live." Unfortunately for Naruto, Grimjow simply continued his attack, unfazed by anything he did, and without wasting any time, he spun slightly on his heel and spun nearly a full 360 degrees, his blade facing outwards ready to cut into Naruto's flesh. Crap, Naruto thought as he blocked Grimjow's slash with one of his own again, a flash of sparks flying off their respective weapons. Naruto gritted his teeth in exertion as he struggled to block Grimjow's furious barrage of attacks. Each time their blades clashed, it echoed like thunder, and the sparks flew from their blades like glowing embers in the wind after a fire. That's more accurate. Before unleashing a particularly powerful overhead strike that caused Naruto's knees to slightly buckle, Grimjow yelled with glee. Without hesitation, he took advantage of this and swiftly kicked Naruto square in the chest using a tiny portion of his actual strength. As he was flung backwards by the force of the kick, his feet making grooves in the ground from where he slid, Naruto blurted out in pain, "Gah," with a mixture of blood and spittle oozing from his lips. "Damn it," Naruto mentally cursed, barely able to stand, clutching his aching chest, each breath igniting his lungs with pain. Naruto narrowed his eyes at the casually approaching Grimjow, who merely smirked at him. Grimjow's arrogant smirk gave way to a look of annoyance as he charged Naruto, shouting, "Come on, you little bastard, I know you can do better." Before vanishing from sight through Sonito, Naruto angrily retorted, "You want me to do better, you got it." In an instant, Naruto emerged behind Grimjow, his sword cleaving in midair toward Grimjow's exposed back. Grimjow finished by parrying Naruto's sword to the side and swiftly throwing a punch in Naruto's face. "Nice try, Gaki, but," he said, laughing a little as he spun slightly on his heel and easily blocked Naruto's strike, "still not good enough." Grimjow's fist was only a few centimeters away from making contact with Naruto's head, which he quickly tidaled to avoid the attempted blow. "I can't beat him with only Kenjutsu, he's light years ahead of me in skill. I have to keep my distance, it's time I use what these people have given me," Naruto reasoned as he leapt backwards, just in time to see Grimjow slash out with a swing of his sword that would have cut him in half. With a stern expression on his face, Naruto clenched his free hand into a tight fist, his bones cracking in unison. 3. From the strain. Focus. Let the Ryotsu flow into your hand, Naruto told himself, as his fist rapidly filled with a familiar red aura. Bala. With a low mutter so as not to draw Grimjow's attention, Naruto pushed his fist forwards, the energy in his hand shooting off his hand towards his blue-haired opponent. The red bullet tore through the air like an ethereal missile, and the speed at which it traveled made it appear to anyone passing by as a red blur. After a few seconds, the bala approached its target, and Grimjow just smirked arrogantly as he stared at the Ryotsu bullet. In an instant, the bala made contact with Grimjow, and a massive cloud of dust covered the surrounding area after the initial Ryotsu explosion. "Like I said, Gaki, still not good enough." Grimjow's voice emerged from the dust cloud, which then gradually dissipated. Still, it was a nice though, Grimjow thought with a hint of pride as he casually dusted himself off while maintaining eye contact with Naruto. "No way," thought Naruto, his eyes widening slightly at the sight of a Grimjow who was completely unharmed. Naruto shook out of his brief daze, narrowed his eyes at the blue-haired Arrancar, then sheathed his sword and threw his fist back. "Bala!" he yelled, unfazed by Grimjow's seeming indestructibility, as he unleashed a torrent of red death towards him, his fists flying back and forth like pistons made flesh, each punch bouncing off another bala. "Tch." Grimjow frowned and sneered as he eyed the red projectiles coming his way. "Does he really think this is going to beat me?" Grimjow thought incredulously, then he let out a sigh of disappointment and swung his sword in the direction of the closest bala. The silver blade cleaved through the red bullet with no effort at all, sending the two halves flying behind him before they exploded with a loud boom. Without any delay, Grimjow charged forward, his face displaying annoyance, swinging his sword wildly at each approaching bala. "All right, there's a 3. second lag after each swing, so I have to wait for the right moment. Naruto calculated in his mind, meticulously timing each second between Grimmjow's blows. Wait for it, go, Naruto chanted in his mind before charging forward, his fist blazing with red Ryotsu. 10 meters, 7 meters, 5 meters, now, Naruto exclaimed before throwing his fist forward with all of his strength, hurling an extremely large balla in Grimmjow's direction. How often will you employ the same goddamn trick? Face it, it's not gonna work, Grimmjow yelled in frustration, as glared at the glowing spiritual bullet, more like cannonball, rocketing towards him with tremendous force. With a small yell, Grimmjow cleaved through the red ball of death with a single slash of his blade. Is that all you've got, Gaki? While his blade was halfway through cleaving the bullet, Grimmjow asked haughtily. Naruto said, not even close, as he spoke from behind Grimmjow, who turned to face him, or rather, his sword, which was now somewhat bloodstained. How the hell? Grimmjow thought incredulously for a moment before turning to face his abdomen, which now had a long, thin cut near the middle that was slightly trickling blood. He actually hit me, Grimmjow repeated in his mind for a moment before lowering his head and laughing. You actually managed to land a solid cut on me, good. Grimmjow's eyes follow a small trail of blood that stains Naruto's blade, the light casting an unsettling glow on the blood. After his fit of wild laughter, Grimmjow exclaimed, now let's pick things up a notch. His face was framed by a huge, savage smile. That's all the damage I managed to inflict on him. One measly scratch, Naruto gaped mentally as he stared with wide eyes at the shallow cut on Grimmjow's abdomen. Grimmjow appeared right in front of Naruto after being forcefully knocked out of his stupor. Crap! Naruto yelled mentally, quickly backflipping to avoid being cleaved into by Grimmjow's powerful overhead slash. Naruto muttered angrily under his breath, shit. Then he lunged sideways to dodge another of Grimmjow's blows, ducked under it quickly, and the blade barely missed his head, severing only a few hairs from his person. Unfortunately for Naruto, Grimmjow chose to make his acquaintance with his face with the bottom of his sandal, and the force of the blow sent him flying backwards, his back painfully crashing against a nearby wall as cracks formed around his embedded body in the wall. With raw determination rushing through his veins like a raging river, giving him newfound strength, Naruto thought angrily as he growled out between gritted teeth, I will not be beaten like this. With his steely gaze and gritted teeth, Naruto glared at the slowly approaching Grimmjow, anger coursing through his veins. With power coursing through him, he threw his weight forward and charged forward, his blade firmly clutched in hand, ready to cut Grimmjow down if necessary. Time seemed to slow down for Naruto and Grimmjow as the world gradually faded away from them, the sound of rocks crunching beneath their feet filling their ears, only broken by the sound of their surprisingly calm breathing. Their eyes locked in a fierce stare-down, neither of them willing to give in to the other, and as soon as they were within striking distance of each other, they swung their blades with all of their strength, tearing through the wind until they appeared as nothing more than twin crescents of silver. The world came crashing down with the force of a hurricane the moment the two blades clashed, and the ground around the two fighters cracked under the strain of the overpowering energies. This is going too far, Nelliel said angrily, her normally cheerful and attractive face marred by a particularly nasty scowl, narrowing her eyes at the, in her opinion, foolishness that Grimmjow was currently engaging in by issuing this duel. Nelliel quickly used Sonito to rush towards the two combatants, determined to put an end to this farce immediately. With nothing more than the sound of a tiny sonic boom, Nelliel disappeared from her spot among her fellow Arrancar as she rocketed in the direction of the two combatants. As he felt his muscles scream from effort, Naruto thought desperately, this isn't good, I'm starting tired already. How strong is this guy? He gritted his teeth and fought back Grimmjow's blade, his arms trembling slightly as he did so. Whoa, you fought harder than I anticipated, Gaki, but it doesn't matter. You're not strong enough to beat me, so let's end this already. Grimmjow grinned before a sharp pain shot through the side of his face, and he thought, wah. Before he was flung toward a nearby wall and struck by it. What the hell hit me? With his face twisted in a mixture of pain and rage, Grimmjow mumbled as he rubbed his aching face. What in hell were you thinking, Grimmjow? Grimmjow looked up at her from where he was on the ground as Nelliel scolded angrily. What was I thinking? Grimmjow stood up, finally recuperating from Nelliel's cheap shot, and yelled in response, I was training the little bastard until you came along and blindsided me. As she locked eyes with Grimmjow, Nelliel retorted angrily, trying to kill someone doesn't count as training. This continued for a few seconds before Nelliel turned away from the furious Grimmjow and hurried over to Naruto, saying, Naruto-kun. Are you all right? Nelliel shouted or inquired in concern as she seized Naruto in a firm embrace, ensnaring him once more between her ample breasts. So soft, so firm. No focus, Naruto. Focus. I need to conserve as much air as I can. Otherwise I'll suffocate. But what a way to go, Naruto thought to himself as he fought the impulse to bury his head in Neliel's covered cleavage. I didn't intend to murder him. Grimmjow responded. Besides, if he was weak enough to be killed by that, then he isn't worth training in the first place. This caused Neliel to let go of Naruto, who took a few deep breaths before a fierce frown reappeared on her lovely face. The only reason he is weak is that he hasn't practiced and isn't yet used to this body. Neliel explained, her voice becoming less angry and more frustrated. What he needs is a guiding hand to help get back to his prime, to carefully show him how we fight before we start training him seriously. She placed one hand on her attractive hips while clutching Gamusa with the other. Oh, that's a really good idea. After wasting countless weeks preparing for the actual training, let's get the little bastard back to his best. Only for him to be utterly destroyed in a real battle. Grimmjow sarcastically remarked, you're right about one thing. He is out of practice, and I'm going to beat him into the ground as many times as it takes for him to get back into shape. He then began to rant passionately, his fists clenched tightly. Enough. The buxom blonde was surrounded by a bright yellow aura as she glared at Grimmjow and, to a lesser extent, Neliel, while directing a great deal of spiritual pressure on her quarreling colleagues. Damn it, Grimmjow cried in his mind as his body fell to the ground below, an ungodly weight pressing down on him. Come on, move already. Grimmjow muttered as he used his own Ryotsu to counteract Haribel's overwhelming aura, and he let out a little sigh of relief when he felt the pressure crushing him lessen. Taking strained breaths, he shakily pushed himself upwards, his fingers making tiny grooves in the ground as he slowly brought one of his hands into a loose fist. Grimmjow craned his head upwards to glare at the bitch known as Haribel, anger practically tumbling off him like a wave. She's stronger than I imagined. No wonder they chose her to replace me, Neliel reasoned, staring at Haribel with a hint of respect in her eyes. Thinking fast, Neliel unleashed a moderate amount of her Ryotsu, enveloping her body in a light green aura. Without exerting any effort, Neliel stood tall with confidence, her Ryotsu totally negating Haribel's spiritual pressure. I think I have their attention now, Haribel remarked as she watched with some interest as her fellow Espada managed to move under the effects of her Ryotsu. Are you two done bickering like idiotic children? It's like dealing with children, she thought, sighing and rubbing her temple for a moment to relieve her slight headache. After a brief period of silence, Haribel sighed and closed her eyes as she gradually reduced her spiritual pressure until it had stopped entirely. Haribel asked sternly, her eyes narrowed as if daring them to say, no. With a deep laugh rumbling in its throat, Kyubi mocked, damn, there goes my source of entertainment. The sulky Espada quickly ignored it. After thinking about attacking Haribel for a few moments, Grimmjow thought, arrogant bitch, and glared at her with a fierce rage in his wild, blue eyes. The buxom blonde Arrancar matched his glare, staring him in the eyes without flinching. She's not worth it, Grimmjow told himself. With her eyes no longer penetrating Grimmjow alone, Haribel said icily, this conflict is pointless as well as counterproductive. Your constant bickering is only hindering our efforts. Neliel was also a victim of her piercing gaze. So, what would you advise us to do? After a short while, Neliel asked under Haribel's eyes, her tone expressing her mild embarrassment at arguing with Grimmjow. Everyone turned to face the pale Arrancar when Ulquiorra said, we find a middle ground between your individual training methods. Naruto gave him a blank stare before nodding respectfully. While you argued like idiotic pieces of trash, the both of you make valid arguments in regard to Uzumaki's training, Ulquiorra said. Ulquiorra went on, it would take too long to just let Uzumaki train to get back to his prime, leaving him without proper instruction or experience. Neliel reluctantly nodded in agreement. Ha! With a big grin on his face, Grimmjow taunted smugly, drawing glares from Naruto, Haribel, and Neliel. But it's even more foolish and harmful to just attack Uzumaki without the right direction or training. While Thisa might give Uzumaki experience fighting opponents stronger than himself, if your training session goes too far, it might also keep him out of commission for longer than necessary. Grimmjow's smirk swiftly turned into a snarky glare as Ulquiorra retorted, I purpose that combine your individual training plans into one cohesive training regiment. That makes sense. What are your thoughts on this? Everyone's attention turned from Ulquiorra to Naruto when he asked out loud, and then they looked at each other. Neliel joyfully exclaimed, I'm all for it Naruto.kun. She was a little let down that Ulquiorra could so easily criticize her training regimen. After a moment of intense thought, Haribel calmly said, this seems like the best course of action, I'll support it. Her voice took on a much more pleasant and controlled tone. Finally someone here who doesn't act like an idiot, Harabelle thought with a mental sigh of relief, pleased that there was one person trapped alongside her who wasn't immature or lazy. Yawn. Of course. Why not? Stark let out a particularly loud yawn before reclining in the plush grass and resuming the reassuring embrace of slumber. Grimjow barely controlled his anger at this development, growling out angrily, his face twisted in a nasty sneer. TCH, fine, I'll just have to pick up the slack when it's my turn to train the little bastard. Ulquiorra said bluntly, then it's settled. Starting from this point onwards you are now our pupil as well as representative in the outside world. His fellow Arrancars nodded in agreement, some reluctantly, before he looked at the angry, looking Bijou. You pale, gloomy bastard, don't even consider asking me. I'm happy to do nothing but wait for the hairless ape to approach and beg for a small portion of my power. It's just a matter of time until you arrive pleading like everyone else. You're just another power. Hungry parasite like the rest of your species, Gaki. Kyuubi roared in rage, its tails flailing behind it like a bushel of snakes. Damn Arrancar, where the hell does he get the nerve to even allude to me training the blonde ape? Don't trust them. They're just like everybody else. They'll use me for my power and then lock me up again when they don't need me. Kyuubi swore in its mind as it narrowed its hateful eyes at Naruto, its enormous body trembling with rage. Well, I suppose I'll have to disprove you, won't I? With his arms crossed in front of him and his gaze fixed on the enraged fox, Naruto responded with the utmost seriousness. Get out! Kyuubi snarled menacingly, its lips pulled back in a feral snarl that revealed its razor sharp teeth gleaming in the artificial light of Naruto's mind. The powerful Bijou then inhaled a giant lungful of air, its entire body leaning backwards as it inhaled more and more air. Suddenly, Kyuubi threw its head forwards and released an earth-shattering roar that reverberated throughout Naruto's mind with the force of a hurricane. With a startled yell, Naruto was blown off his feet and flung into the air above him, where he continued to rocket backwards. Gah! He cried out in shock as he moved one of his arms in front of him to shield his face from Kyuubi's roar. The hot air swept over him like a river, pushing him backwards as he fought against the unnatural gust with all of his might. Son of a bitch! Naruto, somehow, calmly exclaimed mentally as starred at the wall he was rapidly approaching with no chance of slowing down in the slightest. 10, 9, 8 feet Naruto counted down in his mind, having already guessed approximately how long he had left before he impacted harshly with the wall. Using what little time he had left, Naruto quickly shifted his body in midair so that his back would make first contact with the wall instead of his face. 7, 6, 5, Naruto continued, briefly turning his gaze towards the, still, roaring Bijou. I will unravel your secrets, Kyuubi. Count on it, Naruto thought with a steely gaze before letting out a sigh and closing his eyes. 3, 2, 1, Naruto concluded as he awaited the inevitable crash of his back against the cold, uncompromising stone wall. It wasn't even a second later before Naruto finally collided with the massive wall, a gasp of pain escaping his lips as pain coursed through his veins. At that moment a familiar sensation took hold of Naruto, as he slowly felt the world around him seemingly melt away into the inky void of nothingness. Naruto's apartment in the real world. Gah! Naruto exclaimed, his eyes wide open, and he took a series of erratic breaths to calm his nerves. Slowly but surely, his erratic breaths slowed down as he took in the sight of his bedroom. After taking one last deep breath of slightly stale air, Naruto finally calmed down and, with a sigh of relief, he leaned back and fell onto his shitty mattress. This is going to take some getting used to, Naruto thought, holding his sword tightly before leaning it against his bed. After a few moments of quiet, Naruto opened his eyes rolling blankly over every inch of his moldy, hole-filled ceiling. What the hell? It's only been about 5 minutes since I started, Naruto mentally gawked, amazed that so little time had passed since he ventured into the depths of his mind. He groaned slightly and turned onto his side, trying to ignore the annoying squeaks coming from his mattress in order to look at the electronic clock on his small bedside table. Naruto naturally freaked out a little when Ulquiorra muttered aloud, interesting, this might warrant further testing in the future. What on earth is happening? Why am I hearing your voice in my mind, Ulquiorra? After a quick glance around the room for the pale espada, Naruto screamed in shock, shook his head, and inhaled deeply. Ulquiorra said dryly, I suggest you refrain from yelling out loud to yourself, lest someone overhear and believe you to be a lunatic. Naruto nearly slapped himself for not recognizing his current appearance. After changing forms once more, Naruto asked himself in a dull monotone, okay, can someone now tell me how I can hear your voices inside my head? Now. Pale protagonist calmly got out of his pathetic bed, his expressionless face adorned by a blank stare. That would be because of me, you pathetic ape. I created a mental connection between all of us. Kyuubi snarled in a voice tinged with annoyance and rage from where it was currently sleeping next to the Espada's compound. Why? Naruto asked inquisitively, raising his eyebrows at the Bijuu's purported deed of kindness. A tiny snarl escaped its lips as Kyuubi responded, "It's simple, you blonde imbecile. If you can communicate with your teachers mentally, then I don't have to see your face every time you want to talk to them. This is most advantageous to us in the long run." Despite Kyuubi-san's motives for creating our metal link, Haribel said coolly, her voice echoing in Naruto's ears as he thought about what she had said. After some introspection, Naruto said, "I'll admit this development unnerves me a bit, but this is too beneficial to be ignored out of some paranoia. Thank you, Kyuubi." The grumpy and impoverished Bijou gave him a small humph in return. Grimjow angrily interrupted his fellow Espada, saying, "Enough freaking talking already, it's time to get to work. I want to do 100 push-ups, 200 squats, and 100 sit-ups to start off with." With a tone of annoyance and mild disgust, as though agreeing with Grimjow made her physically ill, Haribel admitted, "As much as I loathe to agree with him on anything, it's best for the moment that you begin your training regimen to see the limits of your new body." "This is going to be a long night," Naruto muttered to himself as he repeatedly pushed himself off the floor, occasionally complaining about blue-haired assholes, much to Grimjow's ire and the others' amusement. Naruto grudgingly dropped down onto the floor, wearing a small frown, and started his on-the spot workout regimen. Final flashback. Iruka's classroom at Konoha Academy. "These past few days have been really screwed up, haven't they?" Naruto asked rhetorically in his head, letting out a tired sigh. After a brief period of quiet relaxation and adjusting himself more comfortably in his wooden seat, Naruto opened his eyes to find himself in the same, boring classroom once more. Fortunately, the sound of several footsteps reverberating off the smooth, wooden hallway floor interrupted Naruto's descent into boredom as he turned to face the classroom door, anticipating the inevitable arrival of the source of the enigmatic footsteps. Naruto didn't have to wait long because the footsteps that had been resonating from the opposite end of the academy were suddenly outside the door. Naruto only needed to pull the classroom door aside to get a clear view of where the footsteps were coming from. A young boy, about 12 or 13 years old, stood firmly outside in the hallway. He was about 5 feet 1 inch taller than most of Naruto's classmates, with the exception of Naruto. His eyes gleamed in the sunlight, but they were hidden from view by his dark, round sunglasses. His blue-clad Hatai.8 was the only thing holding back his tall, bushy brown hair, which had a somewhat afro-like appearance. He was dressed in a long, sleeved, green jacket with 2 large front pockets and a high, upturned collar that partially covered his face. In addition, he had some bandages wrapped around his right thigh, a shuriken holster, and dark brown pants that ended a few inches above his ankles. Finally, he was wearing the typical blue shinobi sandals. Aburame Shino was the person in front of Naruto. After a moment of staring at the white-clad hybrid with one eyebrow raised in perplexity, Shino asked inquisitively, "Do you remember me, Naruto?" Strange, according to my Kakaichu, Naruto's chakra tastes like a massive concoction of at least 6 distinct chakra signatures. This will need more observation. Shino examined the information that his Kakaichu had surreptitiously given him about his now white-clad classmate in his mind. After giving it some serious thought and searching every corner of his memory for the identity of the bespectacled boy in front of him, Naruto said, "Shina, right?" Shino's sunglasses covered his eyes, making it difficult to see the two genins' intense stare. Shino looked down at the young hybrid, breaking eye contact after what seemed like hours of awkward silence. He turned his back on Naruto and hurried to the closest corner. Is he pouting? As he watched the dejected Aburame air gaze blankly at the wall in front of him, Naruto pondered, a big drop of sweat forming on the back of his head. In an attempt to get the pouting Aburame to leave the isolated spot where he had set up shop, Naruto sincerely praised him, saying, "You know, I'm actually impressed you managed to recognize me almost instantly. A good portion of the imbeciles of the village didn't recognize me at all." When the sullen Aburame heir did not immediately respond, Naruto reasoned that it was worth a try. "It was easy to figure out who you are, Naruto. How? You are the only person I know of in this village with blonde hair and whisker marks. At first I thought you were an imposter, but a quick check of your massive chakra reserves, as well as your chakra signature, confirmed your identity to me," Shino said in his monotone voice as he slowly turned to face Naruto and made his way to a nearby desk in the back. Naruto turned his head slightly to face Shino, who was seated behind the white-clad Arrancar, and said, amusingly, "Hey, I suppose it's really not that hard to recognize me when you put it like that now." With a simple nod of his head, Shino answered, "Indeed." Then, the somewhat empty classroom fell silent once more. Shino asked with a hint of curiosity breaking through his normally dry monotone, "I must ask Naruto, why do you look so radically different from when I last saw you more than a week ago? I know you're not under some sort of henge transformation. Why? Because that wouldn't explain why your chakra feels slightly different from the last time I had my Kakaichu sample it." With a slight frown on his face, Naruto summarized the lies and revelations that had been uncovered during the week. "Let's just say due to unforeseen circumstances that happened about a week ago, my body underwent a complete reconstruction and as a result I look like this as well as having a plethora of new tricks up my sleeve." "Calm down, Naruto," he told himself, feeling the anger that had been building inside of him gradually dissipate with each soothing breath. Strange, Naruto gets extremely irritated whenever the events of last week are mentioned. Shino, who was watching the white-clad Arrancar with an analytical gaze, was aware of this fact. What might have occurred? Confused, Shino thought to himself as he made unconscious adjustments to his sunglasses. Seeking to learn as much as he could from his now drastically different classmate, Shino asked, "So you awakened some form of Kekkei Genkai last week?" With a slight frown on his face and his eyes squeezed shut, Naruto said, "Call it what you want. The fact of the matter is that I've changed for the better." He then opened his eyes again. With some annoyance, Naruto thought, "I really need to come up with a concise cover story about what happened." His mind was already working to construct a rational cover story about his new appearance. Why not claim that one of these Kekkei Genkai was responsible for your metamorphosis? With his icy monotone echoing in Naruto's ears, Ulquiorra whispered something in the back of his mind. "I could work, but it just seems like I'd be too lazy." Naruto reluctantly responded to the pale Espada, "But until I can come up with a better story, it will have to do." He seemed upset with himself for not being able to think of a better explanation at that particular moment. With a hint of warmth in his normally abrasive tone, Shino said out loud, "Greetings, Hinata." Naruto snapped out of his reverie and turned to face the door and, indirectly, the newcomer. A young, pale, skinned girl of about 12 or 13 years old, standing 4 feet 10 inches tall, with dark purple hair styled in a Heim cut that ended just above her forehead and 2 strands of her hair ending just below her chin, was wearing a bulky, long-sleeved, fur-lined cream jacket with a light red fire emblem on the upper left and right sleeves. She was wearing a pair of regular blue shinobi sandals and a blue-clothed Hatai.8 around her neck, but what really caught Naruto's attention was her large, lavender-tinged, white eyes that lacked pupils, which he immediately recognized as being a Byakugan, all-seeing eye. NN Naruto. K. Kun. So D. Different, so sex. X. Y. Hinata mentally stammered out as she stared in awe at her crush's new appearance, her heart pounding 100 miles per hour and her face glowing like a tomato. For a moment, the sight of Naruto's new body caused her mind to shut down, and she had a lot of thoughts running through her head, some of which were very dirty, while she unintentionally dripped a tiny trickle of blood from her nose. Her mind then restarted, and she blinked a few times to get her bearings. Naruto. Kunji. Graduated, thank Kami. S. Sama. Hinata thought with immense relief and happiness. Her heart swelled with joy, as she saw the Hatai.8 around her beloved's forehead. Hinata. Shino said loudly, for him anyway, effectively breaking Hinata out of her lust-induced trance. Hinata needs to confess her affections to Naruto soon. The longer she waits, the less likely she'll get the outcome she desires. Shino thought with a sigh as he idly watched his blue-haired classmate climb the stairs towards the back of the class after releasing a loud, eep, astonished. Odd girl, though I can't claim to be the poster child for normalcy, Naruto thought to himself with some amusement before feeling his emotions swiftly swept away by an unstoppable wave of melancholy and indifference. To the astonishment of those around him, Naruto started to change in front of their eyes, his skin and hair gradually becoming paler and paler with each passing second, his normally spiky hair losing its luster until it finally hung down around his face. If the other residents of the room could see his face, they would be shocked to see that his once vibrant blue eyes had transformed into 2 icy glaciers that pierced the soul with a single glance. The people in the room were immediately alerted by the sound of the door opening, and they turned to face the door to see who would be joining them. A young, pale, skinned boy, about 13 years old, with spiky black hair tied in a pineapple-like ponytail, was the first person to stand in the door's archway. He was about 4 feet 11 inches. His face was a picture-perfect example of pure laziness, but he had narrow brown eyes and strangely small silver hoop earrings in each ear. His clothing, which was rather plain compared to everyone else's, reflected his general lazy attitude. Under a short-sleeved, green, Lined gray jacket with a blue negative symbol on each shoulder and a blue Hatai.8 tied around his left arm. He wore a green, lined mesh shirt. He had a shuriken pouch tied to his right leg with a few bandages, and he was wearing a pair of ordinary brown pants on his legs. At last, he had a pair of blue shinobi sandals on his feet. Nara Shikamaru, the heir to the Nara clan and class slacker, entered the classroom with a weary sigh and gave the other students a good look. Shikamaru's companion was a fair-skinned, portly 12-year-old boy who was one of the taller members of Naruto's graduating class. He had short, spiky brown hair that was partially covered by his Hatai.8, which resembled an upside-down diaper, revealing two tufts of hair on either side of his head. Like his compatriot, he wore a white shirt with the kanji for food on it, although the majority of the shirt was obscured by the green haori and the long white scarf he wore over it. He wore black shorts over his legs and wrapped bandages around his calves and forearms, which ended just above his typical blue shinobi sandals. Akamichi Choji, clan heir to the Akamichi clan, and ship enthusiast, entered the classroom with his best friend Shikamaru, happily munching on his barbecued potato chips. "Who is that guy? Hold on a second, there's no way it could be. Blonde hair, blue eyes, whisker marks. Naruto!" Shikamaru exclaimed in his mind, blinking several times to make sure his eyes weren't deceiving him. Shikamaru asked reluctantly, his mind racing to come up with a logical solution to this complex dilemma as he peered suspiciously at the white-clad Arrancar. Choji was so shocked by Naruto's new appearance that he nearly dropped his bag of chips. Of course, no self-respecting Akamichi would dare drop their bag of chips, let alone any food, on the ground. Yes. An awkward silence fell over the classroom as the resident lazy genius and white-clad Arrancar engaged in a brief stare down that fortunately didn't last long. Naruto responded in an eerie monotone that sent chills up Shikamaru and Choji's spines as he eyed the two would-be shinobi with a cold, critical gaze. "You know what, it's too bothersome to think about, so I won't even bother asking what happened to you. However, I must ask, Naruto, what are you doing here? This is for people who graduated." Shikamaru sighed as he rubbed the bridge of his nose in an attempt to relieve the headache he was currently experiencing. Why can't life be simple and boring? Why does everything Naruto does have to be so damn troublesome? Shikamaru silently cursed whatever forces had combined to make this day go from being ordinary to just plain annoying. "Uruka. Sensei gave me a make-up exam, but I did graduate. Or did you not find sufficient evidence in the headband that was fastened to my forehead?" As he closed his eyes and reclined in his chair, Naruto gave a chilly response, giving himself a mental pat on the back for his spontaneous justification. Neliel said cheerfully, "Nice excuse, Naruto.kun." Her innate joy and excitement seemed to be reflected in every word she spoke. "Thank you, Neliel.san." Naruto calmly responded, his tone much warmer than usual, and a tiny smile appeared on his face. Naruto took a deep breath through his nose as the classroom fell silent, broken only by the sounds of Choji eating chips and the crackling of the bags of chips as Choji dug through them. Naruto sighed calmly, and time seemed to fly by to him. At one point, he had succumbed to the Sandman's touch and dozed off, but was woken by a chorus of loud cries of joy from howler monkeys. "Oh my!" As he awoke with a start, Naruto blurted out in shock, his hand immediately clutching the handle of his sword. His eyes, which had a murderous glint to them, searched the entire confined classroom for the cause of the disturbance. After a moment of searching, Naruto finally located the cause of the commotion that had roused him from his sound sleep. The source was a young, pale 13-year-old boy with deep onyx hair, with two strands of hair that roughly reached his chin, which was shaped, hilariously, like a duck's ass. He had dark black eyes that gleamed with his own arrogance, which along with the superior smirk on his face didn't give him much of a humble appearance. He wore a short-sleeved blue shirt with a high collar that covered a good portion of his neck and a bit of his chin. On his arms he wore long white arms warmers, which stretched from his mid-bicep all the way to his wrists, with a blue belt at the wrist end holding it on. On his legs he wore a pair of simple white shorts with a black kunai holster tied to his right thigh and held down with bandages. He also wore blue shin guards, with bandages wrapped around them, and, to top it all off, he wore standard blue shinobi sandals. Unseen to Naruto at that moment, on the young boy's back was a large white and red fan symbol, thus marking him as a member of the now almost extinct Uchiha clan. To Naruto's displeasure, standing in the archway of the door was none other than Uchiha Sasuke, resident, genius, and class asshole. Great, just great, Naruto thought irritably, his ears ringing painfully from the sheer pitch of Sasuke's fangirl's annoying screeching. With his eyes squeezed shut, Naruto pressed his fingers to massage his temples in a vain attempt to relieve the stinging pain in his head. Finally, Naruto thought as he let out a sigh of relief, the pain in his forehead finally fading into nothingness. His eyes opened when he sensed a presence next to him, his eyes moving subtly to see who was seated beside him. To his immediate dismay, Naruto mentally grunted, "Damn it." It turned out that Sasuke, of all people, had taken the seat next to him. TCH, does that loser really think that a new look will make him stronger than me? Sasuke thought arrogantly with a mental sneer, his ego dismissing Naruto faster than one of his fangirls' advances. At that moment, Uchiha was preoccupied with staring out the window with an intense gaze, his elbows resting on the desk in front of him with his fingers interlocked in front of his chest. After a few moments of staring out the window, dreaming of all the tree outside. The classroom shook with thunderous force, and the loose items and some students started to shake all over the place. The papers and pencils on Iruka's desk flew off and clattered to the floor, where they continued to bounce around. Many students screamed in shock, and some of them found it very difficult to stay seated in their chairs, trying desperately to stay on them when they were bouncing up and down like a pogo stick. What on earth is happening? Is an earthquake occurring? Oh Kami, I know we're being attacked, look, something is headed straight for us. When one of the students near the window screamed in fear, everyone scrambled to the windows and peered out. To many students, it seemed as though two figures were flying toward the academy side by side, with massive dust clouds following them as they approached the dilapidated educational facility. In a matter of seconds, the two figures broke through the main door of the school, and the tremors inside the classroom doubled. There was a loud crash in the hallway outside, with muffled voices shouting at each other in the distance, barely understandable even to those with sophisticated senses. The rumbling grew closer and closer, and the class began to vibrate more intensely, resembling a herd of stampeding rhinos charging through the hallway. The rhinos then threw the door open, trying to push each other aside while yelling at each other, poor rhinos, I might add. Ha! I'm the Ino. Pig winner. The first rhino screamed out, revealing a 12-year-old girl who was about 4 feet 8 inches and somewhat pale. Strangely, her bright pink hair reached her waist. Her large green eyes, which gleamed in the light like emeralds, were rather striking. She had several white rings on her arms and back, and she was dressed in a bright red, short-sleeved keep-out dress with a zipper down the center. She also had a kunai holster fastened to her left thigh and a pair of dark green shorts that ended about mid-thigh. She also wore the typical blue shinobi sandals, just like everyone else in their graduating class. Unfortunately, the feature that most stood out was her unusually large forehead, which was made visible by the fact that she wore her blue Hatai.8 as a hairband. The resident bookworm, Sasuke fangirl, and former crush of Naruto, Haruno Sakura, was this howler monkey. The other, Rhino, screamed, "No way billboard. Brow, you totally cheated." She was a young, fair-skinned girl of 12 with platinum blonde hair styled in a long ponytail that ended close to the small of her back and big bangs that covered the right side of her face. Her big blue eyes gave her an innocent appearance, or at least they would have if she weren't wearing a sour frown right now. She was currently sporting a pair of tiny silver hoop earrings, which were hardly noticeable to those who weren't looking for them, just like Shikamaru and Choji. In contrast to her rival, she was dressed in a rather revealing outfit. She was dressed in a short, sleeveless purple blouse that resembled a vest and had a big collar that hung over her shoulders. She wore a pair of long white arm warmers, just like Sasuke, but she had purple straps holding the band on. She wore a purple apron-style skirt over her legs that was cut off at the sides, revealing her thighs and bandaged stomach. Surprisingly, she wore blue shinobi sandals in addition to her blue Hatai.8, which was wrapped around her waist like a belt. This was Sakura's rival for Sasuke's love, Yamanaka Ino, the local gossip queen. Did not Piggy? Sakura screamed, glaring fiercely at Ino as she approached her closely. With her head thrusting toward Sakura's, Ino screamed in retaliation. Did so forehead. Sparks flew from their eyes and clashed back and forth as their foreheads collided. They clenched their fists, waiting for the chance to demonstrate their place to the other, while a low growl rumbled in each of their throats. A loud voice from the next row over said angrily, "For the love of Kami, will you two shut up? You're hurting Akamaru's ears with your damn screeching." Naruto and the majority of the class turned to look at the source of the voice. He was a young, tan boy of about 12 years old, with short, spiky brown hair that was currently hidden and supported by his blue Hatai.8. Instead of having typical round pupils, he had narrow, sharp black eyes with thin vertical slits. Even with his mouth closed, it was easy to see his prominent canine teeth sticking out from his upper lip. He was dressed in a dark gray, long, sleeved coat with black fur around the hood and cuff links. In addition, he wore blue shinobi sandals on his feet and a pair of dark grayish pants that reached his mid-calf. In addition to his untamed look, he was unique in two very different ways that made him stand out from the crowd. The first is that he is a member of the Inuzuka clan, as evidenced by the two large, red fang tattoos that covered his cheeks. The other was the little brown and white puppy, which was whimpering on the desk right now while covering its long floppy ears with its front paws. These two were Inuzuka Kiba, the second heir to the Inuzuka clan and a local hothead, along with his Nikken partner Akamaru. "What did you say, dog?" "Breath," Ino and Sakura shouted together, putting their rivalry on hold for a moment as they unleashed their feminine fury on their untamed classmate. Following their vicious beating of Kiba and their apology by scratching Akamaru's stomach, Ino and Sakura shook hands and grinned broadly in satisfaction. Sakura grinned evilly in her head as she drew Ino closer and then pushed her back with such force that she flew back, running to take the seat next to her true love. The inner Sakura angrily screamed from her place in Sakura's subconscious, "Shaw, who did that piggy think she is, trying to sit next to our Sasuke?" "Kun." The real Sakura wholeheartedly agreed with her. "What the?" Sakura skidded to a complete stop in front of the desk where her Sasuke-kun was seated, thinking in bewilderment. A blonde, admittingly attractive jackass was currently occupying the seat next to Sasuke that should have been rightfully hers. Since the white-clad boy had not yet complied with her reasonable demand, Sakura yelled, "I don't know who you are, but you're sitting in my seat next to Sasuke-kun. So move." Forehead. Ino stomped to where Sakura was standing, her fists clenched until her soft, moisturized knuckles turned white, and yelled angrily. When Ino saw the gorgeous blonde hunk sitting next to Sasuke, she began to slowly drawl out, "How dare you do that to me? He's so hot, holy shish." As she blatantly ogled Naruto's abs with a line of drool hanging from her gaping, dopey smile, Ino thought dreamily, "Look at those abs, that face. Go Kami. I think need to switch over to this guy's team." Sakura repeatedly snapped her fingers in front of Ino's face in an attempt to rouse her from her reverie. "Ino, piggy wake up," she exclaimed. With a small, sardonic laugh, Naruto closed his eyes and shook his head in shock and disappointment. "Hey, and you're supposed to be the smart one of the class, simply pitiful." Sakura's trembling fist was clenched, threateningly, in front of her, ready to strike down the idiot who opposed her at any moment. "What did you say?" she screamed in a fit of rage. "Who in the world does this man believe he is?" Sakura thought indigently as her fists clenched tighter and tighter, wanting to slug this blonde asshole, as her anger increased with each second. Sakura felt uneasy under Naruto's piercing gaze. "I called you pitiful, Sakura, because that's what you are. You claim to be the smartest person in the class, and yet you couldn't recognize me when everyone else before you did in less than a minute. So I repeat. You are pitiful," Naruto responded harshly. "Do you recognize him? How in the world can I identify someone I've never met? Stupid blonde baka, hold on a second. No, it couldn't be him. There's no way in hell that this man is Naruto. Baka. My devoted little dog, Naruto. Baka, would never, ever speak to me in such a manner. But it must be him because of the blonde hair, the whisker lines, and the awful sense of style. Those bastards." Sakura's face twisted in contemplation as she transitioned from her initial denial to unrestrained rage. Sakura screamed in utter indignation, "Naruto, baka." A huge vein appeared on her enormous forehead as she threw back her fists, prepared to beat Naruto into the ground after reviving him. Sakura let out a cry of effort and hurled her fist forward, causing it to tear and fly like a bullet toward Naruto's head. However, Sakura's fist felt like it struck an implacable steel wall rather than the satisfying crunch of a person's skull beneath her fists. Sakura let out an agonized "Gah," as an unbelievably strong grip tightened around her hand. "Sakura!" Ino cried out in terror as her rival's cries of agony jolted her out of her lust-induced reverie. In a flash of inspiration, Ino pulled out one of her kunai and tried to stab Naruto right away, demanding angrily, "Let go of her now." Unfortunately, her plan did not work out as Naruto swung out with his other hand while still holding Sakura, grabbing Ino's kunai with his bare hand. Ignoring Ino's dumbfounded expression, Naruto twisted the little knife out of her hand and used a strategic throw to embed it in the ground below. "My name is Naruto. Not Naruto. Baka, Dobi, or loser. Just Naruto, and let me make one thing very clear, Haruno. I am not your, or anyone else's, punching anymore. The doormat that let you do that is dead and buried. If you try to attack me again, I won't just defend myself, I will fucking destroy you. Do I make myself clear? Naruto growled angrily, utterly disregarding Ino's yelling and attempts to attack him. He then applied more force to Sakura's entrapped fist, causing her to cry out in pain as she fell to one knee, frantically attempting to try and free her hand from Naruto's crushing grip. Damn it, Naruto thought pityingly as he watched Sakura's tears fall down her cheeks. He let out Sakura's hand with a frustrated sigh. Sakura immediately clutched her nearly broken hand to her chest, tears streaming from her eyes and threatening to burst from her throat. Her hatred at the time gave her eyes a fiery glint, and she was able to give Naruto a little glare. With Ino's help, Sakura was able to cross to a desk 3 rows away from Naruto and take a seat while holding onto her sore hand. Naruto-san, was that really necessary? Harabelle's question had a tone of irritation to it, and Naruto could almost see the glare she was giving him. Grimmjow grinned broadly and punched his palm as though to emphasize his point. Damn right, it was necessary. You've got to show that weak bitch who's in charge, Gaki. I'm not sorry for defending myself, even though I will acknowledge that I may have gone a bit too far. Ignoring the glares and whispers of his classmates around him, Naruto crossed his arms stubbornly in front of him and responded, besides, like Grimmjow said, this way everyone will know that I'm not to be fucked with anymore. His tone was firm and unapologetic. With an angry tone in her voice, Harabelle warned, we are going to finish this conversation later Naruto-san, one way or another. It was evident that he was not happy with his response, which gave Naruto a good deal of anxiety regarding the sexy blonde Espada. Fortunately, Naruto was distracted from his thoughts of the terrible things Harabelle would do to him later by the sound of the door opening. Good morning class and congratulations on graduating from this academy. From now on you will all be official shinobi in service not only to Hokage Sama but to Hai no Kuni in general. You will face numerous dangers and enemies as you carry out your missions with your comrades to the best of your abilities. It has been my honor to be your sensei for these last few years. Iruka greeted his now former students with a serious yet proud expression. Iruka grinned as he began to list off the teams, but Naruto ignored him for a moment as his mind attempted to figure out the hidden agenda behind the exchange program. Now, before I announce the teams that you will be assigned to for the rest of your genin careers, I must address a new policy made by Hokage Sama last night. He has issued an exchange program system between genin teams in order to help maximize your training progression and skills. What this means is that, with a written request signed by your new squad leader, you can be swapped out with another student to be trained by their sensei for any specific training you might need. At Sarutobi, what are you playing? What's your point of view? Why now, and how long have you been planning this? With a frown on his face, Naruto pondered, attempting to uncover Sarutobi's apparent good idea's hidden agenda. Naruto mentally filed away his thoughts for later as he returned his attention to what Iruka was saying. This is giving me a headache. Screw it, I'll just figure out later or something, he thought in frustration. Next up, Team 7 will comprise of Uzumaki Naruto, Aburame Shino, and Inuzuka Kiba. Your new sensei will be Hitaki Kakashi. Iruka looked pitifully at the 3 of his former students as he read off their sensei's name with a hint of hesitation and incredulity. With his head bent as though paying respect to the deceased, Iruka thought pitifully, you poor fools. Then he shook off his sympathy and went on reading the team assignments. At least he would have if it weren't for a certain Inuzuka. After moving Akamaru out of the way, Kiba yelled in frustration, damn it, my team is a sausage fest. Iruka. Sensei, please put me on another team. His head then snapped up as he begged his teacher. Damn it, why am I confined to a team consisting solely of men? This is so unfair. Why was Sasuke not a possibility? I hear he plays for the other team. He'd love this crap, Kiba thought desperately, already knowing Iruka's response to his request. He hung his head low, tears streaming down his cheeks, and Akamaru gently whimpered while rubbing against his hand. Iruka looked at his now very depressed student and said, with a hint of regret, sorry Kiba, these are the team assignments and I don't have the power or authority to alter them. If you want to trade teams you'll have to talk to both your sensei and Hokage Sama about it. He then went on with the team assignments. Iruka went on, disregarding Kiba's indignant exclamation of, oh come on, before shielding his ears as Sakura let out a glass shattering squeal of delight. Team 8 will comprise of Sakura Haruno, Hyuga Hinata, and Uchiha Sasuke. Your new sensei will be Yuhi Kurenai. Sakura's tone became so high that any glass around her began to shatter as she exclaimed joyfully, yes. Take that Ino. Pig, true love conquers all and I'm with Sasuke. Kun. I'm grateful, Kami. Sama. Yes, all we need to do now is get to know Sasuke-kun a little better, and he will ask to marry us and declare his love for us forever. Indeed, Hinata shouldn't be an issue because she is fortunately in love with Naruto. Baka. However, we still need to watch her closely in case she decides to approach our Sasuke-kun. Sakura and her other personality pondered this, their eyes constantly switching between glaring at Hinata with suspicion and staring affectionately as Sasuke. Iruka said, next up we have Team 10, who will be made up of Nara Shikamaru, Akamichi Choji, and Yamanaka Ino. Your new sensei will be Sarutobi Asuma. Alright, Team 11 is. Before Ino let out a loud, irate groan and pounded her head against the desk in front of her. Everyone in the room started to perspire at Ino's melodramatics as she whimpered, no fair. Why'd I have to get sucked with those two lazy bums? While Forehead gets to be on a team with Sasuke-kun. Tears were streaming down her face. Iruka said again, anyway, as I was saying, Team 11 will be, before Naruto shut him out. He closed his eyes and started talking to the white-clad tenants. So what are your thoughts regarding your new team Naruto-san? Haribel asked, raising an eyebrow in anticipation of her host's answer. I need to keep an eye on Shino because I don't know much about him, but he seems like a sensible person with a good head on his shoulders. Kiba, on the other hand, is loud, brash, and a little haughty, but like the rest of his clan, he is devoted to a fault, and from what I recall, he can hold his own fairly well. Hitaki is a completely different story. I had very little contact with him during my short time at Anbu, so his reputation will have to speak for itself in the interim. For the time being, I have to just watch them and see if they follow the same rules as the other ignorant sheep in this village, Naruto said in a monotone, his thoughts continuously going over what little he knew about his sensei and new teammates. With her typical detached demeanor and a slight nod, Haribel responded, very well Naruto-san, I'll trust your judgment in this matter. But remember, if you need any advice, we're here for you, with the exception of Grimmjow. She completely ignored Grimmjow's reprimand. Haribel's declaration of apparent trust in Naruto caused him to feel uneasy, so he mentally muttered, thank you. Naruto was able to catch the end of Iruka's speech after shaking off the unidentified feeling that had swept over him. With a solemn tone near the beginning and a warmer, more cheerful tone towards the end, Iruka said. And with that I welcome you to active service to Konoha. I warn you though, this lifestyle is not for the faint of heart. In this profession you will face death, despair, and the worst humanity has to offer. But if you stand strong with your comrades and believe in the will of fire, there is nothing that you cannot accomplish. It has been my honor to be your teacher these last few years, but you are no longer my students but my fellow shinobi. Iruka walked calmly to his desk after saying his piece and then took a well-deserved rest, with his back to the class. A sizable section of the class cheered at their former sensei's remarks after taking a moment to process the information that had been thrown at them. His words essentially erased the fear that had gripped them just moments earlier. Shortly after Iruka concluded his talk, students from all over the class started talking about their new teams, senseis, and upcoming adventures. The flood of fresh and promising senseis started to arrive just moments after Iruka concluded his impressive speech. Anxiety and excitement increased dramatically with each sensei that arrived and each trio of students that departed. The majority of the room turned to face the door and then flushed when a cool voice said, I am Yuhi Kurenai, I'm here to collect Team 8. Her deep red eyes captivated everyone who looked into them, and the additional ring inside made some students wonder if she had a keke genkai. She was a fairly sized, light-skinned woman, standing about 5 feet 5 inches, with one arm resting on her hip. Her wild, black hair, which hung near her shoulders, covered most of the Hades wrapped around her forehead. Those who weren't enthralled with her eyes were instead drawn to her unique attire, which was different from the typical Jonin uniform. She wore a red mesh armor blouse that, strangely, didn't have a left sleeve at all, and on top of that, she wore what looked like a mini dress made entirely of large bandages with a thorn pattern. Finally, she had clean white bandages wrapped around her left forearm and upper thighs, giving the impression that she was wearing short shorts. Finally, she wore standard blue shinobi sandals. Sasuke grunted out angrily, using all of his hard-earned resolve to keep from yelling at the shrieking harpies that were currently surrounding him and, worse, were his supposed teammates. At least the Hyuga is quiet. Sasuke thought bitterly, thanking whatever gods were listening for small miracles, because at least one of his teammates wasn't a loud, shrieking harpy. Sasuke grunted in frustration and roughly shoved his hands in his pockets as he reluctantly got up from his seat and walked towards his would-be sensei. Hold on, Sasuke-kun. Damn it all, why did our sensei have to be sexier than me? Shaw, We have to really keep an eye on her. I mean, look at those tits, they're unreal. If this bitch ends up being some kind of cougar, we're screwed, Sakura yelled, making the people around her clutch their now aching ears as she jogged a little to meet up with her true love. Sakura and her other self thought in complete despair as they surveyed every curve of their sensei's body in jealousy. Instinctively, she cupped her breasts for a split second before hurling them down in humiliation and rage. Hinata thought, didn't get to be on the same team as Naruto. Her eyes drifted over to her, now, white-clad crush, with longing, before closing them and letting out a sigh. Although she didn't particularly want to, Hinata reluctantly got up from her seat and headed towards her new team, giving her crush one last look before leaving the room. The name's Sarutobi Asuma. Team 10, you're with me.
So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more awesome stories like this. Thank you. See you all in my next video.